Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Web Audio TV. If you enjoy my content, make sure to subscribe to my channel and hit the like button.
Chapter 451, Technology Upgraded Again. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation. There were about 500,000 lords participating in this battle. The battle for plane dominance would only end with the retreat or defeat of the orcs. Even with the intervention of legendary heroes, they couldn't stop the situation from spiraling out of control. The lords won the war against the native forces unexpectedly. They realized that they possessed the ability to influence the situation on the battlefield. The lords were overjoyed. The forum was filled with discussions about the battle. As the exploration of the plains went on, many lords gained tremendous benefits from the encounter. Among the extensive exploration by player lords, the prominently highlighted Spire Tower also emerged. The astonished lords discovered a Spire Tower that possessed insanely strong magic. The Spire Towers were mysterious and unpredictable. The residual power of ancient gods reappeared in various planes. During the exploration, many lucky lords obtained the scattered power of ancient gods in the planes they went to. They were astonished to find that the power of the ancient gods had the ability to strengthen the capabilities of their troops. Some even underwent a change of profession to opt for rare and ancient titles with the power of the ancient gods. The lords continued exploring new planes. As a result, conflicts arose daily. Yuan witnessed the lords' war against the orcs. She also watched as they were victorious. Amidst her excitement, she also felt the stress of it all. With over 500,000 lords participating in the large-scale battle, Yuan became uneasy. Isler territory was supposed to be the strongest among all. What if the lords encountered something in these plains that allowed them to surpass the level of her territory? Could her territory still withstand the pressure from them? She took a deep breath to calm herself. She wasn't interested in passing missions or joining other lords. Yuan wanted to make sure that her territory had the absolute power of crushing its enemies. However, her current territory still needed to continue to develop. Outside the city, the cracks in the temporarily sealed space by the dwarf god were expanding every day. She needed to become stronger as soon as possible. Several days had passed since the battle of the lords and Farila's control over the Duke of Lion. The lords continued on with their exploration. They suffered great losses but also gained a lot in the newly formed plains. The lords became more and more eager to conquer plains. Their conquest of the Tisseria plain didn't cease. With Farila in the lead with power over the Duke of Lion, she amassed an army of over 5,000 troops. The downfall of the Duke of Lion was not concealed. Instead, it was widely publicized. This caused a huge uproar. Many forces began to stir, and even nobles sent secret letters expressing their support and loyalty to the two princesses. It hadn't been that long since the fall of the Tisseria royal family. While there were many power-hungry individuals, the supporters weren't dead yet. The rebellion of the Duke of Blood had displeased many people. The two princesses couldn't keep it a secret any longer and raised the banner of the Tisseria royal family, requesting all the supporters to rebel and resist the tyranny of the Duke of Blood. It was getting chaotic in the Tisseria plain. Amidst fluctuating sentiments, the Duke of Blood mobilized his troops and surrounded the territory of the Duke of Lion. The betrayers of the Tisseria kingdom intended to annihilate the last resistance of the royal family and take over completely. The situation had reached such an uncontrollable state precisely because of the traitor. The current ruler of the Tisseria kingdom wanted to eliminate the last hope of the royal family in front of everyone's eyes. He wanted to establish his own authority through bloodshed. If he achieved victory, the entire Tisseria kingdom would be completely under his control. The plain was in turmoil. A war was brewing. It would decide the fate of the entire plain. Yuan planned to go to the Tisseria plain to oversee the situation. After continuous research at the blacksmith shop, the attack technology had been upgraded to a special level. To expedite technological development, Yuan ordered Eliza, the head of the blacksmith association in the underground world, to search for exceptional blacksmiths and bring them back to the territory. Eliza did as she was told and led many talented blacksmiths to the territory. She tasked them with assisting Sam, the one-armed blacksmith, in his research. With their joint efforts, the attack technology finally made a breakthrough. The features that came with the special level technology gave the territory an advantage over all others. The powerful single-target attack skill could execute units at lower levels in one go. If used to gang up on enemies, it would immediately unleash tremendous destructive power without having to worry about defense. The development of the territory consumed enormous resources at every level. However, the resources were well spent. Advancing technology was a matter that required time and energy. However, the situation had become too strained, and every effort was needed to accelerate progress in the field. The enemies of the territory would not leave them with much time. Summon Eliza and Sam to the Dark Castle. Soon, footsteps sounded outside the door, and Eliza and Sam walked in. They bowed to Yuan. Yuan couldn't help but admire Eliza. She was attractive, and many people thought that was all she was good at. Eliza was a beauty with brains. Her intellect was useful in scientific research. Sam, has there been any progress in your research? Yes, said Sam excitedly. It's all thanks to the blacksmiths Eliza brought from the underground world. They carried out additional reinforcement, which involves specific processes of smelting rare resources. Yuan realized that cooperative efforts really did wonders to accelerate research in the territory. Eliza, please continue to search for more talented blacksmiths and recruit them to the territory. We need to continue enhancing the attack technology, said Yuan. N/O/vel/b//in.c//om. The current situation was unstable, and they needed a stronger army to protect the territory. Chapter 452, Immense Wealth. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation. Although expenses in various sectors were increasing, the speed at which the territory earned resources was outstanding. Supporting the research expenses of several sectors was not a problem for Yuan. The Blacksmiths Association was running smoothly, and it attracted many talented people who came to learn. The function of the Blacksmith Association in the Dark Region City was to promote forging techniques in the underground world, thus providing greater benefits for the territory. Under Eliza's leadership, blacksmiths from various races gathered there to share their secrets and techniques. Mutual learning greatly accelerated the progress of these blacksmiths in the smithy. It was a necessary step to recruit talented individuals. As for whether these talents would agree to come to Yuan's territory, it was mandatory. Nobody dared refuse Eliza's command. The units in the territory were gradually equipped with better weapons. The smithy played a major role in research. When a few people were discussing the next research phase, there was a commotion outside. Didn't they receive the news that it would take at least half a month for the troops to enter the actual combat phase, thought Yuan. A figure appeared at the door of the dark castle, wrapped in blood-stained bandages and holding a dark magic sphere. He was an A-class hero, the blood necromancer, Andy. As he entered the room, Yuan sensed that the hero was different from before. The blood-stained bandages wrapped around Andy's withered body seemed to have come alive. They constantly flowed around even in the absence of any wind and emitted a terrifying aura. Yuan was curious, so she checked his attribute panel. Andy, A-class hero, level 68. When he had gone to the Tisseria plane, he was only at level 64. In 15 days, he had advanced to level 68. Yuan was surprised. Andy, what did you encounter in the Tisseria plane? How did you level up so fast? We discovered the Duke of Lion's treasure trove, said Andy as he bowed respectfully in front of Yuan. The Duke seemed to have used evil sacrificial methods to create a blood pool. The energy was accumulated for over 10 years. Coincidentally, Andy was also a creature of the blood. The power of blood energy was highly compatible with his abilities. He had benefited greatly and advanced fast. A level 68 hero was valuable. If used properly, the hero could turn the tide of a battle. Andy had a large-scale strategic spell like Corpse Explosion. N/O/vel/b//jn.c//om. Gray had been promoted from the Cursed Pharaoh to an A-class hero, while Andy had been promoted directly to such a level. Although these two heroes were no longer considered top tier in the territory, they were still significantly strong. Now, Andy had the potential to catch up to the other main heroes of the territory. This pleased Yuan. Didn't the army already search the Duke of Lion's territory thoroughly? How did they only find the treasure trove only now? Asked Yuan. The progress of the exploration of the Tisseria plain was reported on time every day. If there were any important matters, it would have been updated after a few hours. However, Yuan hadn't received any news about a new treasure trove being discovered. Yuan was a little displeased. The ordinary resources and rare resources obtained from the Duke of Lion's territory barely amounted to 500,000 units. The number of resources seemed like a lot, but considering that this was from a duke's territory, who ruled over thousands of residents, it wasn't really that big of a deal. The army did not even transport such a pitiful amount back to the territory. Instead, it was handed over to the two princesses as a token of goodwill. Thus, Yuan had yet to harvest many resources from the Tisseria plain. We caught the eldest son of the Duke of Lion only a few hours ago. He had secretly infiltrated the territory to investigate the rebellion, said Andy. The eldest son of the Duke couldn't withstand the torture and revealed information about the treasure trove hidden in the Duke of Lion's territory. We also found a huge number of rare resources there. The Duke of Lion had hidden all his savings in that vault. After some discussion, they decided to first transport the resources back from the Tisseria plain. How many resources have we obtained this time? Asked Yuan. Rare resources are estimated to exceed 600 tons. In addition, there are 3 rare special building blueprints, said Andy eagerly. They had even found a nest of soldiers inside. This was how a plane was explored. The benefits the other lords had obtained from their expeditions to other planes couldn't even compare to the benefits they obtained this time. With the number of resources this time, Yuan could upgrade all her troops. If a duke could have so many riches, how rich was the entire plain of Tisseria, thought Yuan. How rich is the legendary Archduke Blood Fury? Yuan didn't want to let go of such an opportunity without exploring the whole of Tisseria plain. When we captured the eldest son of the Duke of Lion, we found some traces of a lord beside him, said Andy. It seems there are quite a few lords who are actively monitoring the plain. They seem to have accepted the mission to attack the Tisserian royal family. There are other lords spying on the Tisseria plain. Yuan was a little surprised. The Tisseria plain was already considered Yuan's domain. Do the lords want to challenge me? The underground world was largely regarded as a mysterious treasure trove of materials by the surface dwellers. Gold, dungeons, and ores were abundant in the underground world. However, the underground was also associated with dangerous creatures like snakes and spiders. That was what the surface dwellers imagined when they thought of the underground world. The residents of the underground world had equally exaggerated fantasies about the surface. Their fantasy had turned into reality a few months ago when a powerful lord had invited them up to her territory on the surface. That lord had ended the conflict between the Grey Dwarfs and the Dark Region City, too. The Dark Demon Dragon from the surface became the true ruler of the underground world. As Dark Region City began to conquer the entire underground world and take control of the land, everyone felt sincere respect for the human lord from the surface. For many residing underground, the lord and the Dark Demon Dragon were equivalent to gods. After the Dark Region City unified the underground world, they ordered everyone not to fight amongst each other. This land that had been at war since its conception welcomed unprecedented peace. The weak tribes were not harassed and oppressed by the powerful tribes. They didn't have to constantly worry about survival. Now, all tribes could produce weapons and sell it to the Dark Region City in exchange for food. It helped everyone. For the first time, many starving races experienced the feeling of being fully fed. They didn't have to send their elders to the wilderness to die when the food was scarce. Chapter 453, The Change in the Black Feather Tribe. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation. The people of the Black Feather Tribe living in the Scarred Hills were no exception. They were also filled with respect for the Lord who came from the surface. The Scarred Hills were full of cracked hills and mountains. The earth here had split. With a complex and interwoven topography, the numerous crevices provided perfect places to hide. Furthermore, the land consisted entirely of rocks and hardened clay soil. Apart from a few patches of moss in dark corners, it did not produce any food. The place was practically uninhabitable for powerful races. This allowed the weak Black Feather tribe to survive. The bodies of the people were covered in black feathers, and they resembled humanoid creatures. The most powerful leader of the tribe was only a level 57 hero, with the potential that barely reached C class. Once they left the Scarred Hills, any dominant race could easily subdue them. If it weren't for their high fertility rate and keen perception, they would have been annihilated long ago. The surviving Black Feather tribe didn't fare well. Even though the Lord from the surface had implemented numerous favorable policies, it didn't have much impact on them. The Black Feather tribe was not adept at forging weapons, so while other tribes lived in abundance and stability, their food remained scarce. Every month, elderly members would voluntarily venture into the wilderness to hunt. Stark, as a member of the Black Feather tribe and a Black Feather swordsman, had been away from the tribe for half a month. Due to the severe shortage of food, he had taken the risk of entering the wasteland to find sustenance. Unexpectedly, he encountered a large army from the Dark Region City on the way and was forced to hide. When it was safe for him to come out of hiding, he headed home. Entering the familiar Scarred Hills, Stark felt excited. It was not only because he had returned alive, but also because, in his attempt to avoid danger, he unintentionally stumbled upon a mist-covered swamp. In that swamp, he discovered a vast expanse of land covered with edible mushrooms and fungi. It was enough to sustain the entire tribe for 3 months. This was a cause for celebration. He felt like a hero as he returned home. Once the tribe learned of this news, they would undoubtedly award him an iron medal. His footsteps quickened. With agile movements, he swiftly traversed the cracked earth. As he stepped into the territory of the Black Feather tribe, a crisp sound suddenly echoed in his ears. The sound of metal colliding reverberated throughout the entire Scarred Hills. Standing on the highest point of a hill, Stark saw many tribe members climbing out of the cracks in the rocks. They quickly headed in the direction of the commotion. Stark was puzzled. Is that the sound of the bell summoning everyone for a meeting? What could have happened? The excited faces of his fellow tribe members made him believe that nothing bad had actually happened. N/O/vel/b/jn.c//om. It seemed that the rarely heard sound of the bell didn't cause any panic. In a state of confusion, Stark immediately followed his fellow tribesmen. Before long, Stark entered the hardened and cracked valley with the Black Feather people. He spotted several familiar figures. Stark, we thought something had happened to you? Why did it take you so long to come back? Several people turned their heads in surprise and gathered around Stark. I went outside to search for food and found a swamp in the fog, where I discovered enough mushrooms to feed us for 3 months. Stark's eyes were filled with pride. As he uttered these words, he prepared himself to be praised by his fellow tribe members. However, to his surprise, nobody seemed to care about it. What's going on? Stark, don't speak so loudly in the Holy Land, whispered a companion beside him. But I found food, Stark said in bewilderment. When did this place become a holy land? He thought. We understand. Let's prepare to welcome the arrival of the High Preacher, they said. What about the food one found? The High Preacher has already bestowed upon us an abundance of food, enough to fill 10 caves. We have no shortage of food anymore. Stark was shocked. Who is this High Preacher? And why would they bestow such precious food upon us without a price? The High Preacher is a divine saint of the Dark Ancient Tree sect and a faithful follower of the Great Sovereign. He is the one who brings hope and assists the Black Feather tribe. The more he listened, the more confused he became. You will find out when the High Preacher arrives, one of his companions said impatiently. He pulled Stark towards the center and urged him to be quiet. At the center of the valley, there was a tall suspension pole with hollow stones tied to it with hemp ropes and iron blocks. By gently pushing the iron blocks, they could strike and produce sound. A figure taller than the average Black Feather person was striking the stones. A crisp sound reverberated through the air. When the people had gathered in the valley, the towering figure stopped. Has the great high preacher arrived? Asked someone from the crowd. Is it today? Why haven't we seen the high preacher? I can't wait to listen to the doctrines of the dark ancient tree sect. The great saint has arrived. Kneel down and welcome the messenger of our God. The Black Feather tribe leader raised his hand and waited for the voices to quieten. Oh, great saint of the dark ancient tree sect, we respectfully welcome your arrival. As the words fell, all the Black Feather people knelt on the ground. They shouted with fiery passion and madness. In the midst of the fervent calls, the sky suddenly darkened. The undead dragon roared toward the sky. A terrifying dragon might surged forth like a tsunami. The Black Feather people immediately felt a pressure deep in their souls. It was an oppression that higher beings exerted upon lower life forms. They couldn't resist it. After circling in the sky, the gigantic dragon descended to the center. It stood in the valley like a towering stone monument. The colossal creature slowly lowered its body, and a tall figure stepped down from its back. The Black Feather people became excited. The high preacher had arrived. Stark, who was kneeling with the crowd, raised his head to look. He saw a terrifying being. The upper body resembled that of a human, wearing a black-brown priest's robe. He held a pitch-black book, emitting waves of magical fluctuations. The face resembled that of a dying person tormented by pain. It was grim and horrifying. The skin was covered with evil runes. It sent chills down his spine. The lower body made Stark feel suffocated. It had a body completely opposite to that of a human. It was spider-like. 8 limbs resembling blades pierced into the ground. They were covered in tiny furs. A sturdy exoskeleton enveloped the body. From the head to the back, 3 rows of uneven spikes protruded out. The crimson eyes increased the eerie, intimidating feeling tenfold. Chapter 454, A Mysterious Sect. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation. The aura of the dark creature permeated everything. However, what surprised people was that this extremely evil presence also gave them an inexplicable sense of holiness. It was sacred and inviolable. It was difficult for Stark to describe what he felt. That must be the high preacher. Which sect does he belong to? Can he really bring hope to the Black Feather tribe? Stark turned and whispered to his companion. He still had doubts in his heart. He had sacrificed so much for his tribe, yet he didn't receive the respect he deserved. An outsider was getting more respect than he ever could. The Dark Ancient Tree Sect has come to save the Black Feather tribe. They are the foundation of our strength. Stark, just wait and see how our God will unleash his power. Looking at the fervent gazes of his companions, Stark felt a bit lost. How did the tribe undergo such a transformation in just over a month? Does the Dark Ancient Tree Sect truly possess such great power? Are they really here to save them? But I have never heard of this sect, said Stark. People around him were enthusiastic. The god has just awakened. He will answer all your doubts soon. The horrifying creature with a spider-like body slowly took a few steps forward. The great god of the dark ancient tree has returned from eternity. His oppressive gaze swept across the crowd. He slowly raised the black book in his hand and chanted softly. All the Black Feather people kneeling on the ground followed the recitation. Their voices resonated powerfully in the dark valley. Stark felt an inexplicable sense of holiness. He held his breath and listened carefully. The high preacher's voice continued to chant the words. The master of the undead. The controller of the power of decay. An embodiment of darkness and my salvation. In the past and the present. The chanting became more intense. The Black Feather people in the valley followed suit. They sounded fanatical. The high preacher suddenly raised the black book in his hand, and a mighty energy surged forth and rapidly condensed in the sky. Oh, great God of the dark ancient tree, your devoted believers are willing to offer their faith and their souls. The high preacher's voice rose sharply. The moment the words were uttered, the energy surging from the dark book dispersed. It formed a shadow of a tree of over 50 m tall. The tree branches without leaves were grim like the arms of a dead person, and on the rough trunk grew twisted faces. It emanated an evil aura as if it had just crawled out of the abyss. If there were people from Suwon's territory here, they would immediately recognize the entity. It was the dark withered tree. After the shadow appeared, the black-feathered man immediately went crazy. With hands clasped together in front of his chest, Stark began to pray with the utmost devotion. Stark felt uneasy. The Black Feather tribe had never worshipped gods before. Although he felt awe towards those who possessed supreme power, such fervent devotion made him feel unnerved. At that moment, the illusory image in the sky with its twisted figure turned its gaze toward him. Stark froze. His thoughts stopped. He felt as though he had been plunged into icy water. He was unable to even breathe. A deep and heavy voice descended. Newborn soul, I bestow upon you my power. As the words fell, a surge of mighty energy erupted from the illusory image and infused Stark's body. Stark felt something dormant in his blood awakened at that time. Invisible shackles were broken. He felt excruciating pain as if his flesh and bones were being crushed. A growl escaped his throat. His whole body was filled with power. When he came back to his senses, Stark was amazed to find that he had advanced from level 55 to level 58. He was at a higher level than the leader of the tribe. He looked at the image in the sky with disbelief. For the Black Feather people, reaching this level was difficult even if they strived for it for a lifetime. Yet, he had received it as a gift. After being rewarded by the god, all doubts in Stark's mind disappeared. It was replaced by surprise and reverence. Without hesitation, Stark knelt on the ground in respect. Only the evil spreader could see a white line rising from his head and quietly merging with the illusory dark withered tree. N/O/vel/b/in.c//om. The figure slowly disappeared. The black feather people became even more excited as they turned to look at Stark, who had just been promoted. Praise the god of the dark ancient tree. Our god fell into a slumber after the first war among the gods. He has only awakened today after sensing the rise of the crimson moon, said the evil spreader, or the high preacher. The god is immortal and eternal. He is the sole benevolent ruler who can provide protection. The god is regaining his power and requires prayers. The entire valley resonated with solemn voices from all directions. The dark ancient tree god whispered. The black feather people stiffened when they saw this. The god was observing them. They recited prayers. The evil spreader mounted the dragon once again and left the valley. Not far from the valley, the evil spreader pulled on the reins and the dragon slowly came to a halt. Your abilities are truly extraordinary. This is the third tribe that has converted. Becoming a hero was the dream for most troops. Even the evil spreader was no exception. Master, the influence of the dark ancient god's religion is improving. We can attempt a large-scale propagation. A flicker of interest appeared in the crimson eyes. Fame's mood was also somewhat uplifted. As a recruited grey dwarf, his status in the territory was still important. After the problems in Furnace City were solved, Timo entrusted him with the task of managing the propagation of the cult in the underground world. He had personally witnessed how the dark ancient tree religion spread among these tribes. Although they had made many mistakes along the way, they were all resolved by the evil spreader before him. Using the melodious music box to set the atmosphere and continuously reinforce the followers' understanding of the doctrines is indeed a good method. Master James, I suggest establishing a preaching room specifically for housing the melodious music boxes. The middle-aged woman with 2 scars on her face approached him. James instinctively looked towards the valley where the black feather people were. Their fervent prayers could still be heard. We can also use the melodious music boxes to spread the stories of the dark ancient tree sect. In the future, we can use the music boxes as a means for doing something more. Chapter 455, A Real God. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation. Being able to temporarily store the power of faith, continuously create miracles, and continue expanding would eventually lead to greater benefits for the territory. When he learned about the task, he felt a bit uneasy. Creating a sect in 2 months and making people believe in it without a doubt in their hearts had been quite a difficult task. However, with the evil spreader at their side, it was an easy success. Perhaps one day, the doctrines of the dark ancient tree sect would spread throughout the entire underground world, and everyone would become a follower of the sect. It's a pity. It would be great if it was a real section. James sighed. The people on the back of the flying dragon looked at him strangely. They were slaves bought from Kanglan City, specifically responsible for modifying and establishing doctrines. If it were a real sect, they would have no role to play. Who said the dark ancient tree sect is not real? The evil spreader looked at James. It's just a sect we created, James replied. It's not real. But just now, one felt the dark ancient tree god absorbing the power of faith, said the evil spreader fervently. The dark ancient tree sect is not imaginary. There is a real god behind it. Everyone was stunned to hear that. The changes in the underground world went unnoticed, as Yuan and Yuan had no time to focus on it. They were examining the benefits they had received from exploring other planes. Rare resources and some very useful blueprints were among the gains. Yuan was excited. The Tisseria plane was indeed a treasure trove. Do you have those special blueprints with you? Asked Yuan. Andy nodded and gently shook the dark magic sphere in his hand. Magical power emanated from it and condensed in the air. 3 blueprints floated in midair. Yuan reached for them eagerly. Tavern, special. The taste of fine wine stored in the cellar of the tavern can be improved by 30%. The higher the level of fine wine owned, the more likely it is to attract higher-level heroes. It is also possible to discover powerful heroes from within the tavern. A tavern that can attract heroes. That was news to Yuan. The ability to improve the taste of fine wine by 30% was indeed useful. They could sell the wine at a higher price. Yuan was in a good mood. The 3 blueprints were excellent and would fill the current gaps in her territory. These buildings wouldn't produce immediate results, but, in time, they would come in handy. Andy handed over the unit nests, which were also a decent source of income. They were perfect for upgrading the troops. You all did a great job this time. Return to the Tisseria plain and assist the 2 princesses. I will lead an army and join you there. If there are any changes in the situation, report to me immediately. As for the other lords, please continue gathering information about them. See if the princesses can pay them to join their side. The lords were greedy. If they were paid enough, they could be swayed to any side of the war. Andy nodded and bowed to her. After Andy left, Yuan walked out of the dark castle. She gathered all the rare resources stored in boxes. As time passed, more powerful enemies turned their attention to her territory. Enemies like the King of Decay were very dangerous. Even Yuan needed to be on guard against him. Yuan wanted to upgrade all troops as soon as possible. The most unexpected surprise was the sale of weapons in the Dark Region City. The Blacksmith Association was to be thanked for that development. More and more blacksmiths joined it to share their talent, and the sale of weapons increased drastically. Just from the weapons sales, the territory directly earned 400 tons of rare resources. This sparked heated discussions on the forum. Apart from that, Yuan was surprised that new planes kept appearing and the creatures living within them kept fighting with each other. The death swamp was filled with corpses every day. After a busy day, Yuan looked at her bulging purse with a smile. She felt a mix of emotions standing in the courtyard in front of the dark castle. The key to all her problems was to further enhance the development of the territory. That way, the territory would be safe from the grasp of other lords. In the capital of the Tisseria plain, lightning flickered through the gloomy sky. The air was suffocating to breathe. A towering figure, draped in a blood-red cloak, stood on the city walls. His hand rested on the hilt of the unsheathed sword at his waist. An aura of bloodlust pervaded him. His deep, icy blue eyes were scary. The blood-red crown he wore on his head made him seem noble. Nov. L.B//JNN. Behind him stood many heavily armored warriors. Their golden armor radiated an aura of superiority. In the sky, numerous flying units guarded the city walls. Any news from the remaining members of the Tisseria royal family? The man slowly turned around and stared at the commanding officer. Your Majesty, according to the reports from the lords, they have made contact with other planes. It must likely be the main plane. Most of the nobles who have not pledged allegiance to you have raised the flag of rebellion and are aligning themselves with the two princesses. The officer hesitated. The time is ripe. Shall we launch a full-scale attack and completely eradicate the royal family? Let's begin. It's about time these rebels were crushed. The man with the blood-red crown nodded. The lords also reported that the spire contains an extremely precious treasure, the officer added nervously. Chapter 456, Conquering the Tisseria Plain. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation. If the guards are too strong, we'll need to use all our strength. There will be heavy casualties. Only after quelling the rebellion can we move forward. This world can't stop us, said the man with the blood-red crown. The main plane is the birthplace of the gods. After retrieving the treasures from the obelisk, we will concentrate our forces to conquer the main plane. Why can't we ascend to the divine throne and achieve eternal immortality? The flapping wings swiftly passed overhead, stirring up airwaves that lifted the desert sand. Watching the troops advance through the spatial gate in an orderly manner, Yuan felt excited. Leona stood by Yuan's side and watched the troops advance. N/O/vel/B/jn.C//OM. Should we send the vampire army too? She asked. How long until the plane merges with the main plane? Yuan turned to Leona. I'm not sure. It seems to be blocked by something. Currently, all vampires were at level 67. Yuan hoped everything could go smoothly and they could advance further. The evil plane was about to merge with the vampire castle. It emitted energy constantly and refined the vampire bloodline. At this rate, it may not be long before they reached level 70. The vampire army will continue to stay inside and advance. If the situation on the battlefield changes, we will call them for support, said Yuan. If it weren't for the threat posed by Archduke Blood Fury, she wouldn't even send Leona there. But for now, the benefits of capturing the Tisseria plain definitely outweighed any other matter. Has Tristana made a move? Tristana, the eldest daughter of Grand Duke Frostwolf, had visited the vampire castle some time ago to find an ancient relic and search for the vampire's precious blood dominion staff. Lady Tristana seems to have something urgent. She left in a hurry. She asked me to tell you that she will bring a gift for you next time, said Leona. Tristana had a wealthy and influential family to rely on. Grand Duke Frostwolf was a legendary figure. She also felt a bit emotional. She really wanted to visit the Ice Empire, but she couldn't. Prepare yourself. There will be a great battle in the Tisseria plain, Yuan said to the dark withered tree. As you wish, the dark withered tree said. Yuan didn't hesitate and flew into the spatial gate. Leona spread her wings and followed behind. The moment they passed through the spatial gate, Yuan felt a coolness envelop her body. There was even a slight chill. This time, Yuan didn't follow her, so Yuan was being very cautious. Lush green trees were covered with a slight frost. The troops were already on guard in the sky. Yuan gazed into the distance. She saw an unfamiliar army appear on the frozen ground. Flags embroidered with falcons fluttered as the knights in full armor swiftly approached them. The leading knight waved her hand, and the cavalry behind her suddenly pulled their reins, bringing the horses to a halt. The knight straightened and approached the red-eyed black dragon. Respected Lord Yuan, I greet you humbly. I have prepared a sumptuous banquet to welcome your arrival. The knight took a deep breath and removed her helmet. Her long hair fluttered in the wind. Angel, no need for excessive courtesy. How is the situation here now? Yuan said to the crown princess of Tisseria. The traitors are mobilizing all the armies loyal to them and encircling the Lion City, said Angel in fear. The first batch of enemy troops will arrive within 3 days at most. There is not much time left. Archduke Blood Fury has absolute control over the army against the royal family. If it weren't for Yuan, Angel would have given up already. Let's go back first, said Yuan. Angel immediately urged her warhorse to lead the way ahead. The army gathered around her to protect her. Due to the interference of magic in Lion City, the Void Sandworm could not open a space gate directly there. It was a necessary defensive measure. Otherwise, spellcasters could take advantage of the space gate and invade the city. The city walls would be nothing but mere decorations. Strong cities need defense against ale magic. They passed through the sparse forest to a distant land. A majestic city towered over them like a beast. There were all kinds of heavy defense weapons, catapults, and giant crossbows lining the city walls. Soldiers in heavy armor patrolled the city. If they encountered an enemy, they would unleash their most ferocious attacks at a moment's notice. This was Lion City. All the higher officials were waiting anxiously for reinforcements. They knew that their princess had found reinforcements from other planes. They stared at the centaur that stood in front of them. She was a powerful hero. She had single-handedly slaughtered her way through the immense army and killed the Duke of Lion. The centaur was the strongest backer that the two princesses had right now. There were more reinforcements to come. Chapter 457, Who is the Mysterious Big Shot? Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation. I wonder how many troops Farilla has summoned this time. With Farilla on our side, the Archduke Blood Fury doesn't stand a chance. n/o/vel/b/in.c//om. The princess didn't reveal much information to them. She had only mentioned that reinforcements would be arriving soon. What do you think? Will there be any legendary heroes among the troops? The leader, a warrior in his 30s, asked. This small group shook their heads unanimously. They assumed that possibility was slim. How could they have legendary heroes helping them? The centaur was already strong enough. It was highly unlikely that there would be more heroes like her. No matter how strong the reinforcements are, let me give you a few words of advice. Our mission is extremely difficult, so we must be cautious in our actions. If the situation becomes worse, the priority should be to preserve our strength. There are many lords who still side with the Archduke Blood Fury. The guild leader is right. The Blazing Flame Guild has always been overbearing. We'd better be careful, said a female lord. That's true, but we don't have to be overly cautious. Fortune favors the bold, and we have our own advantages. We're stronger than the Blazing Flame Guild. Guild leader, what advantages do we have? It's easier for us to establish relationships with high-ranking figures, especially with those like the legendary centaur. The leading warrior spoke with confidence. Normally, they wouldn't have had the opportunity to meet such high-level heroes. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The Blazing Flame Guild was powerful, but Archduke Blood Fury ruled the kingdom. The centaur was so powerful that they believed she had a significant influence on the other plane. It was of utmost importance to establish a good relationship with her. If the centaur liked them, they would benefit greatly from even the tiniest support. Guild leader, the biggest problem now is that we can't get close to them. How do we solve this? Since they have received a mission from Princess Angel, they cannot avoid us forever. One have already figured out a way to get close to them. How? It's confidential for now. I'll explain it to you when reinforcements arrive. These words stirred up curiosity in everybody. The tides were turning, and this time, it might be their chance to rise to the top. If they could earn the centaur's favor, it would mean massive success. They heard the horses approaching. Hundreds of troops entered the square, led by someone beautiful. The light gradually dimmed. A terrifying army traversed the sky. Everyone was on their guard. They stared at the reinforcement that had just arrived. In shrouded darkness, the terrifying dragon approached them. There was no need to check their attribute panels. Everyone could sense how strong the troops were. As they instinctively covered their eyes, the flying troops in the sky descended. Many soldiers dismounted from their backs. These soldiers held their spears up. The aura of the undead enveloped everything in sight. The red-eyed black dragon flew down from the sky and landed in the square. Even the sight of such a ferocious dragon stopped everyone in their tracks and made it difficult to breathe. Everyone looked at the figure who got down from the dragon's back. Everybody knew that this was the lord who commanded the terrifying troops. The lords crowded in excitement. No one had even imagined that a centaur could summon such a powerful army. How is this possible? That's a lord. This made everyone curious. They tried to open the attribute panels to get some information, but they could find nothing on it, except the lord's name. When the lords realized who the person was, they felt envious. Not all lords could command such a huge army. Some lords had to give up their territories because they couldn't sustain them. Princess Angel approached the crowd. The crown princess bowed to the centaur. Farilla walked up to the lord who had just arrived. "Welcome, my lord." "Welcome, Lord Yuan," said Princess Angel as she bowed respectfully. Everyone was shocked. How could their princess bow to a lord? Shouldn't it be the other way around? "It is nice to meet you, Lord Yuan," said the guild leader. He was the first to come to his senses. "Welcome to Lion City." Others followed suit. They clasped their fists to their chest and greeted Yuan. Yuan didn't say much but waved at them. After exchanging a few quiet words, Yuan turned around and walked toward the grand hall in front of the square. "After the banquet, you can come and find me," she said to the lords as she passed by them. Chapter 458, The Eve of the War. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation. "Lord Yuan, do you know those lords?" asked Angel. Yuan shook her head. "Then why are they so excited to see you?" Angel was puzzled. "It's because of Farilla. I heard that lords can communicate with each other from thousands of miles away in the mysterious domain built by the gods." "Is this true?" asked Angel curiously. "Is she talking about the forum?" thought Yuan. "That's right." Yuan chuckled. "I heard that the mysterious domain allows free trade and can instantly teleport items 10,000 miles away. Moreover, everyone can have a new identity." The higher officials of Lion City who overheard Yuan and Angel talking decided to ask the other lords if this was true. "Don't be nervous. It's not that easy to get close to her n/o/vel/b/in.c//om. The lords were nervous. They hadn't expected to meet Yuan here. She is so powerful. Why don't we tell them the location of the obelisk? It's a heavily guarded place with legendary heroes. They have no chance at all. True, but we can exchange that information with Yuan for her support on this plane. She might reward us. We'll talk about it after we meet Yuan. Who is she? Asked a new lord who had recently joined them. Don't you know about Yuan? She is the top-ranking lord. They looked at each other in shock. Looking at the backs of the lords who were leaving, Yuan was amused. The guild with only 5,000 member lords seemed a little insignificant. Some guilds even had around 5,000 members. The lords were too disjointed. Moreover, teleportation magic was only available in a few major cities inhabited by the indigenous population, and its usage was expensive. Lords couldn't find reliable transportation to communicate with each other most of the time. Furthermore, a large portion of lords had joined the natives, making it extremely difficult to organize a sizable guild. After going through half a year of trials and tribulations, a guild that could gather thousands of lords was definitely a force to be reckoned with. As for the guilds with larger numbers, most of them were composed of lords who had lost their territories. While the numbers were big, they lacked strength. Lords with territories and lords who had lost their territories were no longer on the same level. The war between the lords and the natives had made their differences apparent. Yuan collected her thoughts and looked back at the map on the table. Her gaze focused on an inconspicuous area. The Spire of Fate, the mysterious structure that had been highlighted by the system's special prompt, increased her determination to occupy the Tissaria plain. If she helped the Tissarian princesses regain their kingdom, they could mobilize the army to attack the Spire of Fate. Before that, Yuan needed to do everything she could to win this war. At this moment, she held control of a legion, while the enemy's forces numbered over 40,000. If the Blazing Flame Guild was counted, their numbers would increase. It was extremely difficult even for legendary-level power to sway the course of the battlefield. Moreover, the opposing side would definitely have corresponding countermeasures, so it was unrealistic to rely on just a few heroes to win. The soldiers guarding the city suddenly noticed a huge rift opening up in the distance, tearing through the sky. To their astonishment, the rift cascaded down like a waterfall, crashing forcefully onto the ground and covering the frozen vegetation. In less than half an hour, it formed massive sand dunes that piled up dozens of meters high. After reaching the boundary, the rift suddenly started moving. They surged toward the Lion City like waves. Wherever they passed, vegetation was devoured. The defending army fell into chaos. They only quietened under the loud berating of their commanding officers. Wave after wave came rushing in, directly attacking the base of Lion City's walls. The gravel dispersed and surrounded the Lion City. As the rift in the sky gradually healed, the waterfall disappeared without a trace. There was an endless sandstorm outside the Lion City. Fortunately, this change didn't extend within 100 meters of the city walls, or else the high city walls would likely have turned into sludge. A deafening sound reverberated through the air. The soldiers on the city walls instinctively turned their heads, only to see a spatial gate open to the north of Lion City. A thick scent of blood emanated from it, almost choking them. Outsiders tried to get a clear view of what lay within the spatial rift, but the crimson mist blurred their vision. There were howls and screams rising from the mist. The place beyond the rift was unfathomable. Perhaps it was a path to the abyss? Yuan took over Lion City and gradually began arranging a new defense system. Just as she was preparing for battle with sharpened swords, her thoughts were suddenly interrupted by a notification. Saint of Light leads the army to capture the first Spire of Fate and receive all the benefits. Additionally, there is an extra reward for a rare artifact. To capture the exciting moments and during the exploration of the parallel dimensions, all lords can enter the live broadcast room to start a live stream. Someone wants to invade the Spire of Fate. Yuan frowned. The strange thing was that the system was offering additional rewards to players who captured the Spire of Fate. It was unexpected. As for the live stream, she didn't feel much about it. What she valued more was the Spire of Fate itself. Based on the system prompt, the Spire of Fate seemed to be more important than she had anticipated. In the capital of the Tissaria plain, a man in a crimson cloak sat on a throne adorned with gemstones. He was Archduke Bloodfury. Chapter 459, A Powerful Guild. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation. His right hand gripped a heavy longsword, and his left used a clean white cloth to wipe the sword clean. The blade of the sword was not very sharp, and it had nicks on it. It didn't seem like a unique sword, but it emitted a ferocious aura as though it had just absorbed a corpse. Archduke Bloodfury looked very serious. It was as though he was worshipping a sacred object and did not wish to be disturbed. Every time he wiped it, the longsword became a bit brighter, and the coldness within it deepened. In front of the throne, around 10 people filling the grand hall silently watched. There was only the faint sound of the cloth rubbing against the blade. After a moment, Archduke Bloodfury slowly raised the white cloth in his hand, and a maid at his side immediately stepped forward and received it with both hands. She bowed and retreated. Do you have any news from the spies in Lion City? Archduke Bloodfury raised his sword at eye level to examine it. The white blade reflected his face like a mirrored surface. The heroes below shook their heads. The Lion City has received support from someone from the main plane. It is a lord, said Archduke Bloodfury slowly. His sharp gaze swept across the crowd. A lord dared to oppose them. During this fight, they learned a lot about the lords of the Blazing Fire Guild. Your Majesty, the power of the lords is not worth worrying about. If you're concerned, please let me go and prove it to you, a white-haired hero said confidently. He sounded eager to prove himself. He wanted to single-handedly destroy the remaining Tessarian royal family. Archduke Bloodfury frowned slightly. What I'm worried about is not just a few lords. I wonder if they have a stronger force behind them. Nurenfrilvi in FSC Ternant Mrkbarak Horantener. Currently, Lion City's strongest force was the Centaur. Moreover, the Lord had somehow turned the area around the city into a swamp and stationed a formidable army to guard it. N/O/vel/b/in.c//om. An ordinary lord wouldn't have that kind of power. Your Majesty, why don't we directly ask the members of the Blazing Flame Guild? The white-haired hero said again. I have already summoned them, said Archduke Bloodfury. Your Majesty, the Blazing Flame Guild requests an audience, a soldier declared from the main door. Upon receiving the order, the soldier immediately turned and left. Your Majesty, we, the members of the Blazing Flame Guild, greet you humbly. More than 10 heroes stepped into the hall. You should be aware of the importance of this war for the Tessarian kingdom. I want to know how many troops the Blazing Flame Guild is prepared to send into battle. Archduke Bloodfury waved his hand and looked at them. At the forefront of the Blazing Flame Guild was a man in his 40s, wearing a fiery red robe. An aura of heat emanated from him. Your Majesty, although the Blazing Flame Guild cannot serve as the main force on the battlefield, we have prepared tens and thousands of troops. The mark of flames on his forehead seemed to come alive. It was the unique symbol of the Fire Priest, the priest of the God of Flames. The Blazing Flame Guild implemented a highly unified policy, where all member lords' armies could be mobilized if needed. By doing so, the Blazing Flame Guild could mobilize numerous armies even if they weren't strong themselves. United, they could fight anything. This was how the Blazing Flame Guild had risen to power so quickly. Archduke Bloodfury glanced at them. These weaklings didn't have anything to offer to him. There was no point in negotiating with them. Very well, have your troops gather in the capital. Once the army is assembled, I will open the space gate and directly transport the troops outside Lion City. Those rebels will taste despair. Your Majesty, that is a wise decision. The priest smiled. There is one more thing. Archduke Bloodfury raised his sword and carefully examined the nicks on it. Please go ahead. I have received information from the spy I planted in Lion City. They say that the Tessarian royal family has some connection with a lord from the main plane who is offering them significant support for this battle. He gently blew air on the surface of the blade. Everyone felt uneasy. I need to know what kind of force is behind that lord. Can you find out? Asked Archduke Bloodfury. If they are confident enough to oppose you, they must have someone powerful backing them up, the priest said solemnly. The Blazing Flame Guild held a certain level of influence among the member lords. If you can provide me with the name or any other identifying trait of this force, I can find out more. You're quite confident, said Archduke Bloodfury as he shifted his gaze to look at the priest. According to the information from the spy, the main force supporting the royal family dispatched a legendary-level centaur to support them. It seems it is not the centaur that commands the troops but the lord who has just arrived in Lion City. The spy reports that they saw the centaur bow to the lord. The members of the Blazing Flame Guild looked at the Archduke in disbelief. Is this a joke? How is that possible? Your Majesty, is this information true? The priest asked. He realized that he had questioned the Archduke. I mean, we absolutely trust your word but, it's so shocking. Lords barely cross the level 55 threshold. They don't usually get to command legendary heroes. In order to deliver this message, the spy sacrificed himself. Archduke Bloodfury looked at them indifferently. The spy had been the final scout deployed to Lion City. The spy wouldn't have given his life in vain. I know that a lord can't enslave a legendary hero. That's why one deduced that there must be a powerful force behind this particular lord. His voice turned icy. Only by joining a certain force can one command powerful subordinates when they themselves are weak. The royal family is a typical example of this. The legendary hero must be related to the lord somehow. Maybe that was why they were willing to bow to the lord. Chapter 460, Unexpectedly, the opponent is Yuan. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation. Now, all you need to do is inform me about the opponent's forces and how much power they are still hiding in the main plane. The members of the Blazing Flame Guild breathed a sigh of relief. Your Majesty, can you provide me with more detailed information about that lord? The name of their guild, or their own name, the middle-aged priest asked in a low voice. When the opponent arrived at Lion City, the remaining Tessarian royal family greeted them as Lord, said Archduke Bloodfury. That's all one know. After pondering for a while, the group exchanged glances with each other. They wondered if this person was an upstart. There are too many lords on the plane. It was common for someone to make it to the top whom they had never heard of before. It seemed like the matter would need more investigation. Your Majesty, we haven't heard of this person before, but please give us some time to investigate. Archduke Bloodfury nodded. As they were about to leave, he remembered something. Wait. It seems that the Tessarian royal family called the lord by the name Yuan. Yuan. The people who were just leaving turned around abruptly. They looked at the Archduke in disbelief. Your Majesty, are you sure? Yes. It is indeed Yuan. If the opponent is Yuan, then that legendary hero might really be her servant, said the priest. Most lords were quite interested in the system prompt about someone occupying the Spire of Fate. No one could contact the Saint of Light. No one even knew why the Saint of Light wanted from the Spire of Fate. The last time they were able to live stream was in the large-scale dungeon, the Death Arena. Everyone witnessed how Yuan was crowned, but they didn't expect the system to open up again this time. After testing, the lords obtained more information about the live streaming function, which could currently only be used when exploring other planes. It couldn't be used in the main plane. However, other functions were still operational, which caused some resentment among solo lords who couldn't explore other planes. Most people were still happy about it. Although forums allowed interaction, the way information was conveyed through text was completely different from visual broadcasts. The live streaming function was opened just recently, and millions of people had already started using it. However, due to the large number of live streams, the lords were divided. Not many live stream rooms attracted an audience. Guilds were quick to seize the opportunity and immediately embarked on large-scale actions to attract attention and increase their influence. It was a collective effort. It was much more interesting than doing it alone like solo lords. Guilds had more success in achieving an audience. In a short period of time, all the lords were invested in this new thing. In the blink of an eye, 2 days had passed. It was time for Archduke Bloodfury's army to advance. The sky was dark. The towering walls of Lion City were filled with troops. All of them were human soldiers. They wore heavy armor, carried standard long swords, and were determined. To capture the city, the enemies first had to cross over the bodies of these soldiers. In the arrow towers arranged behind the walls, countless arrows protruded from the shooting slits. A volley of arrows could be unleashed at command. Catapults loaded with massive cannons were positioned in the gaps between the arrow towers. The winches were already pulled taut. Once the latch was released, the cannons would soar and smash the enemy forces. The spellcasters began to cast enhancement on the defending soldiers on the walls to boost their strength or strengthen their defense. The entire city was ready. They were on guard because countless black dots lined the horizon. The army of Archduke Bloodfury had arrived. Yuan stood atop the most important section of the city wall, gazing into the distance. Princess Angel stood solemnly by her side. Farilla eagerly paced back and forth with her battle axe. The Dark Soul Devourer, Klitos, served as a backdrop. This top-tier hero, standing over 6 meters tall, was just one step away from turning into a legendary hero. This war was his chance to level up. He would undertake the main task of fighting the Archduke Bloodfury himself. As for the Vampire Duke, Leona, she was nowhere to be seen. This dark apostle possessed the ability to hide in the shadow plane. Only a few people were capable of detecting her presence. Lord Yuan, this is the first wave of rebels led by the Archduke, consisting of 8,000 legions. The enemy also commands the mountainous warlocks, known for their control of magic. In addition, this rebel army possesses elite troops totaling 2,000 legions with formidable strength. Princess Angel described the situation with solemnity. If it weren't for the absence of legendary heroes on the enemy's side, Lion City would have been already captured. No need to worry. The defense line of Lion City is prepared. What you need to do now is trust me. Yuan sensed the princess worries. The future of the Tsarayan royal family will be safe. Yuan's confidence provided some comfort. n/o/vel/b/in.c//om. Lord Yuan, the vow of the Tsarayan royal family to co-govern the kingdom with you after eliminating the rebel army will never change. Angel nodded solemnly. Yuan reached out and patted her shoulder in reassurance. Several lords who had joined Lion City watched the interaction. They were envious. Yuan had obtained the promise of governing a kingdom with the princess. Even though the other planes weren't as huge as the main plane, this kind of achievement wasn't small. The plane had a wealth of resources, and it would all belong to Yuan. Chapter 461, The Tessaria Plane War Begins. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation. Yuan watched as the black dots in her line of sight gradually grew. They entered the swamp surrounding the city. She turned to look behind her. Klitos, you must conserve your strength when the war begins. This war is an opportunity for you to advance. The desire for it grew even stronger after he had tasted what it felt to be a legendary hero. Unfortunately, it was immensely difficult to advance. The war will not weaken my power. It will only make me stronger, said Klitos. As a soul-eating demon born from the transformed heroic stone statue, he gained power as long as he stood on the ground. Indeed, it was not as simple as exhausting his stamina through simple killings. After a brief conversation, everyone became serious. The enemy army was approaching. Watching the enemy surging like a tide, several lords on the city wall had difficulty breathing. The impact of the enemy army pressing against the city made even seasoned veterans stressed, let alone those who had never seen such a large-scale battle. Guild Master, do you think we can hold on? No one could determine the situation, but this was the force chosen by Yuan. He didn't need to fear anything. Others instinctively looked towards the figure standing in front of the city wall, calmly observing the enemy army. Yuan had chosen to fight with Lion City. Why would they retreat when they had such a powerful lord by their side? Amid heightened tension, the enemy army finally arrived. They were now 200 meters away from Lion City. The army, with flags adorned with mountains, halted. The two armies faced each other. Several lords couldn't control their racing hearts. Guild Master, why don't we start a live stream? It's a great opportunity to gain fame. A female lord gazed eagerly at the guild leader. Standing and fighting with Yuan would woo the audience. They would gain a massive following? Their leader was tempted, but he shook his head. If they revealed their defense tactics in any way to the enemy, it would be a grave mistake. Even without passing on the information, the enemy might be able to guess their defense strategy through the live stream. The lords felt a little disappointed, but they didn't say anything. Guild Master, open the live stream on the forum. We are already being videoed by the Blazing Flame Guild. That caught everyone off guard. They opened the newly created live stream section of the forum. They immediately saw a room titled Blazing Flame Guild vs. Yuan in the headlines. The Blazing Flame Guild has become enemies with Yuan in a special plane and is about to launch an attack on the forces led by Yuan. They are also preparing to hunt Yuan down. This intrigued everyone. What was the Blazing Flame Guild anyway? It seemed the guild had many top-ranking lords as members. Their reputation was established through large-scale wars. Now, this guild was about to face the legendary individual, Yuan. The name Yuan was synonymous with strength. Many lords and heroes had fallen when fighting against her. The top guild and the strongest lord were about to face each other. The live stream has been running for a few days now. However, it didn't have too many viewers before. As soon as Yuan was mentioned, everyone flooded in to watch. The viewers weren't there for the Blazing Flame Guild. They were there to watch Yuan. However, an increase in audience was always a bonus. The live stream showed towering city walls, densely packed soldiers, and countless heavy weapons. Did everyone see that? This is Lion City and Yuan is its biggest supporter. Now the army of Archduke Bloodfury is about to launch an attack. We want to eliminate the royal family in Lion City. We also want to hunt Yuan down. No matter how strong Yuan is, we will be the only winners in this war. While the other side boasted about it, many lords commented on the bullet screen. The sound of a horn resounded and echoed through the sky. The camera panned up. The viewers could clearly see the massive army of mountainous soldiers surrounding them and advancing toward the Lion City. The lords watching the live stream on the city walls felt their hearts pounding. Their attention was focused on the live stream, hoping to spot flaws or vulnerabilities in the enemy's defenses. n/o/vel/b/in.c//om. The audience in the live stream room quickly noticed that something was amiss. The army pressed forward, but the defensive line didn't launch an attack to stop them. The army steadily advanced, while the heavily fortified Lion City seemed to have abandoned the fight. Amidst the heated discussions, the army charged and was only a few meters away from the city walls. The defense line remained motionless. The lords of the Blazing Flame Guild were confused. As everyone watched helplessly, the army reached the base of the city walls and began constructing siege ladders. Suddenly, a thunderous explosion was heard. The rolling marshland burst open and sent up towering columns of water tens of meters high in the sky. The army fell like mowed crops, then was engulfed in the endless swamp. It was futile to struggle. They were gobbled alive by the swamp. The viewers on the live stream watched the scene of devastation in disbelief. The once arrogant army couldn't even maintain its formation. The casualties and deaths were incalculable. The comments on the screen stopped. It took a long time for everyone to process what they just saw. Yuan hadn't even made a move and half the army was already dead. Chapter 462, A Shocking Live Stream. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation. Billions of viewers went from confusion to astonishment in less than a minute. The lords from the Blazing Flame Guild watched as the army in front of them was almost completely wiped out, leaving only a few soldiers standing in front of the city walls. On the towering walls of Lion City, the soldiers' morale soared as they watched the enemy fall. Under the command of the officers, they immediately began hunting down the soldiers who had reached the base of the walls, preparing to attack the city. The land behind them had already turned upside down, and without support from their comrades, the soldiers below the walls were nothing but live targets. After a few rounds of arrow volleys, there were no longer any enemy soldiers standing below. Princess Angel looked at the battlefield and took a few deep breaths. Instinctively, she turned to the figure beside her. Although she knew that Yuan had made some arrangements, she didn't expect her methods to be so ruthless. She had annihilated the enemy army. The uneasiness and worries in her heart instantly dissipated by more than half in the face of such exaggerated achievements. She also thought of the instructions Yuan had given her. The future path had already been paved for her by the Lord. It is an honor for the Tsarayan royal family to have met you. I will never let you down. As the dust gradually settled, the Lord of the Mountains stared at the scene before him with a grim expression. This was the army he had forged with massive effort and dedication, and now it was gone. His rough skin suddenly darkened, as if it were composed of rocks. Lifting a giant sword that was over 3 meters long and thick, he shouted in anger. Ancient language filled with a resolute battle intent echoed throughout the battlefield, and all the remaining troops under the Lord of the Mountains roared along with him. This towering hero, standing 4 meters tall, led the charge with a massive sword. The army behind him rushed forward under his command, and as they stepped onto the crumbling ground, endless magic surged forth. The rolling swamp ahead solidified and gravel transformed into flying rocks. It paved a direct path to the city. The Lord of the Mountains, accompanied by the last 2 elite legions, charged straight ahead. The lords in the live stream room initially thought that Yuan would effortlessly conquer this battle, but upon witnessing this scene, they weren't so sure. The live stream camera zoomed in, capturing the Lord of the Mountains leading the charge from the sky. With a muscular physique, a massive war sword in hand, and countless troops behind him, he painted a terrifying image. He could probably smash the city gates. As the lords watched and discussed, the viewers watching the livestream couldn't help but curse. Yuan is not as simple as you think, said a lord. He was given the task of promoting this livestream. If Yuan performed well, their viewership would increase. Praising an opponent was also an important task. Moreover, Yuan would unleash another shocking power that would astonish everyone even if he didn't praise her. While the lords in the livestream room discussed, there was movement on the battlefield. The Lord of the Mountains, leading the charge, was only 100 meters away. The real battle had begun. Fire. Lion City didn't wait around. They unleashed their attack. The moment the officer gave the command, a volley of arrows shot forward. The target was the Lord of the Mountains. The Lord of the Mountains was directly engulfed in a rain of arrows. The hero didn't suffer any injuries. The arrows simply bumped into him and veered away. This hero, with the bloodline of a mountain giant, had natural armor on his skin. The volley of arrows couldn't harm him in the slightest. The viewers in the livestream room exclaimed in amazement. The hero was incredibly strong. At that moment, the siege crossbows on the city walls released their attacks. The bowstrings trembled after the arrows were released. The immense force tore through the sky, propelling thick arrows toward the Lord of the Mountains. The lords in the livestream room exclaimed at the scene. The siege crossbow arrows struck the Lord of the Mountains. The crossbow arrows shattered upon impact. Even the siege crossbows couldn't break through his defenses. I'm already starting to worry about Yuan. With this hero leading the charge, the city is not so secure. Amidst the nervous gaze of everyone, the Lord of the Mountains forcefully charged forward once again. His posture was like that of a war god descending. When the army approached within 50 meters, a massive shadow leaped from the city walls. It viciously crashed onto the ground. The livestream camera focused on the new opponent. It was a towering monster with grotesque spikes and a narrow head. Just a single glance at it made one feel as if their soul was about to be devoured. What kind of monster is this? Asked a lord. Guild leader, say something. Just as the guild leader was about to speak, the terrifying monster that leaped down from the city wall launched its charge. It charged forward and caused the ground to tremble with each step. The arrows from the city walls suddenly ceased. The Lord of the Mountains sensed the enemy's strength. His fighting spirit surged, and his eyes turned a bluish-gray color. N/O/vel/B/in.C//OM. His bloodline talent, Giant Transformation, caused his aura to increase several times over. With a roar, he charged forward with a massive sword. Within a few breaths, the two colossal creatures collided with a loud crash. A terrifying shockwave erupted, causing the surrounding marshes to be swept up in a storm. The Lord of the Mountains' enormous sword clashed with the terrifying monster's battle axe. The two equally terrifying monsters separated upon impact, then swung their weapons to attack once again. With each collision, energy erupted in shocks and caused the surrounding swamp to explode. Chapter 463, Easy Kill. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation. The surrounding army didn't dare approach the battlefield. Stepping into the combat range meant certain death. No one could withstand the collision of such power. The top-tier existence of pure strength was now fighting to the point of madness. Klitos, the Dark Soul Devourer, felt an unprecedented sense of relief. It had been a long time since anyone dared to engage him head-on in a battle. Finally, someone could withstand his full power. Klitos was excited. He swung his battle axe in a frenzy. The battlefield transformed from a siege into a stage where only two heroes clashed. The audience in the livestream room watched with enthusiasm. They didn't care about war or peace. They just wanted a good show. The pure clash of power and brutality was beautiful to watch. All the lords believed that the two were evenly matched. They expected the fight to end only when one of the two was heavily injured or dead. Klitos abruptly threw down his battle axe and charged at the Lord of the Mountain with his bare hands. Unfazed, the Lord of the Mountain swung his giant sword and viciously struck Klitos on his shoulder blades. However, Klitos didn't give him a chance. With a burst of terrifying power, he rammed into the Lord of the Mountain's abdomen. The immense force caused his knees to buckle. Feeling the excruciating pain in his abdomen, the Lord of the Mountain instinctively released his grip on the giant sword. Klitos quickly retracted his knee and forcefully struck the Lord of the Mountain on the abdomen, causing him to spit out blood. While the Lord of the Mountain was still stunned by the pain, Klitos unleashed a furious roar and grabbed the Lord of the Mountain's head, and smashed it downward. The Lord of the Mountain lost his balance and fell backward. His head struck the ground with an impact that crushed the rocks. The terrifying defense ability of the Lord of the Mountain prevented him from suffering much damage. He struggled to get up. Klitos didn't give him a chance. He raised his foot and mercilessly stomped on the Lord of the Mountain's head. Each stomp caused the earth to shake. The surrounding ground had already become a mess. With each stomp, the ground trembled, and the surrounding surface was reduced to ruins. The Lord of the Mountain's body convulsed. He still wanted to launch a counterattack. Klitos grew impatient. He stopped down and pulled his opponent up and threw him with force. The body of Lord of the Mountain flew more than 10 meters before losing momentum and crashing down. Klitos gripped the battle axe with both hands. His power erupted. Blood splattered as the two severed bodies crashed to the ground. The air was filled with a strong scent of blood, and the fight came to a sudden halt. Everyone stared blankly at the scene. The Lord of the Mountain was dead. The hero who killed the Lord of the Mountain is one of Yuan's subordinates, said the guild leader. The viewers and the lords were shocked. Are you kidding me? How could a hero of this level be subdued? Isn't that monster the guardian of Lion City? How could he be Yuan's hero? Impossible? No matter how strong Yuan is, it's impossible for her to have this kind of hero. You must be kidding me. The guild leader also thought that the hero didn't belong to Yuan. However, he was wrong. There was still the centaur who was the strongest of them all. He watched the lords in the livestream still frantically questioning him. If a hero can cause this much of an uproar, how would the viewers react to a legendary hero under Yuan's rule? With that in mind, he dismissed the idea of revealing all of Yuan's details in one go. He wanted to shock everyone. The outcome would be shocking. The Lord of the Mountain was the soul of this army. Their most powerful leader was killed. The remaining troops immediately fell into despair. Their high morale plummeted. Klitos, who emerged victorious, slowly turned around to face the Mountain Legion. His one hand heft his battle axe, while the other held the giant sword of the Lord of the Mountain. His body tensed as he charged forward. Klitos rushing forward already put an end to any shred of courage the Mountain Legion had held. They fled. The rear gates of Lion City opened, and the heavy cavalry rushed out to continue the slaughter. The first wave of attack of Archduke Bloodfury came to an end. The leader of the Blazing Flame Guild ended the livestream. The unsatisfied viewers quickly expressed their opinions on the forum. The unexpected war contained an astonishing amount of information and was very thrilling. The most crucial topic among them was whether the hero who killed the Lord of the Mountain was one of Yuan's subordinates or not. The supporters and opponents engaged in intense arguments. Klitos' performance on the battlefield had been truly shocking. Another trending topic was the war between the Blazing Flame Guild and Yuan. They wondered who would emerge victorious. The legendary member lords in the guild were powerful. The clash between the two sides was undeniably captivating. The enemy didn't even manage to climb the city walls. The members of the Blazing Flame Guild in Tessaria's capital, who were watching the battle through the livestream, felt mixed emotions. They knew that Lion City had Yuan's support. The defense line was bound to be extraordinary, but they hadn't expected it to end this way. The hero commanding the army had been killed. It was embarrassing. Even if the enemy couldn't capture the city, they could have at least engaged in a meaningful battle. What had just transpired was frustrating, to say the least. Although everyone knew that Lord of the Mountain's attack was just the first wave, it was still a failure. The real army had yet to arrive. n/o/vel/b/in.c//om. Chapter 464, The Raging Flames Guild's Trump Card. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation. My lord, the discussions about this war on the forums have surpassed all other topics related to plain exploration. It has been completely hyped up. Shouldn't we cool it down a bit? The Blazing Flame Guild regarded this confrontation with Yuan as a top priority. They needed to win this war. However, to their surprise, the buzz generated by this battle had far exceeded their expectations. In this situation, the Blazing Flame Guild was at a disadvantage. If they lost, it would be a heavy blow. If Yuan had only started with superhuman subordinates, they wouldn't have thought they would fail. The Blazing Flame Guild had thousands of high-level lords, after all. Moreover, they had Archduke Bloodfury, who ruled over Tessaria Plain. However, Yuan mercilessly trampled their pride. She made them realize why she was hailed as the strongest lord. Does the Blazing Flame Guild still have room for regrets? The guild leader of the Blazing Flame Guild turned to his companions with a cold gaze. When doing great things, one must not be afraid of sacrificing oneself. The necessary chips must be pushed out without hesitation when the time comes. That was his way of doing things. The fact that the Blazing Flame Guild has grown to its current height was because of that strategy. Continue executing our established plan. Even if Yuan is powerful, I don't believe our army will lose to her so easily. The Blazing Flame Guild has yet to encounter an enemy it cannot defeat. Send people to further hype up the battle. In this battle, the Blazing Flame Guild must show its capabilities. But what if our plan is unsuccessful? Asked several lords. After all, their opponent was Yuan. The fight so far had shown them how strong she was. Could they really achieve victory? Even if we fail, we must let everyone know the power of the Blazing Flame Guild. They still had their trump card. Should we use it? Our connection to the fire elemental plane. Summoning the Lord of Fire only worked once. As long as we can collect more lava hearts, we will eventually be able to make a deal with the extraordinary one. Wangda's gaze was resolute. The followers of the Flame God are naturally close to the fire. Connecting to the fire elemental plane was not as difficult as they thought. The lords fell silent upon hearing this. After all, the Lord of Fire could only be summoned after their leader completed a series of tasks. Our goal this time is to make the name of the Blazing Flame Guild resound throughout the world. Only the strong can attract more followers, Wangda said slowly, observing the worried faces of the others. Summoning the Lord of Fire just once was enough to strengthen the Blazing Flame Guild's standing in the world. The sacrifices were definitely worth it. This time, we need to use our strongest power, said Wangda. Guild Master Wang, what if we put in everything and still lose? Asked one of the lords. If we can't win even with all the effort, then it means we aren't the ones who are weak. It's just that Yuan is too strong. Isn't she already strong to begin with? Wangda's voice was calm. As long as they displayed shocking power, the loss from failure wouldn't be that great. Losing against Yuan wasn't a devastating thing. After all, many had lost to her, and they were still going strong. Yuan was the strongest lord. Losing against her wasn't as embarrassing as they thought. The purpose of the livestream was to promote and attract new members for the guild, so they could grow in numbers. It didn't matter if they couldn't defeat Yuan. As long as the might of the Blazing Flame Guild was advertised, it would be enough to get new recruits. Guild Master Wang, you have great foresight. Wang's face became solemn. How could he possibly stop his ascent here? Yuan was not enough to make him bow his head and flee in defeat. Whoever becomes an obstacle to the rise of the Blazing Flame Guild will only meet destruction. This time, they will use that trump card and let the Lord of the Fire Elemental Plane become Yuan's burial ground. In Lion City, Yuan watched as the cavalry returned from hunting down the fleeing enemy soldiers. She was quite satisfied with the outcome. Who would have thought that a swamp could bury tens and thousands of troops? If there was anyone to blame, it would be the Lord of the Mountains for launching an attack and leading too many troops at a time. His strategy was only his muscles and nothing else. He should have thought it through. After the situation settled, Yuan floated above the battlefield. Looking down at the shattered ground and the ravaged battlefield, her eyes narrowed slightly. Endless radiance surged from her body, and the bodies of the buried soldiers rose to the surface. It was terrifying to look at. The entire surface was covered in corpses as if it had become a purgatory battlefield. Yuan quickly floated to the center, and the illumination from her body grew even more intense. The swamp below began to move. Under the gaze of everyone, the swamp surged rapidly toward the north, emitting a strong smell of blood. It then disappeared into the spatial rift, obstructed by thin mist. The bodies, supported by the gravel, filed in one by one. The soldiers on the city walls felt a deep chill. They saw a towering figure moving within the thin mist. The bodies that entered the rift disappeared in the blink of an eye. It was strange and eerie. No one knew what was hidden behind the bloody mist. However, Yuan's mood was good. With each body that entered the spatial rift, she could sense the growing strength of the putrid swamp n/o/vel/b/c/n.c//om. Chapter 465, Meeting with Acquaintances. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation. After the tens and thousands of corpses on the battlefield were all transported to the putrid swamp, the swamp devoured it all. It was like a person who had been hungry for a long time. It finally had a meal, thanks to the Lord of the Mountains. Even the recruited units from before had to be upgraded. After reaching 1,000 troops, a new hero could be born. From the current situation, it seemed that would take a long time to achieve. To accelerate the progress of the swamp, the flesh and corpses weren't enough. They needed more resources. Archduke Blood Fury was a wealthy man. The Tisseria Plain was a wealth of resources. As long as they could conquer this plain, they would still be able to get a ton of resources. If nothing else, an upgraded swamp would make this quest worth it. Hail Lord Yuan! Hail Lord Yuan! Everyone cheered for Yuan, and the deafening roar almost overturned the city walls. Yuan remained calm as she returned to the city walls. The surrounding soldiers, led by Princess Angel, all bowed and saluted when she passed. Several lords who had joined Lion City were envious when they saw this. They also wanted thousands of people to cheer and bow to them. Yuan was unfazed. Having experienced countless wars, she was no longer the young lord who used to be moved by everything. She helped Angel and the high-level members of Lion City away from the city walls. This was only the first wave. The real enemy hadn't arrived yet. They needed to discuss strategies. The traps they had used today wouldn't be effective a second time. Time passed quickly. The other lords noticed that the Blazing Flame Guild's livestream was on again. The lords immediately informed their friends. Countless lords and viewers flooded into the livestream room. Hey, guys. Welcome to our livestream room. Today, we're launching our second wave of attack on Lion City. The Blazing Flame Guild had received a combat mission from the Archduke of the Tisseria Plain. This time, they would serve as the vanguard. We will directly confront Yuan. Everyone was excited to hear that. The Blazing Flame Guild was known for its suicide missions. Nobody had expected another attack so soon. Most lords didn't expect the Blazing Flame Guild to be so bold. The fight between Yuan's hero and the Lord of the Mountains was still vivid in their minds. The fact that not even a legion could touch the city walls proved Yuan's strength. The Blazing Flame Guild dared to announce their new attack. The Blazing Flame Guild streamer saw the audience's pessimistic response and couldn't help but laugh. The plans of the higher UPS were not something you could see through. They had dominance over the fire elemental plane. This wave will make you realize the strength of the Blazing Flame Guild. Yuan was destined to be a stepping stone in this fight for glory. Yuan is far more powerful than you can imagine. This time, you will come to know her true power. They knew that the hero who killed the Lord of the Mountains was just a part of Yuan's troops. Even if Yuan was invincible, she couldn't possibly be a match for the Blazing Flame Guild. The entire livestream room, with billions of people, saw the Fire Elemental Lord confronting Yuan, and they watched in anticipation. They might finally witness the fall of a legend. How would Yuan defend herself against the invincible and legendary Fire Elemental Lord? Even her centaur was no match for the Fire Elemental Lord. If the Fire Elemental Lord charged forward and strolled around Lion City, the entire city would be razed to the ground. How could they fight that? The comments were pitying Yuan and Lion City. Only a few people had faith in Yuan. The lords of the Blazing Flame Guild rejoiced. Many lords on the forum discussed Yuan's downfall and loudly praised the Blazing Flame Guild. At this moment, time seemed to have stopped. Under everyone's nervous gaze, the Fire Elemental Lord made a move. Shrouded in endless magma and flames, he walked toward Lion City. Wang De was eagerly watching everything. He waited for the Fire Elemental Lord to show Suan what defeat tasted like. Suan would meet her end, and the Blazing Flame Guild would have a glorious future? The Fire Elemental Lord exuded a terrifying aura with every step. He left behind a blazing path as he approached Suan. Everyone held their breath and watched. Your Excellency, it's been a long time, said the Fire Elemental Lord. He placed a fist to his chest and bowed. Wang De's smile froze on his face. Do they know each other? The lords in the livestream room were shocked at the scene. What was going on? n/o/vel/b/in.c//om. Lord Khan, do you have any connections to the Blazing Flame Guild? Suan looked at the Fire Elemental Lord. She didn't expect to meet the Fire Elemental Lord on this plane. She and Su Yuan had once released him from his imprisonment in the Mage Tower. They were on good terms. He had given her the Fire Elemental cores when he ascended to his plane. She didn't expect that the Blazing Flame Guild would use him against her. The probability of this happening was probably even rarer than winning a lottery. These lords used the Heart of Magma as an offering, establishing a connection with the Fire Elemental plane, said the Fire Elemental Lord. Chapter 466, Backlash from the Trump Card. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation. He sensed the aura of the Heart of Magma and hurried to the Tisseria plane. The Fire Elemental Lord issued a task for them to find the Heart of Magma in exchange for his help just once. I didn't expect that the enemy would be you, said the Fire Elemental Lord apologetically. The Fire Elemental Lord turned to Wang De. You haven't yet handed me the Heart of Magma, so the mission ends here. Also, how dare you disrespect my friend? The terrifying ancient elemental language thundered like a storm, and the magical energy in the sky surged along with his words. The flames on the Fire Elemental Lord's body ignited as though gasoline had been poured on it. The space gate suddenly burst open and expanded to hundreds of meters. Irregular cracks spread rapidly, and the flames erupted. The temperature began to rise dramatically. One could see countless fire elemental beings swimming within the scorching flames in the space rift. These life forms controlled the magma and flames as they surged toward the Blazing Flame Guild. Everything happened too fast. The army of the Blazing Flame Guild didn't even have the time to react when the fire beings were onto them. They were burned on the spot. Shrill screams of agony filled the air. Even though the lords of the Blazing Flame Guild possessed strong resistance against fire, they couldn't fight against the fire beings. Lord Khan, please stop the attack. We are not your enemies. Your enemy is Suan. Wang De shouted. He felt the scorching hot flames burning him. How could the Fire Elemental Lord attack his own side? The confidence of the Blazing Flame Guild was shattered. What infuriated Wang De the most was that Suan hadn't even made a move. The Fire Elemental Lord had attacked his own side? He had greeted Suan and turned against them. Wang De was frustrated. How powerful is Suan exactly? Even a Fire Elemental Lord went to such lengths to side with her? How could a mere lord, who ruled over a swamp, be connected to a divine being like the Fire Elemental Lord? Wang De felt as though he would go insane. The billions of viewers on the livestream were also shocked by the recent turn of events. They didn't know what was actually happening. The Fire Elemental Lord summoned by the Blazing Flame Guild turned against them after greeting Suan. The lords had thought that they would witness the fall of a lord today. They were ready for Suan to fall and her centaur to be burned to ashes. Unexpectedly, it was the Blazing Flame Guild that was losing. The Fire Elemental Lord had only greeted Suan once and vented all his anger on the Blazing Flame Guild. When the viewers on the livestream looked up at the figure shrouded in the sky, they were in disbelief. They looked at the powerful centaur. Perhaps this wasn't as surprising as it felt. If Suan could subdue such a legendary hero as the centaur, how could it be difficult for her to be in league with the Fire Elemental Lord? Without even saying a word, Suan had turned the tables against the Blazing Flame Guild. Many had thought that this was it. This was the end for Suan. However, she was still going strong. The Blazing Flame Guild had become a joke. The hero they had summoned had turned against them, with a centaur as a subordinate, a Fire Elemental Lord as an acquaintance, and the terrifying hero from yesterday. Suan was too powerful to fight against. The viewers who were excited to see Suan being hunted in the livestream were now sorry for the Blazing Flame Guild for being involved in such a tragedy. Suan's reputation soared to a terrifying height again. The leader of the Blazing Flame Guild saw the situation and ended the livestream. At that moment, he was a mess. He couldn't figure out how the situation had changed so drastically. They had a justification for the last time they suffered a crushing defeat. The Lord of the Mountains had been careless, which was why they had been defeated so brutally. The member lords turned to look at the Fire Elemental Lord, who was burning everyone who stood in his way. They then fled from the scene. The Fire Elemental Lord possessed the power of destruction. They couldn't stand against it. They had never expected the entity to turn against them. The Blazing Flame Guild's army burned in the fire. The followers of fire now tasted what it felt to be burned alive. Wang De felt absurd as he watched his kin die in the fire. Retreat, he shouted. n/o/vel/b/in.c//om. The Blazing Flame Guild's army was completely crushed. They fled as fast as they were able. The spatial rift they came through was their escape. The army ran toward it. As the troops attempted to pass through it, the rifts shattered, and the army was torn to shreds. The ground was covered in blood. The Blazing Flame Guild's army plunged into the abyss. The fire elementals surging from behind didn't care about them. They burned everything they touched. Thick black smoke covered the sky, and a pungent stench permeated the air. When the screams in the air finally subsided, there was no one standing on the battlefield. Except for a few who managed to pass through the dimensional gate, the rest of the Blazing Flame Guild's army had perished. Yuan looked at the burning ground. She felt as though she was watching an apocalypse. No one could have imagined that this war, filled with the ambitions of the Blazing Flame Guild, would end in such a way. When there was no one left alive on the battlefield, the Fire Elemental Lord looked back at Yuan once again. Chapter 467, The Explosive Forum. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation. He looked at Yuan in awe and respect. Last time, when they had joined forces to fight the God of Light, he had stood unwaveringly to fight the enemy. He had witnessed the God of Light being imprisoned by Yuan single-handedly. The Fire Elemental Plane was no exception. The Fire Elemental Lord knew the opponent was too strong. Yuan was no longer the Lord who had released him from the Mage Tower. She had become more powerful than that. The speed of her growth far exceeded his expectations. He looked at her and noticed that Yuan wasn't with her. When the Blazing Flame Guild's spatial rift shattered, he sensed an evil and dark aura, even stronger than himself. In such a short time, Yuan had already subdued 2 legendary beings to be her hero. Even if he chose to support the Blazing Flame Guild, there was no victory. Perhaps he could burn down this city, but it was absolutely impossible for him to defeat Yuan. He might end up dead instead. If Yuan called upon Yuan, he would be doomed. That was the reason why he was so angry that the Blazing Flame Guild had called upon him to fight against Yuan. The Blazing Flame Guild not only wanted him to fight against a friend but also put him at risk. Yuan could kill him. The Fire Elemental Lord was enraged. He attacked them back to prove his loyalty to Yuan. The Blazing Flame Guild would never know about this. They only saw the Fire Elemental Lord bowing to Yuan. Nov. L. B /JNN. Lord Yuan, one have a lot of information about this plane. Those lords were talking about it. If needed, I can assist you in dealing with Archduke Blood Fury. Yuan chuckled. Nothing could be better than that. Upon hearing the conversation between the two sides, the morale of the defending soldiers soared once again. They looked at the figure floating in the sky with fiery gazes. The Fire Elemental Lord was capable of destroying cities. However, he was willing to back them up instead of the enemies. Their respect for Yuan reached its peak. Lion City rejoiced. At the palace, Archduke Blood Fury sat on the throne and looked at the soldier who was reporting on the progress of the battle. The Blazing Flame Guild summoned the Fire Elemental Lord, but the being bowed to Yuan and attacked the guild. Yes, Your Majesty. The hall was silent. Over 10 high-level heroes looked at the soldier in disbelief. The soldier felt uneasy under their gazes. You may leave. The soldier felt relieved and quickly departed. Your Majesty, those rebels who harbor unrealistic fantasies about the remaining Tessarian royal family are resurfacing. A woman in her 40s stepped forward. Although the Blazing Flame Guild failed, they still had some lords on their side. The woman was a little baffled. She hadn't expected Yuan to be so strong. If my guess is correct, that Fire Elemental Lord is their trump card. Now that this card has been exposed, the danger to us has greatly diminished. The enemy's power was no longer mysterious and unpredictable. All the Lord's strength was out in the open. Her words were met with unanimous agreement from the other heroes. It was something everyone acknowledged. If that player truly had the ability to defeat them on the front lines, they wouldn't have huddled in Lion City for so long. Based on the current situation, even if the enemy has some other extraordinary beings hidden, they won't be able to stop our advance, said the woman. Her words boosted their morale. If it weren't for the desire to completely eliminate those restless forces that wanted to support the royal family, Lion City would have long been flattened by them. Your Majesty, let us march. They looked up at the imposing figure on the throne. For the ruler of greed. Archduke Blood Fury lifted his sword. With both hands gripping the hilt, he held the longsword in front of his chest, pointing the tip towards the sky. For the ruler of greed, exclaimed the heroes as they heft their weapons into the sky. An evil aura emanated from everyone. After the intense war ended, the forum was filled with numerous posts. Who could have imagined that the Fire Elemental Lord summoned by the Blazing Flame Guild would ultimately backfire because of Yuan? The battle was filled with intense plot twists. It became a hot topic of discussion. The untold story of Yuan and the Fire Elemental Lord. Why did the Blazing Flame Guild end up attacking their own side? How strong is Yuan? Is there anyone who can match Yuan in a fight? Once again, the forum was filled with posts and discussions about Yuan. Many mocked the Blazing Flame Guild. Yuan, who loomed over everyone's heads, undoubtedly became their main focus. Prior to the war, many lords had wanted to fight with Yuan because they thought they could take her down. The devastating defeat of the Blazing Flame Guild made everyone sober. Yuan was still growing. If this went on, she might become stronger than everyone else. Even the Lord of the Mountains was killed by one of her troops. She had a powerful centaur under her command. Now, there was the Fire Elemental Lord. Yuan's power was too overwhelming and terrifying. Chapter 468, Slaughter and Sacrifice n/o/vel/b/jn.c//om. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation. They had only scratched the surface. They couldn't imagine how powerful Yuan exactly was. Is there really anyone who can match such a lord? The top lords revered by other lords paled in comparison to Yuan. The lords who harbored hostility towards Yuan quietly dismissed any thoughts of opposing her. Yuan didn't have much opinion about the other lords' reaction toward her. She had grown accustomed to such discussions. As the Fire Elemental Lord returned to the Fire Elemental plane, Yuan looked at the battlefield and frowned. Gather people to clean up the battlefield and throw all the corpses into the spatial rift to the north. Although the Fire Elemental Lord had good intentions, he had burned all the corpses. Wrapped in blood-red bandages, Andy immediately nodded. He turned around and rallied troops to clean up the corpses. The undead army was particularly sensitive to corpses and souls. They were able to unleash tremendous destructive power during battles. After collecting 7 or 8 corpses, they flapped their wings and flew towards the spatial rift leading to the death swamp. They threw the corpses there. The swamp accepted all corpses. The only regret was that over 60% of the bodies had been burned to ashes, leaving very little behind. Yuan watched the corpses being thrown into the death swamp and sensed the changes in it. In order to activate the special land given by the god of dwarves and raise it to level 4, a massive number of corpses needed to be sacrificed. According to the current state of progress, that would be difficult to achieve even if they had 1,000,000 corpses. Yuan also felt a bit helpless. It was important to upgrade the swamp, but the requirements were too high. After the initial fierce battle, there was some resistance. That decreased the number of corpses Yuan needed to upgrade the swamp. One need to find a way to instigate conflicts among the planes and increase the intensity of the battle. Otherwise, if things continue like this, the planes won't be willing to send troops to fight, and one won't be able to upgrade the death swamp. But if I send troops to conquer their targets right now, it is possible that someone else will take advantage and reap the benefits in the end. I need to be present when that happens. The rulers of the plains were clever. They refused to leave their own plains to engage in a war because they were aware of the risks. They knew that the gains from such skirmishes were not worth it. However, if the ruler of the plains found a way to be strong outside their plains, they would definitely take the plunge. Once we capture the Tisseria plain, we can let the dark withered tree enter the putrid swamp. I have many heroes under my control, each with different abilities. It will all work out. The dark withered tree, in particular, was a unique entity. It was a tree but had a level of intelligence to understand and initiate things. However, the dark withered tree's upgrade was just too slow. If it could be leveled up into something legendary, it would be better. While using the dark withered tree to lure enemies, I also need to plan for it to level up to the legendary level. After cleaning up the battlefield, Lion City rejoiced again. This was the second wave of attacks launched by Archduke Bloodfury. Both times, he had failed, and Lion City had won. People felt as though Yuan was a god's gift to them. In the evening, after enjoying a sumptuous dinner, Yuan decided to take a warm bath when Angel rushed to find her. What's wrong? Yuan asked. Just received news that Archduke Bloodfury has launched a massacre in several provinces of the Tisseria kingdom. He is targeting the noble families who are still loyal to the Tisserian royal family. Princess Angel was distraught. Her fists were clenched in frustration. Hundreds of large and small nobles were attacked, and their families were slaughtered. Over 1,000,000 people died at the traitors' hands. The blood even stained the moat of the Tisseria kingdom. She couldn't protect her people and the vassals. Angel gritted her teeth. She was enraged. Yuan looked at the princess. She felt that the Archduke's senseless killings had a deeper meaning to it. He wasn't just killing the noble families to stop them from being loyal to the royal families. It was a sacrifice. Certain evil spells required human sacrifices. Archduke Bloodfury was trying to gain control over everything. Once Lion City fell, he would be the king of the Tisseria plain. No one in their right mind would indiscriminately slaughter their own people unless he had banded together with the abyssal evil god before. His actions this time pointed to something similar. Our undercover agents have also speculated about this, but we're not certain yet. Angel clenched her fist. Her eyes were filled with fury. After 2 wars, Yuan's prestige in Lion City had reached its peak. Without her approval, even Princess Angel didn't issue commands. Yuan returned to the Grand Lion Hall with the princess. More than 30 high-ranking officers of Lion City were present. They jointly ruled the city. Everyone stood up and placed their fists on their chest in respect when Yuan walked in. Yuan gestured for them to take their seats. Princess Angel sat to her left. The solemn and anxious atmosphere eased a little with Yuan's presence. What does our intelligence say? Yuan asked. Lord Yuan, under the pretext of pacifying the rebellion and eliminating the royal family, Archduke Bloodfury has carried out massacres against nobles and commoners, with casualties exceeding 1,000,000. A young hero, dressed in white armor, stood up. They have transported all the bodies to the province where Archduke Bloodfury stays at the moment. Chapter 469, The Last Trump Card. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation. The hero picked up a smooth long stick and pointed at the military map spread out on the table. Yuan saw that the place he pointed at was the High Mountain Province. It was only 200 to 300 kilometers away from the capital. It was also near the Spire of Fate. What is Archduke Bloodfury planning? Wondered Yuan. If it was for a spell, why not just lock the civilians up? Why go through so much trouble? Put Lion City on high alert. We will pay special attention to Archduke Bloodfury's massacre, said Yuan. The real battlefield was still in Lion City. Regardless of what Archduke Bloodfury planned, he would come after the city in the end. After the meeting ended, Yuan asked Angel to stay behind. No matter what you want to do, don't worry. We all support you unconditionally, the princess said as she looked at Yuan's resolute face. For now, one entrusts the city to you. Proceed according to the plan, Yuan said as she took out the fire elemental core. This was a treasure used for summoning the fire elemental lord. Once crushed, he would appear. If Lion City encountered trouble before her return, it could be used immediately. Princess Angel reached out to receive the fire elemental core that Yuan handed to her. She felt thankful that Yuan trusted her. Angel turned to look outside the window. A hazy scene met her sight. The cracks appeared in space like spider webs and covered the entire sky. N/O/vel/B/jn.C//OM. Yuan looked at the terrifying scene with a solemn face. Does the Archduke intend to drag the entire plane into the abyss? Just as Angel turned back to Yuan to ask something, she noticed a tranquil flower engraved on the crystal in her hands. Guild Master, what did Archduke Bloodfury say to you? Outside the desolate frost snow mountains, members of the Blazing Flame Guild looked at their leader with doubt in their hearts. Is the plane going to collapse? The situation was too frightening. If the plane collapsed, everyone would die. Archduke Bloodfury intends to sacrifice the Tesseria plane to the abyss in exchange for greater power, said the guild leader. He looked up at the sky. Guild Master, what should we do? If the Tesseria plane was gone, wouldn't all their efforts be wasted? This plane will become the bridgehead for the abyss. He wants to invade the main plane. Archduke Bloodfury has already gained the favor of the Lord of Greed, the ruler of the bottomless abyss. You should know that the closer you get to the depths of the bottomless abyss, the stronger the power becomes. If the plan succeeds, Archduke Bloodfury will transform from the ruler of the Tesseria kingdom to the vanguard of the bottomless abyss, the servant of the Lord of Greed. The members of the Blazing Flame Guild were in disbelief. He intended to sacrifice the entire plane in exchange for power. Archduke Bloodfury had such grand ambitions? However, there was another concern. Wouldn't that mean the Archduke would become a demon eventually? Archduke Bloodfury won't completely become a demon. He will only obtain part of the power of higher demons. He will be a half-demon. We are on good terms with Archduke Bloodfury, Wangda said with conviction. We'll be fine. Archduke Bloodfury has promised that as long as the Blazing Flame Guild maintains its cooperation with him, he will grant us land to manage our guild. At the same time, we can recruit higher demon units of the Tesseria plane to our cause. The members felt excited about the prospect. They didn't care much about being given a piece of land. However, if they could recruit stronger troops to their cause, the difficulty of obtaining higher-level troops was evident to everyone. Even at this moment, the Blazing Flame Guild only had a meager 30 troop nests. They were a top guild with 5,000 lords, and yet they had to undergo immense difficulties to obtain those 30 troops. They couldn't resist the temptation of the prospect offered by the Archduke. Moreover, if Archduke Bloodfury ascended to legendary status, there would undoubtedly be even more high-level troops in the Tesseria plane. At that time, the Blazing Flame Guild could recruit and train these troops. They would be leagues ahead of other guilds. They were followers of the Lord of Flames. They wondered if the Lord of Flames would get offended by their choice. That lofty divine being up there won't bother to pay attention to our actions. Wangda shook his head. But just in case, they would establish a new department later specifically for recruiting lords from the evil faction to manage and govern this land and command the demons. Yuan would have never expected that our previous failure would instead earn us the recognition and trust of Archduke Bloodfury. Behind Archduke Bloodfury was the Lord of Greed, the top-tier evil god who ruled the abyss. The previous defeat was humiliating. Their confidence and hopes had been shattered. How could they accept an offer like this? This was their one shot at regaining their prestige. The final battle had been a turning point for Wangda. Even if Yuan had many more hidden trump cards, it would be impossible for her to do them damage, unless she had someone even stronger than the Lord of Greed to back her up. However, that was highly unlikely. The member lords of the guild were invigorated. Chapter 470, Who is more arrogant? Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation. Do we still need to broadcast this war? No matter how miserable their defeat was, as long as they could win this time, the Blazing Flame Guild still had the chance of becoming a top guild. Wangda scowled. The last live broadcast had made the Blazing Flame Guild a laughingstock. N/O/vel/B/jn.C//OM. Yes? We can't afford to fail this time, he said. He wanted to let everyone see that the Blazing Flame Guild took revenge seriously. Yuan was so renowned that confronting her was enough to get them glory. If they didn't broadcast Yuan's defeat online, then the Blazing Flame Guild would forever be in shame. This was a war that had to be won, and it would be a glorious victory. Take the army into the Tesseria plane. We will annihilate Yuan's army in this battle. Even if they had resurrection abilities, it wouldn't botch their plans this time. The high-level members of the Blazing Flame Guild were excited. What could be more exciting than getting revenge? In the sky, the cracks in the spiderweb grew. It felt like they were being pressed by giant stones that were on the verge of collapse. Archduke Bloodfury stood in front of the valley and looked in the distance. Numerous corpses were piled up. The blood covered everything. A lake of blood was filled with decomposing corpses. The smell of blood overpowered everything. Your Majesty, the army is ready. Shall we launch an attack on Lion City? Reported a soldier. Archduke Bloodfury drew his long sword and walked to the edge of the lake. He plunged the sword into the pile of corpses. The blood formed whirlpools around the sword. Archduke Bloodfury pulled out the sword. The silver-white edge of the sword had turned blood red. It looked both enchanting and terrifying. Our master will soon descend. Let the rebels in Lion City become sacrifices offered to the great ruler. Order the army to head to Lion City immediately after completing the ancient magic array. His eyes glittered in anticipation. The lords who were idling in the livestream room suddenly noticed that the Blazing Flame Guild's live stream had started again. They were excited for a good show. The Blazing Flame Guild was indeed bold. They were still choosing to live broadcast after everything went down. Weren't they embarrassed? They found the same host on the livestream as before. Isn't this the Blazing Flame Guild? Are they still live streaming? Haven't they been beaten up enough? What are they planning to summon today? Looking at the comments, the host of the Blazing Flame Guild smiled wryly. We are well aware of Yuan's strength and her unfathomable power. The Blazing Flame Guild's failure, though unexpected, is also logical. These words would only be mocked by the viewers. But it made sense. When it came to Yuan, there was truth to it. The host steered the conversation towards the battle and a new plan. Yuan will never be able to win? The plans of the Blazing Flame Guild went beyond what met the eye. A mature and powerful guild like theirs cannot be brought down by a single defeat in a war. The host's confidence was infectious. His eager commentary helped raise the Blazing Flame Guild's image. Although the audience still had their doubts, they no longer looked down upon them. However, the true test of that would be in the battlefield. Soon, the host of the Blazing Flame Guild's livestream moved the camera upward and showed the cracked sky to everyone. The entire sky had cracks. The real game has just begun. The host's tone was solemn. He stared into the camera with a resolute gaze. The horns resounded, and the screen showed a huge army. The army swiftly crossed through the rift in space and entered the battlefield. The Blazing Flame Guild's host fell silent and moved the camera to show Lion City. The army outside Lion City seemed endless, and it was only when the camera zoomed out that they could guess the number of the massive troops. The lords trembled in fear. The previous battle between the lords and the natives had been intense. While the audience was engrossed in discussion, everyone was nervous. The live camera switched at the right moment, showing a flock of ferocious falcons flapping their wings. These creatures led the way. A formidable figure stood firmly, exuding a terrifying aura. The viewers were wide-eyed. The Bloodhawk led the falcon army into the midst of the troops. Wherever the Bloodhawk passed, the soldiers knelt on one knee and humbly saluted. The awe-inspiring scene made billions of viewers feel envious. The Bloodhawk did not stop at the front but flew directly toward the towering walls of Lion City. Do you want to meddle with the Tisseria Kingdom? Archduke Bloodfury smiled sinisterly. Farla appeared in the line of sight. The Archduke turned to look at Yuan beside her. So, you're the lord that is helping the royal family. How pathetic, said the Archduke. A centaur and a fire elemental lord, really? I can't help but find it laughable. I thought my opponent would be powerful. If one had known this was the lord, I would have directly attacked instead of making so many preparations for nothing. This battle is turning out to be boring. Summon your master. Or has he already died in the abyss? Yuan looked at the Archduke calmly. Ever since the appearance of the Abyssal Rift, Archduke Bloodfury just looked like a side character in a story. The true enemy was the thing lurking in the abyss, peering into the Tisseria plane. The lords were baffled. Yuan was insulting a powerful opponent such as the Archduke? Chapter 471, A Frustrating Death. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation. They had thought that Yuan's heroes were all very arrogant, but they hadn't expected her to be equally haughty. Nov. L.B//JNN. The Archduke Bloodfury's eyes were bloodshot, and his terrifying aura surged like a storm. Who gave you the courage to talk to me like this? You have a death wish. Countless cracks appeared on the ground below. Yuan commanded Leona to take action. She didn't want to listen to the Archduke's nonsense anymore. The Archduke Bloodfury was beheaded. It shocked the lords and viewers. The figure in the sky with bat wings and a spear was more vicious than a demon? Wangda was the most shocked. Me couldn't stop trembling. He couldn't understand how someone like Yuan had the strength to subdue the most powerful people that appeared in front of her. His jealousy grew. Why didn't he have legendary heroes at his command? Even all the member lords of the guild combined couldn't best Yuan in a fight. He had never heard of a player who could subdue a transcendent being. It seemed that none of the billions of players could compare to Yuan. Jealousy was consuming his rationality. He gritted his teeth in frustration. Guild Master, what should we do now? Wangda was pulled back to the present. He turned to look at the member lords of the Blazing Flame Guild. They all looked terrified. The death of the Archduke Bloodfury was not a bad thing for this war. Wangda took a deep breath. His gaze was filled with a purpose. In the center of the Abyssal Rift, something was happening. An evil aura poured out. Yuan had provoked the mastermind behind this war? Everyone looked toward the sky. Will the Lord of Greed really descend? For the followers of the Lord of Flame, their fear and hostility toward the abyssal evil entity surpassed everything. Archduke Bloodfury led a massive army to crush the city before them. If he had succeeded, none of them would have to face the evil entity. But now, nobody had imagined Archduke Bloodfury would fall so easily. Yuan killing Archduke Bloodfury is a slap in the face of the Lord of Greed. Wangda said fiercely. The promises of the Archduke were just empty words now. Their hopes and dreams had shattered. The Blazing Flame Guild had heavily invested in the Tisseria plane and couldn't withdraw now. With hundreds of millions of people watching, if the Blazing Flame Guild retreated now, they would be mocked. They had to win this war. Moreover, the true master of this war was the ruler of the Abyss. Even if the Blazing Flame Guild lost the promises of Archduke Bloodfury, they would still be the winners of this war. He looked at the Vampire Duke and the Centaur in the sky, and an indescribable joy surged in his heart. When the Lord of Greed descends, let's see how arrogant you can be about it. The higher-level lords of the Blazing Flame Guild heaved a sigh of relief when they received a positive response from their leader. Yuan's powerful troops had no end to it. It was a blow. The lords had felt very dejected. When the Lord of Greed descended, it wouldn't matter how strong Yuan was. On the towering walls of Lion City, the soldiers guarding the city finally came back to their senses. Everyone looked at Leona in the sky with a burning gaze. She was a top-notch legendary hero from the blood race. Angel had tears in her eyes. Her father had been betrayed and killed. Archduke Bloodfury had done that, and now, he was gone. She vowed that the Tisseria plane would never forget Yuan's kindness. Yuan looked puzzled. Archduke Bloodfury, an invincible enemy that she had prepared to fight for 2 months, had died at Leona's hands so easily. She gazed up at the cracks in the sky. This war had been for Klatos to advance. Maybe she needed to find another way to have him level up. The plan was delayed now. If the enemy hadn't planned to plunge the Tisseria plane into the abyss, Klatos would have had a chance. Fortunately, Leona and Farilla had already leveled up. Otherwise, it would have been a lot of work. Leona waved her hand, and the corpse of Archduke Bloodfury flew to Lion City. She landed on the wall and knelt in front of Yuan. The rebels have been eliminated. Awaiting your command. The lords in the livestream were flabbergasted. They couldn't believe it. This terrifying hero was Yuan's subordinate yet again. The comments were filled with complaints. The onlookers turned their attention to the battlefield. Archduke Bloodfury's rashness had cost him his life, but the army he had brought with him had not suffered any damage. Yuan faced dozens of troops. Could Lion City withstand the attack? While everyone was curious about the developments in this bizarre war, something shattered. The spatial cracks expanded. Something was about to crawl out. Evil energy gushed out, and the entire sky darkened. It was clear that it was an extremely evil entity that was coming out of the abyss. Everyone heard a low wail. It sounded like someone was crying on the verge of death. The viewers felt a chill run down their spines. An evil aura surged out of the cracks and became more and more apparent. The spatial tear that looked like a demon's eye glowed. It looked as if there were dark stars inside. It oppressed everything around it. It was terrifying to look at. The energy that gushed out of the crack finally condensed into a gray fog. As time passed, the energy became denser. A shrill scream rang out of the mist. The creatures that came out started at the battlefield with bloodshot eyes. Something red squirmed in their skin. Human soldiers exploded and turned into a red, bloody mist. Chapter 472, Yuan is crazy. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation. The camera turned to show the new creatures. The army burst like balloons, one after another. The air was filled with the smell of blood. The lords' faces turned pale. The scene was horrifying. They were filled with doubts about the whole thing. It caught everyone off guard. The terrifying explosions continued. The army diminished. The sky was covered with a blood-red mist. The camera only showed an expanse of blood on the field as far as the eyes could see. The blood then began to spread and shoot everyone on the battlefield. Pained screams filled the air. The sound of bones cracking reverberated throughout. The bodies of the troops grew bigger. Devil horns protruded from their foreheads, and demon tails swayed. Was the crack in the sky transforming the troops of Archduke Bloodfury into demons? The host of the Blazing Flame Guild finally came to his senses. Do you all know what the crack in the sky is? It's the plane of the abyss. The Lord of Greed is going to descend. The lords couldn't imagine that a god would appear. Their hearts filled with anticipation. The speed of demonic transformation was too fast. It was too late to prepare anything. Yuan's face turned serious. The main enemy in this war was no longer Archduke Bloodfury. An evil ruler of the abyss remained on her path of conquest. However, judging from the aura emanating from the crack in the sky, the opponent was neither the Spider Queen nor the Lord of Decay. Lord Yuan, the soldiers have been corrupted by the abyss, said Angel. She was looking at the frightening scene. Her fingers clenched around the hilt of her sword. It was no wonder Archduke Bloodfury had amassed such a massive army. She had thought that he had the sole aim of capturing Lion City, but it seemed that the cultist had planned to sacrifice his army and turn them into demons. Angel was so angry that she swung her sword and impaled it into the corpse of the Archduke. It wasn't enough to quell the rage she felt. The Archduke had ruined everything. There was no way to turn the troops back to what they were. The soldiers had been trained by using the resources of the Tisseria plane. Now, they were all demons. Most of the soldiers were civilians. They would have served the Tisseria plane well even after the death of the Archduke. Yuan didn't try to console Angel. The evil entity from the bottomless abyss is provoked by the death of Archduke Bloodfury and intends to visit personally, Yuan said as the demonic transformation of the army in front of her was nearing its end. N/O/vel/B/jn.C//OM. As a native of the Tisseria plane, Princess Angel harbored deep hostility and fear toward the abyss. The bottomless abyss was the epitome of evil. The Tisseria kingdom had paid an extremely painful price before. It was unthinkable for it to happen again. Could the Lion City withstand it? What should we do? Should we evacuate the Tisseria plain? If it really was a god that was descending to the plain, there was no other choice for them. We will stand by and let the abyssal ruler enter the plain, said Yuan. The phoenix tail carved on the crystal in her hand was noticeable. You reptile from the bottomless abyss, no matter who you are, no matter what kind of power you have, you can't win. Get out of the Tisseria plain. Yuan stood where the Archduke Blood Fury had fallen. Above her head was a spatial rift resembling the eye of the abyss. She was scolding a god? The lords were all astonished. Yuan was insulting such a powerful entity. Did she have no fear? The lords wondered whether Yuan had another hidden trump card that could deal with gods. Amidst the perplexed gazes of everyone, the eye of the abyss suddenly surged. A red light flickered within it. Time seemed to have stopped. Everyone had difficulty breathing properly. It felt as though a heavy boulder was pressing on their chests. Many low-level troops couldn't take the pressure and collapsed. Beads of sweat lined their foreheads. Blood trickled down from the corners of their lips. The evil god from the bottomless abyss watched the Tisseria plain and everything within it. The bullet comments in the live broadcast room stopped. Even the viewers felt the pressure of such an entity penetrating deep into their souls. You? How dare you provoke me? The abyssal voice sounded like rolling thunder. The eye of the abyss became brighter and brighter. The endless divine might pressed down on the world. The land couldn't bear the pressure. It began to sink. Everyone was terrified. There was no doubt in their hearts that this was a god from the abyss. They wondered in astonishment what Yuan planned. She had lured the abyssal god out into the plain. How was this going to end? Wang De's heart surged. His face turned red. Let's see how you deal with that, Yuan. It wasn't only him. Every lord was filled with anticipation. They wanted to see Yuan's downfall. Yuan is dead for sure, said the host of the live stream. The enemies of the Blazing Flame Guild would all perish. The legendary Yuan would meet her end here. There was no possibility of a victory, not when the opponent was a god. Chapter 473, How could she have such confidence? Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation. The eye in the abyss glowed red, and endless divine power surged to its climax. Whether it was the hundreds of lords in the live stream or people in Lion City, everyone felt the pressure of it. The abyssal evil god was synonymous with fear and darkness. No one in this world was willing to go up against such an entity, because they were the source of chaos and evil in this world. Amidst the oppression, the eye blinked once again. The lords were astonished. Why would Yuan do this? They were also envious of her. How did she get all the good heroes? At this moment, Wang De was filled with resentment and envy. How could this lord be the best? Why couldn't it be him? After this war, everyone will submit to me? The Blazing Flame Guild will rise again. Yuan turned to look at the troops of Archduke Blood Fury, who had turned into demons. She felt oppression and fear. She brushed them off and calmed herself. She looked up at the eye of the abyss above her head. The troops stationed outside Lion City were restless. They were filled with greed. They desired to possess everything. Yuan recalled that the Lord of Greed ruled over that emotion. In the bottomless abyss, there were 7 evil gods who controlled 7 primitive emotions: pride, jealousy, greed, gluttony, rage, sloth, and lust. Nov. L. B //JNN. Every evil god was renowned for their work. The evil entity that Yuan faced right now was the Lord of Greed. Yuan's gaze was sharp. Most people weren't willing to face such an existence, let alone fight it. However, the Lord of Greed was nothing in front of Yuan. The god of light, who had been defeated by Yuan, wasn't weaker than the Lord of Greed. Even the Spider Queen was stronger than the Lord of Greed. She had instigated a fight and paid the price. In front of such entities that Yuan had fought with, Lord of Greed was nothing. Yuan had fought too many divine beings and accumulated experience and strength. The Lord of Greed was nothing in front of what she had faced. The other lords didn't understand this. If nothing worked, she would summon Yuan for help. Lord of Greed, is this all you have? Yuan's voice resounded in the sky. Among the 7 evil gods, the Lord of the Greed was the weakest. Even the Lord of Sloth was stronger than him. Her voice was like a morning bell that woke everyone from a trance. Even the viewers on the live stream regained their senses. The lords were filled with fear. Fortunately, it was only a live stream, and they weren't actually present in the area. Otherwise, they would have succumbed to their greed and joined their fray. Only then did they realize how terrifying the power of a god was. The eye of the abyss twitched. The pressure felt by the others doubled. The soldiers on the city walls turned pale with fear. You have a death wish. The Lord of Greed was enraged. Such a tiny human trying to provoke him made him feel furious. How was this human lord so arrogant? Even in the War of Gods, the other gods hadn't behaved so recklessly. The red glow of the eye turned entirely crimson. Strands of black mist appeared from it. The whole scene was eerie. Under immense pressure, the viewers on the live stream trembled in fear. They looked at Yuan, who was resolute. How could Yuan be so confident? Was she mad? Did she have a hidden trump card that could challenge a god? If she didn't, she wouldn't have such audacity. As the pressure grew, the cracks gradually expanded. The eye in the sky suddenly exploded. The spider web-like cracks that covered the surroundings erupted. Fragments of space fell like snowflakes. Everything fell silent as though time itself had stopped. Everyone instinctively looked up at the sky. It was finally happening. The descent of the evil god of the abyss? The soldiers of Lion City held their breaths. They did not move or breathe, afraid that the entity would notice them. The lords in the livestream were wide-eyed in disbelief. The sky turned pitch black under the watchful eyes of the crowd. Darkness engulfed everything. At the end of their line of sight, an unbroken part of the sky was emitting a faint light. What they saw made them catch their breaths. It was as though a mass grave had materialized in front of them. Corpses reached out their rotten arms to grab anything nearby. Chapter 474, The Angry God. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation. The barrier of the Tisseria Plain was torn apart. Although it had not completely fallen into the abyss, it was no longer an obstacle in the path of the bottomless abyss. The viewers in the live broadcast room felt their mouths go dry. n/o/vel/b/c/om. The bullet comments decreased. After a short silence, the screams rang out. It resounded in everyone's minds. It made their hair stand on end. They were even more terrified than before. It was rumored that if one fell into a bottomless abyss, one would go mad because of all the screams of agony and whispers of the destitute. Evil murmurs echoed in everyone's minds. The atmosphere was stifling. The scarlet eyes lit up in the endless darkness. The pitch-black sky that connected to the abyss revealed its true form. It was a huge palace supported by countless golden pillars. They couldn't even see the end of it. Precious treasures were scattered on the ground. The golden light was remarkable. It filled those who looked upon it with greed and endless desire. In the center of the palace, a strange throne stood above the sea of treasures. The throne was forged from something that shone with seven-colored light. It had 4 gem-inlaid feet that supported the seat. The back of the chair was more than 50 meters high. A terrifying figure with a bloated body was half leaning on the throne. There were 2 horns on his head, and his pure golden robe was bulging. He held the rainbow scepter in his hand and leaned against the throne. His blood-red eyes were filled with greed. Its ugly and bloated appearance made the endless power appear even more terrifying. In front of the throne, the golden lion crouched on the ground. Its blood-red eyes stared greedily at the treasures in front of it. The scene shocked the viewers on the livestream. Someone had just checked up on the information of the Lord of Greed. This god was also the god of wealth. If these treasures were given to the lords, they could conquer everything? The lords marveled at the treasures and turned to look at Yuan. Although they desperately wanted to possess those treasures, they could only peek at them. Yuan was present there for real. The lord was facing the might of the Lord of Greed in full blast. The lords watched Yuan standing resolutely in the face of such temptation and felt admiration for her. If it were them facing the Lord of Greed, they would have given up a long time ago. It was no wonder she was the top among the lords. However, this war wasn't to test if a lord could resist temptation. Yuan had provoked the god. Now, she had to end it. Everyone was curious to see how it would all end. The Lord of Greed was equally curious to find out. He watched Yuan with narrowed eyes. He had only torn the barrier apart and hadn't descended into the plane yet. Blasphemer, you will face eternal pain. One will lock your soul in the dungeon and let the abyssal maggots gnaw on it until the end of time. Show me your tricks, then. Show me why you have such audacity to challenge me. Although Wangda was terrified, he was happy. His face broke into a smile. Yuan is dead this time for sure. Nobody could save her from the hands of a god. If someone was killed by a god, they couldn't be resurrected. This was Yuan's end. Your blood will wash away the shame of the Blazing Flame Guild. Even if Yuan had the ability to overturn the heavens, it was impossible for her to fight the gods. The soldiers of Lion City were grim-faced. Fear surged in their hearts. They had unconditional faith in Yuan, but they weren't sure how she would get out of this situation. How would a mortal be able to face a god? Princess Angel's face was pale. She looked helpless. She hated Archduke Blood Fury, who had brought this upon them, and she hated herself for not being able to help Yuan. Although Yuan always had a plan, Angel wasn't sure if anything would work against this. Princess Angel brushed her thoughts away. She believed in Yuan. How boring. In the past 100 years, the only human who ever challenged me is you. And yet, you look worthless. The Lord of Greed looked at Yuan, teasingly. As soon as he finished speaking, the golden lion in front of the throne got up. I thought you were hiding something or had banded together with another of the evil gods. It seems it's only you alone. One wasted so much time. Take her soul. I want this worm to know what pain feels like. The Lord of Greed stood up from his throne and pointed his scepter at the void. He disappeared from where he stood. The golden lion jumped and stepped into the void when it sensed its master's anger. The surrounding void became distorted and could not withstand the mighty power. It felt like everything would explode from the immense pressure. The god of the abyss was descending. The soldiers of Lion City collapsed to the ground. They were unable to hold their weapons. The viewers were wide-eyed in shock. The lords of the Blazing Flame Guild were stunned. They looked at the terrifying entity in terror. Yuan will fall today. You puny insect, you've successfully enraged me? I'll torture you. Believe me, you'll understand what pain feels like. The Lord of Greed smiled sinisterly. Chapter 475, Killing the God. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation. Compared to the Spider Queen Ada, you look much weaker, said Yuan. She endured the divine might, which made her very soul tremble. The prey had appeared. Spider Queen Ada? You dealt with her. The Lord of Greed was uneasy. You talk too much, said Yuan. The Lord of Greed was feeling more and more uneasy. The Lord of Greed decided to find out everything once he extracted Yuan's soul from her body. Endless divine power surged in his body as he attacked. The surrounding space collapsed. The golden lion leaped across the void, ready to bite at any enemy that dared to approach. Something shattered. The Lord of Greed saw the human lord crushing the crystal in her hand. A blood moon emerged. The scene doused the Lord of Greed's rage. The anger was now replaced with fear. Is she working with the ancient gods? He wanted to escape, but he realized that his divine power no longer worked. The viewers saw the Lord of Greed rush towards Yuan. They were excited to see the god kill Yuan. However, what they witnessed left them in disbelief. A giant hand seemed to have stumped on the Lord of Greed and stopped him in his tracks. The golden lion also halted suddenly. Yuan stood before the Lord of Greed. A sharp long sword appeared in her hand. The sword swept through the air. The sword's surface on the rippling space reflected the Lord of Greed's bloated face. The huge head flew into the sky as it was separated from its body. Blood splurted everywhere. The towering divine being, who was untouchable by mortals, was beheaded. The surging aura, which was like a mountain pressing down on everyone, vanished suddenly. The greed and temptations that had riled everyone up dissipated. The golden lion finally came back to its senses. Its master was dead. It let out a piteous moan and crouched down with its head lowered. It submitted before Yuan. Silence fell. The live stream had also gone quiet. Everyone was in shock. Yuan had killed a god. An abyssal god was killed by Yuan so easily? Was this a joke? How could a lord kill a god? The lords felt as though they were hallucinating. No one was willing to believe the reality in front of their eyes. Wangda, the leader of the Blazing Flame Guild, watched everything in disbelief. No one could understand how Yuan had managed to kill a god. N/O/vel/b/jn.c//om. They had noticed something strange. Right before the beheading, the Lord of Greed had become motionless. The soldiers on the walls of Lion City were dumbfounded. Everything felt surreal. The soldiers recovered from the daze. Their despair was replaced by joy. Yuan led them to victory once again. Their enemy was dead. They looked at Yuan in reverence. In their eyes, Yuan was no less than a god. Princess Angel's sword trembled in her hands. Her eyes were red. Her breath came in gasps. Hot tears streamed down her face. Yuan had led them against Archduke Blood Fury and a god and led them to victory? The shock and disbelief felt by the millions of viewers and the lords of the Blazing Flame Guild were indescribable. After a long time, comments appeared on the live stream. The Lord of Greed's body floated in the void. Endless wealth lay before their eyes. Did the wealth in the void belong to Yuan now? It was so much wealth. It wasn't fair. How was Yuan so powerful? The palace with precious treasures was now ownerless. No one could even imagine how much wealth was in that place. Although the Lord of Greed was dead, the greed in the hearts of the lords was still rife. The riches were enough to tempt them. The wealth could help them expand their territories. Everyone was filled with jealousy and resentment towards Yuan. All of it belonged to Yuan. They could only watch helplessly. Just as everyone was wallowing in their greed, they noticed that the palace was glowing with a golden light. The light glowed brighter and churned into golden energy. The treasures disappeared. Even the staff of the Lord of Greed was disintegrating. The treasures were fake. The treasures turned to ashes. The lords and viewers were satisfied. It was just as well that Yuan couldn't get them, either. Wangda felt much better when he saw that. Wangda looked at the troops who had turned into demons. After the fall of the Lord of Greed, he could regain control of the troops. Chapter 476, Complete Collapse. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation. Although there were only about 1,000 demon units, it would still help the Blazing Flame Guild. Yuan was unaware of this. Her gaze was fixed on the Lord of Greed's palace. She watched everything disappear without any remorse. When the Lord of Greed fell, she had sensed that the treasures and the palace were all illusions. The palace was a special realm that reflected all greed and temptation. The treasures were the reflection of everyone's inner greed. Each person saw something different inside, depending on what they wanted the most. Some saw gemstones, while others saw gold. Some might also have seen potions of immortality. People had desires. It was what made them human. The power of the Lord of Greed magnified those desires 100-fold. When a person gets consumed by their desires, they become monsters. The treasures glowed with golden light and dissipated. The lords and viewers didn't see the golden lion in the void. Its fur became even more golden as the illusionary treasures disappeared. In the magnificent palace in the sky, the treasures vanished. Even the throne turned into nothing. There was only empty space now. The newly formed demon units trembled and wailed. They cried in agony. Their faces were filled with fear. The scene was horrifying to look at. The demons clutched their heads and collapsed on the ground. They convulsed a few times and stopped moving. Wangda was completely dumbfounded. His glimmer of hope was gone. He felt angry at his misfortune. Blazing Flame Guild, withdraw from the Tisseria Plain. He looked at Yuan with hatred. In an instant, he seemed to have aged 20 years more. Everything he had planned had turned to dust. His ambitions and dreams were ruthlessly crushed by Yuan. Spread my command. The Blazing Flame Guild is forbidden from ever confronting Yuan. The high-level lords of the Blazing Flame Guild looked at Wangda's pale face and didn't say anything further. Yuan had won the war with just a few heroes. In the end, Lion City didn't even have to use its army. No one could understand how Yuan had so many trump cards. How was she able to kill a god? Wangda tore a scroll, and all members of the Blazing Flame Guild disappeared without a trace. The conflict between the guild and the natives of the plain ended. The live stream captured the vast sky against the abyss, emanating a thick and restless aura of evil. The empty palace of the Lord of Greed was filled with desolation and misery. The live stream then ended, plunging everything into darkness. At that moment, millions of viewers felt like they were in a daze. When they recovered, they were filled with eagerness. The war had too many twists and turns that ended in a god's death. n/o/vel/b/jn.c//om. The forum was filled with discussions and posts mentioning Yuan. All the lords were talking about how crazy Yuan was. The natives learned the news quickly. A human lord had killed a god in front of everyone? It was simply unbelievable. Some followers of the Lord of Greed tried contacting the god to verify the information but only received feedback mentioning that no such god existed. This sudden turn of events amplified the turmoil in the main plane. A mortal killing a god was something right out of a legend. With the rise of the Crimson Moon, the world seemed to be heading toward an unpredictable situation. Chaos was about to erupt. As for Yuan, the key figure in the battle, all the information about her was given due consideration by powerful forces. Yuan had no interest in these things. After the treasures disappeared from the Lord of Greed's palace, he turned to look at the golden lion. The creature with the mane of a majestic lion exuded an air of nobility. Even if it was crawling in the void, its aura intimidated people. Lord Yuan, one have taken away the power of the Lord of Greed. The power is no longer controlled by the false god. This creature in front of her was called the Lion of Greed. It was a demigod who advanced via the power of greed. If the power of greed was gone, the majestic creature would also disintegrate. However, the power that had evolved over countless years from these treasures was extraordinary. The remaining divine power could be used to create a soul for the creature. Although it might reduce its strength, the lion would survive. Yuan was excited. After retrieving God's heart for Bardas, Yuan's relationship with Nami had improved. The gem had been a gift from Nami. She was the leader of the Crimson Moon. That was Yuan's ultimate trump card, capable of obliterating the gods. Chapter 477, The New King. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation. Yuan watched as the Lion of Greed continued to absorb the power. She didn't disrupt the process. She waved her hand toward the city walls. Leona immediately flew over to her. The vampire duke looked at Yuan with fiery eyes. Leona respected Yuan even more now. She had killed a god, after all. Take the army and clear the battlefield. No one should be allowed to escape. Leona flew back to Lion City and cleaned up the battlefield. The demons looked like they were dead, but one could never know. Shortly after the search, a sound rang out. Yuan looked up and saw a prominent crack appearing in the empty palace within the endless void. It was like a signal of some kind. The supporting golden pillars of the palace cracked one after the other. The entire palace shattered like porcelain. Yuan sensed that something was happening to the Tisseria plane. The spatial forces around her became significantly weaker. The collapse of the palace affected the entire Tisseria plane. Yuan noticed that the area connecting the abyss and the palace rippled like water. The power of the surrounding planes surged and started repairing it. The Tisseria plane was not an aging plane. Although it suffered severe injuries, the speed at which it healed its scars was not slow. The passage connecting to the bottomless abyss was destroyed, and the cracks disappeared without a trace. The sky returned to normal. The plane had become weaker, though. The power of the space was more fragile than before. It seemed that anything could blast through. The restoration would take time. Now, the most crucial thing was to collect the spoils of war. Yuan smiled eagerly. The war to conquer the Tisseria plane had lasted for months. Finally, Archduke Blood Fury was dead and his supporter, the Lord of God, was also gone. Yuan was in a good mood as she looked down at Lion City from the city walls. The obstacles in her path were gone. She had gained so much. A vast population, countless veins of ore, various high-level talents, and numerous creature nests and military camps. These were more than she had hoped for. If she incorporated the Tisseria plane into her territory, it would benefit the territory a lot. All the efforts would eventually pay off. Yuan wondered what level of treasure would be inside the formidable Spire of Fate. It was known for its powerful troops. Yuan was very excited. With these thoughts in mind, she turned to look at the Lion of Greed, which was still undergoing its transformation. The lion, after reconstructing its soul, would be at a legendary level. She would gain another top-tier hero. Yuan then turned to look at the corpse of the Lord of Greed. Although the power of greed had been taken away, the energy contained within it was as vast as the sea. The divine body was still intact and held immeasurable value. Yuan tried to calm her excited heart. She looked at the battlefield. The demon units were all top-tier level. After the Lord of Greed was gone, the demons had collapsed. They weren't as lucky as the Lion of Greed. More importantly, these demons hadn't died in battle, so their bodies were still intact. Andy, lead the army and throw all the corpses into the Death Swamp, said Yuan firmly. The Death Swamp was still brewing. It had yet to reach level 4. With these corpses, the upgrade would be faster. The benefits from this war were enough to bring about rapid development in her territory. In the north of Lion City, from the spatial rift that led to the Death Swamp, the god of deception and lies watched everything silently. He had created an illusionary body in the surging mist. He looked mysterious. The others couldn't understand how the Lord of Greed had been killed so easily, but he couldn't be fooled. The power of the Crimson Moon. The god wondered if the legend was true. Is this lord really the key to ushering in a new era? If not, why would the leader of Crimson Moon help her? Suwan's words surfaced in his mind. She had said that they were friends. Either way, it was evident that the leader of Crimson Moon had chosen Yuan. The god of deception and lies decided to observe the situation for a while. He still had a little time. He could assist Yuan. After what she had displayed today, she was worth investing in. The world was changing, and it was always wise to have a way out. When Yuan returned to the city walls, she felt reverence from the troops and soldiers when they looked at her. N/O/vel/B/C/in.C//OM. Although no one understood how she had managed to kill the Lord of Greed, they had emerged victorious solely because of Yuan. They were overwhelmed with respect for her. Princess Angel looked at the heroic figure before her in admiration. Yuan had fulfilled the promise she had made. The terrifying god from the bottomless abyss was dead and gone, and all because of Yuan. Everything felt surreal. Princess Angel, Archduke Bloodfury and his gang of rebels have been eliminated. The royal family will once again have control over Tisseria Plain, said Yuan. Her voice resounded throughout Lion City. Chapter 478, Lion of Greed. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation. Angel was momentarily stunned. She glanced at the soldiers on the city walls. Respected Lord Yuan, I, Princess Angel, accept your decree. This is a great honor for me and the Tisseria Kingdom. She bowed respectfully to Yuan in front of everyone. I swear by my soul that one will protect the Tisseria Kingdom in every way one can. May the gods bless your reign. Yuan placed the silver crown on Angel's head. The impromptu coronation ceremony was simple. This coronation, although simple, had been the most impactful event in Tisseria Kingdom's history. It was a victory gained after defeating a tyrannical archduke and a god. When the crown was placed on Angel's head, everyone felt a sacred aura emanate from it. Princess Angel was now the queen of Tisseria, and Yuan had personally crowned her. The lords felt conflicted. It was a grand thing to be given the authority to crown a queen. Other than Yuan, no lord in the entire plain could manage such a feat. Angel was the first queen in the history of Tisseria Kingdom, which made the event even more remarkable. Everyone, one give you your queen. Pay your respects to Queen Angel, said Yuan. The soldiers, the lords, and the citizens all got to their feet and placed their hands on their chests in respect. They bowed their heads and hailed the queen. Your Majesty Angel, the subjects of the Tisseria Kingdom greet you humbly. Long live Queen Angel. On the city walls, which had been shattered by the assault of the Bloodhawks, all the soldiers knelt before Angel. Farilla and Leona stood at the side. They placed their hands on their chest and bowed to show their respect. Only Yuan stood shoulder to shoulder with the queen. People of the Tisseria Kingdom, please rise. Angel turned to the people. Her voice resounded with authority. The kneeling soldiers stood up slowly. They looked up at the queen in reverence. Angel couldn't help but feel overwhelmed with all the love and support. They had snatched back the Tisseria Kingdom from the hands of the traitors and the abyss. The joy she felt knew no bounds. Everyone cheered. The victory had been a matter of life and death. The fight had been for the survival of the plain itself. The war between the Tisserian royal family and Archduke Bloodfury had turned into a battle between the Tisseria Plain and the abyss. They had won in both cases. My ancestors built the Tisseria Kingdom from the ruins. The Tisserian royal family is always aware of its responsibility of safeguarding the plain and people of the Tisseria Plain. 111 serve you as best as 1 am able, said Angel with resolve in her voice. The high-ranking officials of Lion City looked at each other. Tisseria had welcomed its first queen. She was a queen born from war and bloodshed. She possessed supreme authority in the Tisseria Kingdom. From today onwards, Lord Yuan will have the status of the princess of this kingdom. She will have the authority of the king, said Angel as she was overcome with emotion. Their victory was all because of Yuan's support. Everyone revered Yuan, especially after the fall of the Lord of Greed and the Golden Lion. After Angel finished her speech, Yuan heard some notifications appear in her mind. Everyone rejoiced. The streets were filled with people celebrating the victory. The soldiers didn't stop them. Although Archduke Bloodfury was now dead, his forces still controlled some parts of the Tisseria Kingdom. Angel led a large army and began the northern expedition. She was going to get the capital back. The power and influence of Lion City were enough to dominate the entire plain. Farilla was dispatched to guard the queen. Yuan stayed back in Lion City. With the main enemy eliminated and Farilla there for protection, she didn't have to step in. The Tisseria Kingdom, with its vast territory in the Tisseria Plain, would require a considerable amount of power to convert everyone to the royal family's cause. N/O/vel/B/jn.C//OM. Yuan was currently thinking about the lion. The residual golden lion had fallen into a deep slumber after its soul was reconstructed. Its aura was surging. It might wake soon. Yuan silently watched the giant beast in the sky. The fur that covered its body was golden, and the terrifying aura kept rising. The soldiers guarding the city were anxious. The surrounding void began to twist, and waves of pressure surged out. The oppressive feeling brought about by the golden lion increased tenfold. Its mane swayed in the wind, exuding a fierce and imposing aura. Although it wasn't as huge as a dragon, its aura and might was still powerful. It instilled fear in anyone who looked upon it. The lion awakened from its long slumber and turned to look at Yuan. The soldiers trembled as it approached. They gripped their weapons tightly. In front of everyone's gaze, the lion approached Yuan. It lowered its front legs to kneel in front of Yuan. My lord. Yuan placed her thumb on the lowered head of the Lion of Greed, and her blood flowed into its body. At this moment, the soul energy of the beast was completely under her control. The lion's gaze softened. It looked at Yuan in reverence. Its enormous size and fierce aura, coupled with its adorable appearance, made Yuan smile. Yuan climbed onto its back. The Lion of Greed walked around the city walls with Yuan sitting on its back. People looked at the scene in awe and envy. Chapter 479, Special Target. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation. The lords who joined the Lion City were envious when they saw the scene. Who wouldn't want to own a golden lion? Yuan's gains from this battle made them all jealous. The lords discussing in the forum talked about the wealth that Yuan had lost after the Lord of Greed's death, but they couldn't understand that she had gained much more. Fortunately, they had chosen the right person to suck up to. Yuan opened the creature's attribute panel. Lion of Greed. Hero Unit, SSS Level. Abilities. Greed and Desire, Super A Class. Emits an aura that tempts everyone and amplifies the greed and desires within the hearts of sentient beings by 100 or 1,000 times until reason is devoured by it. Nov. L. B /JNN. Characteristics. After death, it will possess an irresistible allure to the outside world and cause enemies to develop a desire to possess its body. The Lion of Greed will parasitize the opponent's soul until it devours the opponent's soul and obtains rebirth. Notes. Born from desire and greed. It possesses a strange power that makes people tremble. The Lion of Greed didn't have abilities like Leona or Farilla. However, it could amplify the greed and desire to make an enemy go crazy and devour their souls. If faced with a direct confrontation, the lion would definitely be weaker and less efficient than Leona or Farilla. However, as a supporting ability, the lion's strength far surpassed the two combat heroes. Yuan reached out and touched the majestic mane of the Lion of Greed. Outsiders probably couldn't imagine that the lion's mane was formed from the souls devoured by greed and desire. Looking at the Lion of Greed, Yuan was in a good mood. Simba, do you know where the treasures of the Lord of Greed are hidden? Asked Yuan. The treasures of the Lord of Greed have never been disclosed to anyone. One don't know either. The Lion of Greed shook its huge head. Even under control, the abyssal language still carried a chilling aura. As a high-level language, the abyssal language had the universal feature of being understood by everyone. Nami had acted too quickly. There was no chance to dig out more information now. However, Yuan wasn't disappointed. She turned to the death swamp in the north and thought of something. The treasure was secondary. Even if she knew where the treasure was, she couldn't go get it now. The victory in this war marked the formal integration of the Tisseria Plain into her own territory. The Tisseria Plain had a large population. Its technology, economy, and resources were still intact. If they could develop it, it would undoubtedly provide tremendous benefits to the territory. Although the Lion of Greed was not a combat-type hero, if used well, its abilities could even surpass the combat-type heroes. The Lord of Greed was a mid-level god. Although his power had been taken away, the divinity in his body remained. After devouring the blood rain, the dark withered tree was only 2 steps away from becoming legendary. A complete divine body might be the opportunity for it to make that leap. Once the dark withered tree became legendary, its combat power would definitely increase exponentially. Even powerful native forces wouldn't dare to underestimate it. Moreover, Yuan had the dark demon dragon. Whether it was the soldiers who died attacking Lion City or the army that turned into demons, they all turned into food for the death swamp. Soon, the dark withered tree would be able to produce hero units. After Angel regained control of the entire Tisseria kingdom, this plane could move forward for the next step. Yuan already had some thoughts on the development of the Tisseria plane. Leona, called Yuan as she waved her hand. The hero appeared by her side. My lord. A lord is hiding in the Spire of Fate, where treasures are hidden, said Yuan. Gather the army and prepare to storm it. The remaining forces in the Tisseria plane need not be feared. Angel will handle them, said Yuan. The Spire of Fate had extraordinarily powerful guardian forces and must not be underestimated. After successfully capturing the Spire of Fate, they could return to the vampire castle. The unknown evil plane might descend at any time. If it connects with the vampire castle, there might not be enough time for them to purify their bloodline. Su Yuan stayed in the territory to guard it against any overlord that might take advantage of Yuan's absence to attack. If it wasn't necessary, Yuan would have never summoned Leona from the vampire castle. It was rare to find something that could enhance their strength without consuming any resources. However, they had to focus on storming the Spire of Fate. They had planned to rely on the military power of the Tisseria plane after winning the war, but unexpected setbacks had delayed everything. Archduke Bloodfury had squandered most of the Tisseria plane's army. They only had Angel's troops left. The situation was still delicate. Angel needed those troops to regain control of the other places which were still under the rebels. That would take very long. There was no time. As you wish. Leona left without hesitation and gathered an army. The soldiers in Lion City watched the assembled forces that were preparing to leave. They felt reluctant. Although the war was over, the military stationed around the perimeter gave them a sense of security. Yuan left Andy to guard Lion City and took a portion of the army with her. With the Void Sandworm present, they could receive immediate support in case of any accidents. After the Lord of Greed tore through the Tisseria plane, the plane's power had weakened considerably. As a result, the void sandworm was able to open and maintain a space gate for longer than usual. So, it was a blessing in disguise. They didn't need to worry too much. Chapter 480, The Change in the Gods' Attitudes. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation. Taking advantage of the gathering of the army and riding on the Golden Lion, Yuan ventured to the Death Swamp through the rift in the north of Lion City. Before attacking the Spire of Fate, Yuan had to figure something out to continue nourishing the swamp. It wasn't certain how long it would take to capture the Spire of Fate. The moment she passed through the rift, a strong smell of blood invaded her nostrils. The swamp shrouded in the blood mist appeared hazy. The ground was like bloody mud. White bones floated on it. It was a terrifying land of death. A true depiction of the abyssal purgatory. The lion's gaze became vigilant. Its tail was already up. It sensed the presence of monsters. The blood mist began to distort and gradually condensed to form a figure. The scene was chilling to the bone. The golden lion became agitated. Its extraordinary aura surged. It opened its maw. "Don't worry," said Yuan, as she stroked the mane of the lion. "This is the Death Swamp. It's my territory." The lion's tensed muscles relaxed, but it remained alert. The swirling mist revealed a middle-aged man. "Lord Yuan," said the god of deception and lies. He stared at the figure riding on the golden lion with a complicated expression. "Lord Modric, have you discovered anything on this plane?" Yuan noticed that the god's gaze was solemn. "I have discovered quite a lot of things in these few days. I just discovered a race that is very suitable for spreading beliefs." The god of deception and lies laughed lightly. "I hope to recover my power as soon as possible. If there is anything one can help with, I will do my best." Yuan looked at him meaningfully. "If possible, I am willing to take control of this swamp, on your behalf. It has tremendous potential. n/o/vel/b/c/om." Yuan immediately understood the unspoken sentiment of the god. He was extending a sort of an olive branch. Originally, Yuan had invited the god of deception and lies to conceal her presence and her territory. It was a big thing for the god of deception and lies to initiate a cooperation. Perhaps the fall of the Lord of Greed had made him more understanding. That would be best. "The future is long, and I hope that the alliance between us will continue," Yuan said. "I believe it will." The god of lies looked deeply into his eyes. The dark withered tree can bear fruits that can enhance the potential of life. This has a strong allure for any intelligent life. It can be used to lure enemies from other planes into battle here in the Death Swamp. Yuan did not dwell much on that. She focused on the main matter. Simba was born from the power of the Lord of Greed. She wanted to leave it here to assist the dark withered tree. Since Modric wanted to help manage the swamp, Yuan could entrust the swamp to him and the lion. "The divine body of the Lord of Greed is in my hands. One plan to use it to nourish the dark withered tree," Yuan said. "Lord Yuan, there is no need to warn me. Since one have decided to help you, one won't go back on my word. Moreover, we have a contract between us." The god of deception and lies chuckled. "That's for the best." Yuan didn't feel embarrassed for saying it. She urged the golden lion to walk through the spatial rift and arrived at the eternal land. Yuan first returned to her territory with the lion and anchored its soul at the hero's altar. "The enemy is still lurking and waiting to devour our territory." She briefly explained the plan to lure the enemies from the other planes to the swamp using the fruits of the dark withered tree. "My lord, your will, along with the wishes of his majesty, is my command," said the dark withered tree in a solemn tone. No one dared defy Yuan and Su Yuan. There were no rebels in the territory. The massive divine body of the dark withered tree rose from the ground. Its tangled roots writhed like the tentacles of an octopus and stirred up clouds of dust. Even though Yuan had witnessed similar scenes countless times, she couldn't help but feel deeply moved. No matter what kind of enemy it was, there was no way they could win against her forces. The semi-transparent god of deception and lies looked at the towering dark withered tree. His face changed. The power of the tree wasn't unfamiliar to him. Yuan possessed heroes that were stronger than the others. She even had gods helping her. The Lord had been in the main plane for less than a year and had achieved such greatness. It was a remarkable thing to have achieved such a feat in just half a year. Even as a god, he found it shocking. Yuan didn't seem like she ever made a move directly, but the ancient gods did their part to help her and protect her. That was the reason why the god of deception and lies had bowed to her. Unaware of his thoughts, Yuan transferred the dark withered tree to the center of the swamp. Under the concealment of the god of deception and lies, no outsiders could set foot in this area. A few distances away, the sound of battle rang out. "Settle here," said Yuan. Following her command, the dark withered tree halted, and its entangled roots burrowed into the depths of the swamp. The dark withered tree gradually descended, firmly rooting itself in the ground. The terrifying giant tree swayed in the sky. The withered branches resembled twisted hands of corpses, and blood-red veins circulated within the cracks of the bark. Combined with the frightening face of the gnarled trunk, the whole thing looked terrifying. The dark withered tree was a perfect match for the death swamp. Yuan felt that placing the dark withered tree in the desert would be a waste. This was where the tree truly belonged. Chapter 481, Irresistible Temptation. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation. When he calmed down, his long robe puffed up, and his bloated body appeared in the void. The surrounding aura became restless with the appearance of the corpse. The space began to fluctuate. The freshly rooted dark withered tree sensed a different aura. Its distorted face stared straight at the sky, and it felt a strong power surging within it. It realized that it would gain tremendous power after devouring the divine corpse. "This is the corpse of the Lord of Greed," said Yuan. "Bestow it on you." The Lord of Greed's divine corpse fell right in front of the dark withered tree. The dark withered tree was joyful. The roots pulled and submerged the divine corpse in the swamp. The aura of the dark withered tree began to rise rapidly. Golden fruits appeared on the branches of the tree. The fruit formed by the soul power of the dark withered tree could enhance one's life force. It had a strong allure to everything living on the land. The dark withered tree lured countless beings toward the fruits, only to get them killed. The golden fruits produced by the dark withered tree were more tempting than before. As the fruits grew, the irresistible temptation to pluck it became more intense. The god of deception and lies didn't hesitate. His body shimmered with faint energy. The aura became heightened and spread in all directions. The creatures still battling within the blood mist instinctively looked toward the dark withered tree. The smell of the fruit was too strong. Their souls craved it. For ordinary creatures, they had no other basal desire than to become stronger. The golden fruits produced by the dark withered tree affected their desires and heightened it. The creatures fighting in the blood mist had their desires awakened, and they became restless. Many soldiers even abandoned the battle and retreated. They searched for the fruit that their very souls longed for. However, the blood mist obstructed their vision, and they could only smell the fruits. They couldn't find the fruits anywhere. They became more and more restless. Yuan was the master of the death swamp. The blood mist blurred the outsider's vision and perception, but for her, it made her perception sharper. With the help of the blood mist, she could sense the movements in the entire swamp. The troops from other planes had already begun to wander around aimlessly. The lion of greed let out a roar. Golden power surged out from its fur and swept toward the surroundings like a shockwave. In the blink of an eye, it covered the entire swamp. The creatures became alert. They looked greedy and impatient. They were unwilling to share what they sensed with even their companions. Everyone was filled with vigilance and hatred. Through the dense blood mist, the creatures saw the golden fruits hanging on the withered branches. The creatures who saw it trembled in excitement. They looked ecstatic. Their souls became restless as if they had caught a whiff of the scent of immortality. The creatures looked bewitched. They swarmed toward the fruits. As they approached nearer, the yearning grew intense. The Taurens gripped their battle axes tightly as they watched a lizard folk being beheaded by someone ahead. The attention of the lizard folk was focused on the fruits completely. As it fell, its blood and entrails splattered everywhere. Those fruits belonged to the Taurens. The lizard folks were enraged to see their companion fall. The Taurens had killed their people? The lizard folks charged at the Taurens in rage. They wielded their battle axes and launched a united attack. A battle erupted in the chaos. Tens and thousands of troops gathered and fought. Their rationality had been completely consumed by greed. As they looked at the golden fruits swaying in the blood mist, the entire swamp descended into madness. N/O/vel/B/jn.C//OM. Within the swamp, a battle 10 times fiercer than before broke out. There seemed to be no possibility of things settling down for quite a while. Time passed, and within less than 2 hours of the appearance of the golden fruits, corpses filled the swamp. The bodies that fell in the swamp were more than the rate at which the swamp could devour them. As the war escalated, every creature coveted the golden fruits. Many higher-level creatures sent people to investigate. Those who examined the area indeed found faint golden fruits in the blood mist. The unique aura made it impossible for them to divert their eyes away from the branches. After the confirmation, the rulers of the plains rushed into the death swamp to get the fruits for themselves. When they saw the fruits, they fell into madness. No one was able to withstand the temptation of the golden fruits. Their desires erupted and devoured their rationality. More and more troops began to emerge from different planes. They all headed toward the golden fruits. They had only one goal, and that was to own the fruits. A bloody and cruel battle erupted in the swamp. The number of fallen bodies in the swamp was impossible to keep count. The higher-level heroes of the plains personally led their armies into battle. However, what concerned them was that no matter how long they looked, they couldn't find the fruits at all. Their greedy desires dissipated slightly in the face of the countless bodies scattered around the swamp. The battle began to slow down. The loss of lives was evident. It was all a waste. Just when everyone began to calm down, the golden fruits revealed themselves. It was as though the fruits were growing rapidly in front of their very eyes. It attracted the attention of many people and reignited the conflict. The desire to possess those fruits was extreme. As the conflict reached its peak, a ripe golden fruit fell quietly from the branch into the blood mist. Everyone in the swamp was wide-eyed. The fighting came to a standstill for a moment. They struggled to make sense of it. They couldn't even see the fruits properly. Everything felt surreal. If they couldn't even see it properly, was it really worth fighting for? Chapter 482, Brutal Slaughter. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation. Suddenly, the sky was illuminated by a golden light. The light pierced through the bloody mist and illuminated the entire swamp. Everyone instinctively looked up. Ripe, golden fruits fell from the sky. They fell directly into the center of the battlefield. All doubts vanished. Desire surged in their hearts once more. When the golden fruits matured, they didn't disappear but fell into the swamp. The soldiers rushed toward the area where the golden fruits were falling. Everything turned chaotic. The soldiers fought among themselves. Blood flowed like a river. Corpses covered the swamp. The Taurens were the first to lay their hands on the golden fruits, but they were wiped out by the Harpies in minutes. Before the Harpies could rejoice, the orcs overwhelmed them. No creature could hold on to the fruits for long. The fruits were passed from hand to hand depending on who won at that moment. Finally, the golden fruits found their new owner. The lizard folk snatched the fruits and swallowed them. The soldiers who failed to obtain the golden fruits went crazy. Those who were still hesitant immediately dispatched their forces to the location where the golden fruits had fallen. At the same time, many flying troops flew into the air and tried to find the tree that bore the fruits. However, no matter how fast they flew, they couldn't find the fruit. As the battle raged, the fruits matured on the tree at a rapid pace. N/O/vel/B/jn.C//OM. The Taurens dispatched numerous armies and mercilessly slaughtered those standing in their way. They wanted to claim the fruits for themselves. The soldiers from other planes became frantic when they saw this. The golden fruits matured every few hours. Everyone coveted the fruits and was willing to kill for them. The soldiers of a plane that had tasted the golden fruits did not withdraw. They became even more maniacal. Their greed knew no bounds. The high-level rulers of the planes realized that they couldn't find the golden fruits anywhere else. No matter which plane they searched, they didn't find anything like it. As the number of casualties increased, the fruits increased in number and were also maturing faster. It seemed the growth of the fruits was fueled by flesh and blood from the corpses that fell into the swamp. Perhaps the death swamp was the origin of the fruits. It made sense why they weren't found anywhere else. The area where the fruits fell became a hotspot for slaughter. Whenever a fruit matured, it would fall in the same area. As the puppet master behind the screen, Yuan's smile brightened as she watched the chaotic scene. Although she knew that this plan would work, she hadn't expected such efficiency. The results were astonishing. Under the influence of insatiable greed, reason was stifled. Every soldier had only one desire, and that was to get to the fruits. Sometimes, a plane that was reluctant to participate in the fight would gain access to the fruits. When that happened, they threw caution to the wind and waded through the swamp. That made the battle even more frantic. When the fruits were consumed by the troops, their planes deployed additional forces to get more fruits. Thus, more soldiers fell and more fruits grew on the tree. The higher-level heroes of the planes let their troops fight. They had no qualms about sending them into battle to die and nourish the growth of the fruit. Modric, the situation is stable now. I leave everything here to you, said Yuan. She watched the soldiers from different planes fight among themselves and felt at ease. As long as the fight went on, the fruits would continue to grow and attract more planes to send more troops. Yuan didn't have time to stay in the swamp. She and the troops had yet to conquer the Spire of Fate. A special life from nurtured by the Death Swamp is about to be born, said the god of deception and lies. He looked into the distance. A distinct aura surged from the swamp, and the corrupted blood spheres buried in the muddy water floated up. The corrupted blood spheres expanded dramatically. They appeared twisted and eerie, like eggs spawned by some evil creature. Blood tendrils pulled the blood spheres, and they swayed in the air. The tendrils continuously fed the spheres with energy. The sound of heartbeats resonated in the surroundings. It was strong and powerful, like the beating of a drum. Suddenly, the blood spheres burst open, and blood splattered in all directions. Blood-soaked figures fell into the bloody mud of the swamp. Their lower bodies were covered in snake-like, blood-colored scales. Twisted symbols coiled around their palm-sized scales. Their bodies exuded an overwhelming sense of power. Behind their necks grew ferocious spikes that extended all the way to their tails. Their faces were extremely terrifying. They resembled a person who had been beaten and tortured until they were bloody. The bloody life forms bent down and extended their right hand into the swamp. A vast amount of blood-red energy quickly gathered around it. Broken bones and flesh flowed towards it. This weapon, condensed from blood, decayed flesh, and bones, was filled with horrifying ruthlessness. Combined with its monstrous appearance, it looked like an ancient, ferocious beast. Spear of Vengeance, Krista. Hero Unit, S-Class. The creature is indestructible. After death, it can be resurrected using the power of the Death Swamp. Its level and potential will increase with the strength of the swamp and decrease with its weakening. While in the Death Swamp, it can mobilize the swamp's power to heal any injuries while temporarily enhancing the blood slaughterers under your command or healing its subordinates. Note, an evil hero born from blood and corpses, ruthless and insane. Its existence has only one purpose: slaughter. Yuan nodded in satisfaction as she read the new hero's attributes. Although it couldn't compare to legendary beings like the Lion of Greed, its attributes were still remarkable. Besides, the level and potential of the troop type could increase with the advancement of the swamp. The soldiers of the other planes showed no sign of stopping. They were still under the influence of the golden fruits. They fought and killed. If they kept this up, the Death Swamp could be upgraded in no time at all. However, what made Yuan hesitate was that among more than 20 planes, the majority were microplanes, 1/3 were small-sized planes, and there were only 5 medium-sized planes. With the advancement of the swamp, the number of bodies and souls required for the next upgrade would be astronomical. If they continued with this level of slaughter, several planes might not be enough to meet its upgrade requirements. If the plan worked smoothly, they planned to expand the battlefield and spread information about the golden fruits to other planes. Yuan wanted more soldiers from various planes to participate in this bloodshed. Chapter 483, Journey to the Spire of Fate N/O/vel/B/in.C//OM. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation. Yuan didn't turn around to look at the blood mist. She headed straight for Lion City. Her troops had been waiting for her in the square for almost a day. However, undead creatures didn't understand the concept of time. They didn't care whether they waited an hour or a day. Their lives had been given a purpose, and they were willing to fulfill it. When they sensed Yuan's familiar aura, their soul fire flickered. Yuan contacted Yuan, who was resting in the dark castle. The dark demon dragon had rested for a long time while Yuan worked tirelessly. Yuan was enjoying the comforts of spending his time alone at home. Yuan felt dissatisfied. Yuan's support was crucial for her to storm the Spire of Fate. She knew that the unknown place would be rife with dangers, and she needed Yuan with her. Yuan rushed over to Yuan through the spatial rift. Yuan and Yuan looked at the troops gathered in the square. "My lord and your majesty Yuan, the army is prepared and awaiting your orders," said Leona. "Where is the lord?" "He is currently helping with the reconstruction of Lion City. Our people have been closely watching over him and the other lords. Bring them to me." Not long after, the lords, who had recently joined the plane, walked over nervously. Su Gang was fearful as he watched Yuan and the massive dark demon dragon. Even though they were lords and had cooperated before, Su Gang was aware of the gap in strength between him and Yuan. "Great Lord Yuan." He bowed. "I am ready to storm the Spire of Fate. Do you have any problems with it?" "No problem at all." The lords didn't dare mention it even if they had a problem. Who could defy Yuan? "Then let's depart." Yuan rode on Yuan's back. It was a completely new experience flying over the Tisseria plain. The biting cold made everything chilly. Every area was either frozen or covered in frost. The ground shimmered and sparkled. According to the map, the Spire of Fate was located near the capital of the Tisseria plain. With the elimination of Archduke Blood Fury, the major threat was removed. It would take at least 2 months for Angel to integrate the different parts of the Tisseria plain and unify them. The troops flew at a rapid pace and traversed the vast land in the blink of an eye. When they flew over towns, they could sense the emptiness. There were only a few people to be seen. Blood stained everything in sight. Most of them had dried. The faint smell of blood in the air seemed to tell the tale of the tragedy that happened a few days ago. The massacre of the Tisseria Plains residents by Archduke Blood Fury was even more brutal than they had imagined. The population had decreased significantly. They deliberately took a detour around the other towns. The damage was far greater than what Angel had mentioned. More than 1 million people had been slaughtered by the Archduke. In some of the towns, they couldn't even see one human being on the streets. The whole place was desolate. Yuan was infuriated. She had taken the Tisseria plain under her wing. The people living in it were her subjects now. Such damage was bad for the morale of the territory. She turned to look in the direction that had yet to be explored. "We suffered significant losses this time. I hope the Archduke left behind at least something of use. Otherwise, the benefits from occupying this plain won't be much." After Angel regained control of the Tisseria plain, there would be benefits. For now, there was no choice but to focus on the Spire of Fate. After several hours of flying, the troops reached the marked location on the map. Yuan observed the place and felt that something was strange about the space ahead. Perhaps it was because the power of space had diminished and the Spire of Fate was more prominent now. Even the naked eye could see that the light in that area was slightly distorted as if covered by a thin veil. "My lord, this space is extremely dangerous," Leona warned. "Why do you say that?" Yuan asked. "In areas with chaotic rules, it is easy to conceal oneself with various hidden magic formations. The Spire of Fate is located at a space collapse point, although it is not very noticeable in the main plane," Leona explained. Yuan nodded. "A space collapse point. The entrance to the tower is on the side. We cannot enter from here," a lord said. Yuan looked at an area and frowned slightly. There was an intense spatial fluctuation, but compared to the entire area, it was extremely small. Even the red-eyed black dragon couldn't fly into it if he spread his wings wide. If they wanted to enter the spire, they needed to go through the side entrance. "Leona, reveal the concealed space ahead," Yuan said as she pointed to the area with a strange fluctuation. Leona disappeared into thin air. Suddenly, radiant moonlight shone in the sky and converged on the area with spatial fluctuation. Cracks appeared in the space and spread rapidly in all directions. The hazy space shattered. Fragments of space floated around like glass and were scattered in all directions. After the fragments merged into the water-like area, the previously hazy region became clear. In the dim sky, a tower-like structure over 50 meters high stood on the ground amidst low hills and ridges. It looked ancient. The pointed top of the tower pierced into the sky. It was truly breathtaking. Chapter 484, A Opportunity to Create Gods. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation. The tower's body was engraved with countless magical inscriptions, each shimmering with powerful magic that made people tremble with fear. At the bottom of the tall tower, there was a large gate. The other areas were constructed with special stones, devoid of windows or door frames as decorations, as if they weren't meant for habitation. Yuan knew that capturing it would yield rich rewards. Unable to contain her excitement, Yuan opened the attribute panel. It was completely blank. She used the true eye of the demon dragon to finally see some information about the Spire of Fate. Spire of Fate. Special structure. Note, each spire is a Reich from the ancient era. It hides peculiar treasures within. Some special spires may hide some ancient rules. The possibility of ancient rules being hidden within intrigued Yuan. Could something like this be possible? Rules were the power of the gods? The power of greed, decay, and deception all came from ancient rules. The fact that the Spire of Fate might hide ancient rules meant that there was a possibility of becoming a god? If that was true, then gods could be created and recruited? The more Yuan thought about it, the more astonishing it all seemed. The gods wielded supreme power in this world. How would they react to such news? It could be foreseen that the Spire would become a source of turmoil for plain explorers. However, the information wasn't public yet. Only Yuan knew about it. This information carried immense value and was filled with opportunities. Outsiders who didn't have an incredibly powerful initial hero like her didn't know the details of the Spire of Fate because they didn't have the true eye of the demon dragon ability. However, more and more natives and lords would learn about it soon enough as they explored the plains. The Spire of Fate and other similar places would be captured one by one. A war would definitely erupt among the lords and troops to own the spires. n/o/vel/b/in.c//om. Yuan's gaze was determined. Before everything became public, she needed to capture as many spires as possible. No one could resist the temptation of ancient rules. As Yuan stared at the spire, she was lost in contemplation of the possible turmoil that lay ahead. A heavy footstep reverberated around her. Yuan turned to look. She saw many ferocious creatures emerging from the open stone door at the base of the rower. These creatures were over 4 meters tall and had fierce dragon heads that exhaled long streams of mist. Their bodies were protected by palm-sized gray scales, and their muscles bulged. They carried heavy war hammers capable of easily smashing through a heavy shield. Half-dragons. The lord beside Yuan exclaimed as he looked at the troops that had just arrived. The fear in his eyes was palpable. Half-dragons are dragon descendants, incredibly powerful in combat, and highly resistant to magic. He hurriedly explained. All these units were at level 69, and their strength would increase substantially when fighting around the spire. And leading the army was a transcendent dragon descendant. He turned to Yuan in excitement but saw that Yuan was as calm as ever. He realized that he had nothing to be anxious about as long as Yuan was here. Moreover, she had a dark demon dragon with her. The transcendent dragon descendant was nothing compared to it. Even the demon units had turned to ash. He turned to look at his companions. They were all looking at Yuan strangely. Who would have thought that they would cling to this powerful lord so loyally in just a few days? Lord Yuan, one know your power is enough, but you must still be careful, said the lord softly. I understand. Do you have any other information? Yuan asked. After thinking for a moment, the lord shook his head. He had only met the half-dragons once and didn't know much about them or RHE Spire of Fate. According to what you said before, there are at least 3 nests of transcendent units inside this spire. How did you find that out? Yuan asked. Lord Yuan, Ting Ting is a prophetic warlock. She can see fragments of the future, said RHE Lord as he looked at the female lord beside him. She saw 3 nests of powerful units with an overwhelming aura, not much different from the transcendent units we sensed in the city before. Yuan looked at the lord, who was supposed to be a prophetic warlock. Her ability sounded impressive. The hodgepodge of equipment they wore was somewhat amusing. The ability wasn't weak, but the one wielding that ability wasn't very strong. Having a powerful ability was useless if the lord was too powerless to change anything. Yuan gazed at the spire. Klitos, go and see how strong those half-dragons are. Although the distorted space on the outside had been broken through, no transcendent beings had appeared so far. Klitos hadn't had a chance to complete his upgrade yet. Yuan had brought him along to give him another chance. I will follow your orders. The Dark Soul Devourer urged RHE Red-Eyed Black Dragon to fly to the spire. With a flap of its wings, the red-eyed black dragon covered a mile of land. However, when the dragon reached the spire, his wings stopped working, and he plummeted downward. The red-eyed black dragon flapped his wings to stabilize himself. No matter how much he flapped his wings, he couldn't stay afloat. The dragon's massive body crashed heavily onto the ground. When the dragon landed, Klitos pushed down with his feet and jumped upward. The huge crash caused the surface of the ground to tremble. His feet had sunk into the ground. Spatial suppression. Yuan frowned. Klitos' one face was injured. He felt humiliated. He had made a complete fool of himself in front of Lord Yuan. A dangerous light flickered in his small eyes as he gripped his warhammer tightly. His gaze was fixed on RHE half-dragons ahead. He would bring them down? Chapter 485, A Violent Battle n/o/vel/b/jn.c//om. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation. His body was gigantic and was constructed from rocks. He exuded immense strength. Anyone who looked upon him trembled with fear. A low growl emanated from his throat as a dark radiance surged out from within and condensed into a ferocious figure by his side. They were the servants of darkness. The spirit of the spire was as strong as a giant. It was more than 8 meters tall. It made Klitos look shorter than a beast. Klitos' gaze was determined as he raised his hammer. The ferocious beast seemed to be stretched to the extreme, ready to burst forth with astonishing speed. It charged toward the dark servants. The ground rumbled with the impact. The thousands of half-dragon guards at the top of the Spire of Fate stood their ground. When the Dark Soul Devourer charged, several lords watched in excitement. Although they had witnessed the hero beheading the Lord of the Mountain before, they were still shaken by his majestic might. Compared to him, the heroes they had sworn allegiance to were simply trash. They were not even comparable to Sowan's lowest subordinate. The lords were excited and ashamed at the same time. They turned to look at the figure standing beside them. Although they were also overlords, they felt small when compared to Sowan. They just felt fortunate that they weren't enemies. It only took a few moments for Klitos to traverse the distance and reach the Servants of the Dark. The two sides collided fiercely. Kill. Klitos crashed into the half-dragon army. The half-dragon at the very front showed no fear. His dragon bloodline bestowed immense power on him, and no enemy could break through his defense. Swinging the warhammer in his hand, he intended to collide head-on with the enemy charging toward it. The metallic clash reverberated. The half-dragon felt as if he had been struck by an ancient, ferocious beast. The sturdy warhammer in his hand shattered, followed by a sharp pain in his chest. He felt himself flying high into the air, with the world spinning around him. Blood splattered and limbs flew everywhere. His arm, tightly gripping the warhammer, was severed. His consciousness slipped away. After crushing the half-dragon, Klitos entered a frenzied state and swung his warhammer once again. His body, constructed from rocks, was sturdy and strong enough to shake mountains. He had the ability to constantly restore his strength as he stood on the ground. Together with the dark servants behind him, the fight was like a sword cutting through solid grease. All obstacles shattered under the hammer's strikes, as they recklessly harvested the souls of the half-dragons. The lords watched nervously. Their hearts raced. Compared to Sowan's effortless killing of the Lord of Greed, Klitos' actions were more in line with most people's perception of how a powerful individual would act. No one could stop that ferocious beast. The terrifying legion of half-dragons, who were almost invincible in their eyes, couldn't obstruct him for even a second. Although they were mentally prepared, they still couldn't imagine that such a scene would unfold right from the beginning of the collision. With his own strength alone, this hero was about to break through the half-dragon army? The hero was simply as monstrous as a lord? During the battle to save Lion City, everyone felt that Sowan hadn't really unleashed her full power. They truly couldn't imagine the devastation she could cause if she went all out. Several lords were filled with conflicting emotions. Klitos, accompanied by the Dark Servants, slaughtered his way to the center of the half-dragon army. Wherever they went, only blood and dismembered limbs remained. Countless soldiers were crushed. The half-dragons finally reacted. Klitos gradually slowed down. The army began to encircle and use a swarm tactic to trap him. Being surrounded and trapped would reduce the damage that Klitos could cause. At this moment, Klitos firmly planted his feet on the ground. He seemed even more determined and ferocious than before. With the warhammer in his hand, any half-dragon in front of him who dared to resist would be smashed to death. The half-dragons, who were known for their immense strength, were suddenly overpowered. Klitos was stronger than an ordinary hero. He was an S-class hero. It would require 5 or 10 times the strength of an ordinary person to bring him down. The half-dragons were confronting the Dark Soul Devourer head-on without any heroes at their command. So, it was not surprising that they were crushed in this fight. Several lords watched with envy. They saw Sowan wave her hand casually. Klitos, don't waste your time, said Sowan. Go and kill your way into the Spire of Fate. The lords were even more envious and a bit frustrated. Klitos was a formidable hero. How could he be used for something like this? It felt as though a formidable hero wasn't given the respect he deserved and was being used as a common tool. Klitos obeyed without hesitation. He led the Servants of Darkness and charged. They penetrated the army of half-dragons and entered the Spire of Fate. Sowan could send her hero to scout and clear the way without having to worry about whether her hero would be killed. She had too many powerful heroes. The other lords felt embarrassed because they didn't have strong heroes to offer help with the operation. Klitos was like a wrecking ball. He entered the Spire of Fate, knocking enemies left and right. Klitos swung the weapon in his hand. The warhammer struck the ground fiercely, leaving behind a long mark. As Klitos landed on the ground, his gaze fixed on the wide-open gate of the Spire of Fate. He gripped the warhammer tightly. His muscles bulged, and his aura reached its pinnacle. His tensed body was like a drawn bow. It was taut and ready to leap and attack. The sound of footsteps resonated through the earth, and the surrounding space seemed to solidify. The ground rumbled with each step. Chapter 486, A Battle to Death. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation. At the moment when the footsteps sounded, the fearless half-dragon beings all dropped to their knees and bowed their heads. They waited for the arrival of their masters. A half-dragon emerged from the stone gate of the spire. The half-dragon possessed a fiery red dragon head and had miniature dragon wings on its back. It held no weapons in its hands, but the metallic sheen reflecting from its sharp claws was enough for it to fight with. As it stood at the entrance of the stone gate, the surrounding space began to distort, as if a plastic sheet was being crushed under a heavy burden. Everyone's breathing became rapid, and their hearts raced. The lords recalled their previous encounters with the creature, and their legs went weak. If not for the support of their comrades, they might have wet their pants in fear. Klitos, the transcendent dragon descendant is yours. He is your prey, said Sowan. The lords turned to look at Sowan and widened their eyes in disbelief. Was she going to let Klitos face the transcendent dragon descendant alone? Although they knew that Sowan had numerous heroes at her disposal, they couldn't help but feel that this hero wasn't being cherished as he should be. This was a top-tier hero capable of single-handedly facing thousands of enemies? And now, Sowan was letting this hero go into battle alone. The lords felt indignant. The lords were unaware of Klito's need to hunt monsters to upgrade his level. They only saw Yuan instruct him to fight alone but didn't know the reason behind it. The difference in combat power was like heaven and earth. The lords didn't even doubt that Klito's would be more than enough for the task. They had seen his capability before. If it were anyone else, they couldn't fight against a transcendent dragon descendant no matter how much they tried. The one giving the command was Yuan. She was the strongest lord present. The one who personally beheaded a god in front of millions of viewers? She was the slayer of gods. Klito's looked at the transcendent dragon descendant in front of him. He tightened his grip on the warhammer. His aura was fierce, and his eyes flickered with an infinite radiance. He had been waiting for this day for far too long. His soul was a gift from the Lord. Only by leveling up and becoming stronger could he become the sharpest weapon in the Lord's arsenal. Klito's let out a low roar, and a dark and raging energy burst forth. N/O/vel/b/in.c//om. The energy erupted in all directions. It was impactful enough to shatter rocks. The air became murky, and the light dimmed suddenly. The ferocious dark energy quickly condensed into ravens with a corrupt aura. Eerie screams echoed. The half-dragons felt relieved. Their bodies were protected by dragon scales, and the flowing dragon blood gave them a high resistance to magic. The crows couldn't harm them even if they tried. Just as the thought arose, a chilling sensation passed through their bodies. They felt their minds being torn apart by a massive hand. Their faces contorted in pain. They let out hysterical roars, as if they were enduring the cruelest torture in the world. More black crows surged into their bodies. The half-dragon convulsed uncontrollably, and they felt an intense pain in their minds, devouring them from the inside. Their thoughts dulled, and their eyes sank into darkness. Over a dozen crows flew out from their bodies amidst piercing screams. Their fur became glossy, and they exuded a chilling aura that almost froze the air. Detaching from the bodies of the half-dragons, they flapped their wings and flew toward their next target. Soul-devouring storm summons the soul-devouring crows and forms a storm of death that inflicts massive damage to the enemy's souls. After devouring the enemy's souls, the soul-devouring crows continue to exist and grow stronger. This was the most effective AoE skill. The death of the first half-dragons was a turning point. 3,000 soul-devouring crows instantly stirred up a storm of death. The half-dragon troops were slaughtered in an instant. The transcendent dragon descendant's face darkened. Such insignificant tricks, and yet you dare to intrude upon our sacred land. He stared fixedly at the hero who had caused the storm. The moment his words fell, everyone's hearts pounded as if an ancient beast had appeared. The oppressive aura pervading the heavens and earth made the air feel like liquid mercury. The energy quickly covered the battlefield. The soul-devouring crows, who were shamelessly devouring the half-dragon monster's souls, were like birds dropped in honey. They were stuck. They couldn't fly, no matter how much they flapped their wings. The transcendent dragon descendant raised his head. He watched with disdain and hatred. The sharp claws rubbed against each other, and the frenzied soul-devouring crows shattered like glass. They turned into pure energy. The lords were suddenly filled with anxiety. They had thought the hero would turn the tide with the crow storm, but they didn't expect such a powerful move to be effortlessly destroyed by the transcendent dragon descendant. Klito's felt the contempt from the transcendent dragon descendant, and his eyes narrowed into slits. The killing intent that gathered around him caused ripples in space. Energy surged out of his body and condensed into a phantom outside his physical form. The emitted aura immediately made people perceive the origin of the phantom, the soul. Several lords were perturbed. They couldn't understand how Klito's soul suddenly appeared on the surface of his body. The soul suddenly ignited as though doused in gasoline. The gloomy soul burned with a deep blue flame. They could even see black smoke rising from the flame's tail. The hero was burning his own soul. The lords widened their eyes in disbelief. Chapter 487, The Hunt Begins. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation. The soul is the most important thing within a living being, and any damage to it is considered severe. The hero voluntarily ignited his own soul. The lords wondered why he would do such a thing. Lord Yuan, shouldn't we stop your hero? A lord asked. I never take back my orders. After the war is over, Klito's will return to me carrying the head of the transcendent. Yuan observed the battlefield. Upon hearing this, the lord refrained from saying anything. He looked conflicted. The lords had participated in this battle but weren't aware of Yuan's intentions. When Klito's soul began to burn, his aura surged dramatically. Distortions appeared in the surrounding space, and the released pressure was no less than that of the transcendent dragon descendant standing before them. Soul ignition. By burning the soul, one can unleash 10 times the power. During the burning of the soul, the power can be converted into the power of darkness. When the power of the soul is depleted, death is certain. This was Klito's last resort. Some of the lords understood that if Klito's burned all his soul up, he would die. His body, which was made of rocks, swelled up, and the gray veins on it writhed like small snakes. The surrounding space was compressed to the point where outsiders couldn't even see its appearance clearly. Half-blood hybrid, your soul will become the ladder for me to reach higher levels. Feeling the erupting power inside him erupt like magma, Klito's tightened his grip on his warhammer and stared at the transcendent dragon descendant before him. The earth burst open, and web-like cracks spread. Waves of air rose and caused sonic booms all around. The place where the transcendent dragon descendant stood exploded, and a terrifying shockwave swept in all directions, covering the sky in a cloud of dust. The explosion resounded through the air. The place where the Transcendent Dragon Descendant was the center of the storm. Due to the thinning of the plane's power, a transcendent level force could tear through the void. The space between the two collapsed, and the surroundings became completely obscured. Only the terrifying shockwaves and the crumbling earth could be seen. Klitos confronted the Transcendent Dragon Descendant fiercely. Due to the space restrictions around the spire, the Transcendent Dragon Descendant couldn't take flight and had no choice but to engage in a battle with Klitos. Klitos had the advantage of close-range combat. The lords couldn't help but worry. They didn't dare ask Yuan about it and instead discussed it among themselves. Yuan ignored them and watched the intense clash on the battlefield. Leona, infiltrate the void and assist Klitos secretly. Remember, even if Klitos falls in battle, don't kill the Transcendent Dragon Descendant. Leona obeyed. She created illusions to trick the opponent and give Klitos an advantage in the fight. For Klitos to advance to a new level, he needed to win. n/o/vel/b/in.c//om. If Leona were to make a move, her power would surely reach an unprecedented level. However, Klitos wouldn't be able to upgrade himself. Even if the Transcendent Dragon Descendant detected Leona's presence, it would probably think Klitos was being used as bait for the legendary hero. That was what Yuan wanted. If the opponent believed that Klitos was bait, it wouldn't give much importance to Klitos as opposed to Leona. Leona disappeared from Yuan's side. The Transcendent Dragon Descendant sensed the subtle shift in the aura. If it weren't for its heightened perception, he wouldn't have been able to detect it. That aura brought forth an indescribable sense of danger. There was a formidable enemy hidden in the shadows who was capable of posing a real threat to him. Its gaze was filled with shock and anger. Is that D*MN reptile just a decoy? The Transcendent Dragon Descendant was wary. It retracted some of its power and prepared to defend itself from a new enemy's ambush. However, the situation suddenly took a different turn. The Transcendent Dragon Descendant hesitated and didn't dare fully unleash its power. On the other hand, Klitos was burning his soul and sacrificing it to gain power. This was not an unusual move for a creature of darkness. Klitos, born as an abyssal high-ranking demon, the devourer of souls, was the purest form of darkness. Burning his soul allowed him to obtain power beyond limits. As the battle intensified, his power surged. Every swing of Klitos's war hammer had enough power to flatten a mountain. The Transcendent Dragon Descendant's face darkened. He could sense another aura. He knew that the new enemy was even more dangerous. The unknown was the most terrifying thing of all. The Transcendent Dragon Descendant didn't dare unleash its full power. It assumed that the new enemy would attack it at any moment. On the other hand, Klitos gave it his all. He only had one shot. When his soul burned out fully, he would die. With each swing of his war hammer, he used all his might and launched continuous attacks. The earth had already cracked open. The aftermath of their battle was terrifying. It was like a natural disaster. The remaining half-dragons didn't dare approach. The lords trembled. The two powers collided in the center and shook everything. They had anticipated that the Transcendent Dragon Descendant would be powerful, but they had never expected Klitos to hold his own. The fight was evenly matched. However, the half-dragons, who moved away from the battlefield, quickly recovered from their injuries. Their deceased companions had disappeared without a trace from the ground where they had fallen. Did the half-dragons have the ability to resurrect after a fall? Doubts rose in their hearts. The half-dragons wondered whether the Transcendent Dragon Descendant could handle this matter. Yuan also noticed the half-dragons. After a moment, she breathed a sigh of relief. With the Transcendent present, it was evident that the power of the Guardians of the Spire was not weak. It was due to the presence of the ancient rules that they were being restricted. Chapter 488, An Invisible Threat. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation. If they could constantly resurrect, then the defensive power of the Spire would be formidable. The worries about whether there were other hidden forces inside the tower dissipated. Resurrection was troublesome sometimes. However, at this moment, those resurrected half-dragons dared not interfere in the battle between Klitos and the Transcendent Dragon Descendant. The clash between these two top-tier beings was too terrifying. The Transcendent Dragon Descendant dared not unleash all of his power to kill Klitos because he couldn't determine the whereabouts of the hidden enemy. Using his power to fight Klitos would expose him to the hidden enemy. As he watched Klitos's soul burn, an idea formed in his mind. He could always drag out the battle. Currently, even though the Transcendent Dragon Descendant was lurking in the shadows, he was in control. Klitos was burning anyway. If he dragged out the fight, his soul would burn out and he would die. By then, the hidden opponent might come out of the shadows. Without Klitos there, the hidden opponent would definitely reveal themselves. n/o/vel/b/in.c//om. With a plan in mind, the Transcendent Dragon Descendant slowed down his offense and focused more on defense. He relinquished control over the battlefield. As the opponent retreated, Klitos pressed forward, wielding his war hammer and unleashing a disruptive energy that stirred heaven and earth. His ferocious posture made even the Transcendent Dragon Descendant feel overwhelmed. He began to utilize his speed advantage. He moved around and dodged direct attacks while remaining vigilant of his surroundings. Klitos, in a state of frenzy, became increasingly brutal in his attacks. Each strike could cause the void to collapse and distort space itself. If hit, the damage received was no less than what the Transcendent Dragon Descendant could dish out. The pressure on the Transcendent Dragon Descendant skyrocketed. Originally, he planned to exhaust Klitos' soul and let him burn out and die. But as he looked at the soul that hadn't even burned a fifth of the hole, he felt both shocked and furious. The opponent had unleashed extraordinary power and was fighting against him. Such a massive attack, and yet the soul power had not been depleted by even 1/5. D***mn. How powerful is this monster's soul power? Even the power contained within his own soul might not surpass the opponent's? The natives couldn't see the opponent's attribute panel like the lords and heroes did. So, the transcendent dragon descendant had no idea what kind of monster he was facing. Eternal body, all attributes increased by 300%. All attributes increased by 600% when standing on the ground. All damage received can be recovered by devouring rocks. Immune to poison, curses, instant death skills, and magic. This ability was Klito's source of confidence, especially in close-range combat. However, the thing that gave him the most power was another skill, Soul Devourer. Soul Devourer, beyond A class. Able to devour the soul of an enemy to strengthen one's own soul and increase the storage limit of the power of darkness. Current increase, 150,000. Soul Devour was a skill that enhanced one's own soul by devouring the enemy's soul power. It endlessly increased Klito's potential. To upgrade his level, Klito's had prepared for 2 whole months. Yuan had sent him to guard the plane during this time. He had slaughtered countless enemies. A few days ago, when Yuan checked Klito's attributes, she was shocked to see the panel empowered by the power of darkness. Klito's soul was more than 10 times stronger than when he was born in her territory. The refinement of his soul was even comparable to that of Leona, the vampire duke. The Dark Soul Devourer had the capability and ability to face the fundamental power of the transcendent dragon descendant alone. More than 20 pains were engaged in battles within the swamp, and the number of creatures killed was almost impossible to count. The swamp had not yet advanced to level 4. Besides needing a massive amount of flesh and soul energy, it also partially devoured souls. Klito's possessed the same characteristic. If he got to devour souls, he could grow very powerful. In order to achieve this, Klito's devoted himself to devouring the souls of his enemies. His strength made the transcendent dragon descendant tremble. His burning soul was like an everlasting beacon. After 10 minutes of battle, cracks appeared on the body of the transcendent dragon descendant. The dragon's scales were shattered by the war hammer. As for Klito's, he was also in a pitiful state. His body was cracking and falling apart like porcelain. But with his feet treading the ground, Klito's devoured the rocks. It healed him and repaired the damage to his body. Feeling the chaos in his own aura, the transcendent dragon descendant looked at the flickering soul that burned on Klito's. He was envious. How is this creature so powerful? He felt even more angry and frustrated. He couldn't take this anymore. If this continued, perhaps he wouldn't even survive until the opponent's soul burned out. He would die on the spot if the other opponent suddenly appeared. The hero would be praised, while everyone would laugh at his stupidity. The gray scales of his body suddenly turned red, and runes condensed on them. He exuded a terrifying aura of destruction. Even at the risk of being attacked by the hidden enemy, he had to fight with dignity. His claws swelled and became lustrous. It was razor-sharp and terrifying. The space shattered and revealed an endless void and chaos. But just as he was about to fight, a subtle aura flashed past. The enraged transcendent dragon descendant trembled. The hidden enemy was making a move? His heart pounded wildly. He stopped in his tracks. His killing intent disappeared. He just wanted to prepare for the unknown. His perception suddenly became blurred, and most of the surrounding aura disappeared. The void on the side ruptured, and a figure with silver hair and silver eyes emerged from the scattered fragments of space. All attention was drawn to this figure. At the same time, Klito's felt a sense of death in the face of the uninhibited killing intent of the transcendent dragon descendant. Chapter 489, Victory in Death. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation. It seemed like his own soul was about to be annihilated. Under immense pressure, he entered a special state. Looking around, the entire world seemed to be responding to his call, and the surrounding magical energy became unusually gentle. His gaze fell upon the dark servants who couldn't participate in the battle, and an inexplicable feeling surged within him. The dark servants were one entity. Their bodies transformed into flowing light and streamed through the sky. They merged into Klito's body. The burning shadow of the soul seemed to have been doused with gasoline as the flames surged 10 times higher and burned faster. In an instant, the space around Klito's couldn't bear the emanating energy and collapsed. The ground beneath his feet shook, and massive cracks opened up like abysses. It was as though the end of the world was near. Endless power exploded, the ground collapsed, and the recoil force propelled his body like lightning. Klito's took the lead. Upon seeing the figure with silver hair and silver eyes, even the transcendent dragon descendant couldn't help but feel a bit dazed. The opponent's power made him feel an almost suffocating pressure, and the sense of lethal danger sent shivers down his spine. He turned around. A figure holding the warhammer was crushing the void. How can he be so powerful? His eyes were filled with horror. He couldn't engage in a direct confrontation. The opponent's outburst couldn't possibly last long. A majestic energy erupted from his body and attempted to forcefully break free from this area. But suddenly, the surrounding space solidified, and he felt as if he had fallen into a muddy swamp. He was unable to escape. In an instant, the monster's warhammer came crashing down. Forced into battle, the transcendent dragon descendant was enraged. He raised his claws in front of him in defense. The warhammer struck thunderously. The transcendent dragon descendant felt as if a towering mountain had collapsed. The immense weight crashed down on him. His sturdy claws shattered. The opponent's warhammer couldn't take the impact and broke apart in two, but the monster still had power to spare and swung the remaining half of the warhammer fiercely onto his chest. The dragon scales, which were tough enough to withstand the impact of a siege crossbow, shattered, and splatters of blood filled the sky. The remaining piece of the warhammer pierced his chest, and the transcendent dragon descendant felt the agonizing pain emanating from his chest. That D***Ned reptile. His transcendent power erupted once again, the space collapsed, and his aura surged. Even with a pierced heart, he could still hold on and continue fighting. The enraged transcendent dragon descendant had fallen into madness and completely disregarded the threat of the vampire at his side. A slender palm pressed against his back, and all his power was instantly sealed. Klitos raised the broken warhammer in his hand, and the soul energy behind him burned instantaneously. Endless power ruthlessly struck the gigantic dragon's head. His head was smashed open, and blood splattered everywhere. At this moment, Yuan, who had transformed into human form, flew to the side of the transcendent dragon descendant. He grabbed the opponent's body, and a special energy surged through. The twisted half-dragon soul appeared as if it had been devoured by a black hole. It was swallowed into Klitos' body. Yuan retracted his arm and calmly watched the bloody scene. The splattered flesh and bones were all isolated by the surrounding energy. The scent of blood made the power within Leona restless. Leona looked at Klitos, whose soul flame was extinguishing. She disappeared and silently returned to Yuan's side in the blink of an eye. The dust on the battlefield gradually settled. As the scene cleared up, Klitos stood at the center, holding the shattered handle of a warhammer in his right hand and a headless corpse in his left. The lords widened their eyes. The corpse was that of the transcendent dragon descendant. Klitos, Yuan's hero, had really killed a transcendent? Were they dreaming? Even though they had witnessed the legendary scene of Yuan slaughtering a god in Lion City, they were still deeply shocked. In the end, it was Klitos who achieved the ultimate victory. He turned and looked at the graceful figure beside him with respect and admiration. This was what the top-ranking lord deserved? The other lords were still in shock. Yuan was crazy? While the lords were still in a daze, Klitos' soul flame had almost burned out. Under everyone's gaze, he walked across the ruined land and approached Yuan. He knelt in front of her. "My lord, I hope I have not let you down," he said as he raised the headless corpse in his hand. The burning flames on his ethereal soul slowly dissipated. N/O/vel/b/in.c//om. His body towered like a monument, but there was no longer any sign of fire. Everyone looked at Klitos' indomitable figure. When the transcendent dragon descendant fell, the bodies of the other half-dragons convulsed like melting candles. No one paid attention to the half-dragons anymore. All their gazes were fixed on the massive kneeling figure before Yuan. The lords trembled as they watched Klitos with the broken warhammer in one hand and the headless corpse in another. They didn't know what Yuan was thinking at that moment. No matter what happened, they had no right to interfere. The lords watched as the troops surrounded the spire. They exchanged glances and smiled bitterly at each other. No wonder Yuan could become the top lord. Even in this situation, she still maintained vigilance. If they were in Yuan's place, they probably wouldn't even bother to acknowledge potential threats. After the army secured the spire, familiar prompts sounded in their ears. Klitos, the dark soul devourer, who hunted down the transcendent dragon descendant guarding the Spire of Fate, has completed the mission. After more than 2 months of planning and several setbacks, Klitos had finally completed his mission in the Tisseria Plain. The sweet fruit of their tremendous efforts brought an inexplicable sense of happiness. Yuan looked past Klitos and stared at the Spire of Fate. Chapter 490, Invaluable Units. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation. Finally, our HE moment had arrived. How many treasures could be hidden inside? Everyone was filled with anticipation. At this moment, Yuan walked up to Klitos. He gazed at the scarred and bruised, majestic creature. He was still holding the corpse of the transcendent dragon descendant. The warhammer rested on the ground and supported Klitos as he stayed upright. Klitos didn't disappoint Yuan. Although Leona played a role in restraining the transcendent dragon descendant, it was only because of Klitos' one capability that he achieved such a glorious victory. Yuan manifested a stone box out of thin air. It appeared ordinary. There was nothing unusual. Yuan leaned down and placed the stone box in front of Klitos. Cracks appeared on the rectangular stone box and emitted an evil and dark aura. The energy rushed into Klitos' body. Constructed life, no fatal weaknesses. As long as the soul persists, the body can be reconstructed using rocks. Can create soul stones to store soul power. After the primary soul is destroyed, rebirth can be achieved using the stone box. The energy of RHE stone box surged out. After a few breaths, RHE cracks expanded to cover the entire surface. Klitos was like a candle, burning with a weak life force. His broken body regained vitality. The surrounding magical energy rushed toward him, and Klitos' one body seemed to transform into a black hole. It voraciously devoured everything. His feet standing on the ground made the earth ripple like waves, absorbing even more immense energy. His aura began to skyrocket at a visible speed. In Yuan's distant eyes, joy was evident. Leona, Ferula, the Lion of Greed, the Hydra, Red-Eyed Black Dragon, White Dragon Saint, and now Klados had all gone through similar transformations and reached a terrifying level of power. If the other lords knew about all of them, they would be filled with envy. For most lords, 1 or 2 heroes with extraordinary abilities were worthy of admiration and respect. Even without Yuan or Yuan leading them, the heroes could fight other lords themselves. None could withstand them. If they also had a powerful army in their territory, even the top guilds and lords would be left despairing. Leona, go take a look. Sensing that Klados still needed some time to complete his transformation, Yuan turned toward the Spire of Fate. Your Majesty Yuan, I didn't sense any danger inside the spire, Leona said. Then she disappeared. She reappeared after a while to report. The spire might contain rare treasures that would come in handy while exploring other planes. Yuan took out the Dragon Blood Tower she had received as a system reward from her inventory. It was a mini tower covered in bloodstains. After placing the Dragon Blood Tower on the ground, a 50-meter tall tower could immediately materialize. Once placed, it would increase the production of dragon-type units in their nest every week. It held a special attraction for dragons, and they would come to join in every week. It possessed great deterrence against non-dragon enemies. If a lord who possessed numerous dragon nests obtained it, it would undoubtedly become an artifact. The production of dragon-type units in their nests was lower compared to other races, further increasing the value of this treasure. Even if it didn't increase the production of dragon-type units in the nest, it was still a good thing to attract giant dragons to come and join the territory every week. Yuan put it away and prepared to place it in her territory. Looking at the towering spire in front of them, Yuan walked forward, holding Yuan's hand. Leona followed behind. Although the transcendent dragon descendant had fallen, the power of the forbidden airspace still existed, so they could only walk to their destination. They crossed the battlefield, which looked like it had been trampled by giant beasts, and arrived at the base of the spire. The mysterious building was over 50 meters tall and looked eerie. They were unable to sense its aura. The possibility of discovering ancient rules within this building was highly likely. The interior of the spire appeared before their eyes. It was different from what they had imagined. The interior was hollow, like a cylinder. The walls were made of rocks. Starting from the bottom, a circular staircase led to the top. As their gaze shifted, they were drawn to the peculiar site in the central area, where a broken magic array was releasing continuous energy. Upon closer inspection, they noticed thumb-sized half-dragon statues scattered around the magic array. Considering the resurrection abilities of those units, the efficacy of these statues was self-evident. After observing for a moment, Yuan frowned. Besides this magic array, he didn't see anything else in the hall. He couldn't even find a trace of the legendary units' nests mentioned by the lords. The energy swirling around them lifted the mini half-dragon statues from the ground. Yuan discovered that the magic power had disappeared, and the statues had turned into useless objects. Looking at the magic array, Yuan couldn't help but feel a sense of regret. If only such an array could be created and controlled, it would hold immense power. After exploring the surroundings for a long time and confirming that there was nothing valuable, Yuan and Yuan didn't linger any longer. With Leona by their side, they followed the circular staircase upward. When they reached the top, the magic array on the floor below looked like it was the size of a thumb. Above was a semicircular arch, and the area widened. The magical lights flickered brightly. A multicolored treasure chest caught everyone's attention. The multicolored treasure chest was a top-tier chest that had a chance to yield legendary treasures. On the side of the treasure chest, there stood 3 gigantic statues. They were over 8 meters tall. These statues had dragon heads, sharp limbs, bulging muscles, and dragon wings growing on their backs. They held peculiarly long-handled weapons that implied brutality n/o/vel/b/jn.c//om. Chapter 491, Klados Transformation. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation. Even for the top-tier native forces, the transcendent units were truly priceless. Yuan had obtained 3 of those at once. Even if they didn't find anything else, the 3 transcendent units would be profitable enough. Their eyes caught sight of the broken magic array in front of the statues, which had a similar aura to the one at the base of the spire. Yuan immediately recognized the familiar aura of the transcendent dragon descendant. Could it be that the transcendent dragon descendant also had the ability to resurrect itself? Then why hadn't it revived itself yet? Yuan recalled how Klados had killed the transcendent dragon descendant. He beheaded it and devoured its soul. The dark soul devourer was born from the abyss. It was not benevolent. It was fated. It couldn't be helped, thought Yuan. If it were someone else, the transcendent dragon descendant would undoubtedly resurrect itself. Although they didn't know how many times it could be resurrected, it would have been fatal even if it was given just one chance. It was no wonder so many lords had complained about the difficulty of capturing the Spire of Fate. The defensive forces in place were not something the ordinary lords could handle. Yuan happily took a step forward and looked at the 3 fierce statues. Dragon Wing Statue. Dragon wings can be recruited. Recruited, 20. Recruitment, 20,000 units of gemstones. Remark, can recruit extraordinary soldiers, evil dragon wings. They possess the power of the 5-colored evil dragon and are the representatives of destruction and death. Yuan's heart trembled in excitement. The units obtained by the evil spreaders also possessed terrifying power. But the problem was that the evil spreaders were only suitable for spreading their faith, not so much in combat. There was still the Dragon Blood Tower that could be put to use right away. The rewards were definitely great this time. However, recruiting them would require 20,000 gemstones, which meant a total of 40,000 units of rare resources. The consumption of rare resources by the 3 gold devouring beasts had already reached millions every month. Thinking of another huge expenditure made Yuan's head hurt. She had to increase her income soon. Otherwise, if things continued like this, she wouldn't be able to upgrade anything or anyone. Just the current unit production alone could overwhelm them. The resources required for higher level units were simply insane. It was no wonder that not many legendary heroes were found in Kanglan City. It was difficult to maintain. Yuan turned her gaze to the colorful treasure chest beside her. The treasure chest was not unfamiliar to her. She took a step forward and opened it. A loud sound reverberated, and colorful light spilled out of the chest. It slowly faded away after a while. Yuan looked into the treasure chest. A mini war hammer lay flat at the bottom of the chest. The war hammer was only the size of a palm but gave off a powerful and majestic aura. She reached out and took the mini war hammer. It was indeed heavy. Its weight kept increasing in her hands. She swung it. It created sparks as it hit the ground. The mini war hammer disappeared without a trace and was replaced by a war hammer that was over 6 meters long. It had fist-sized craters, as if something was meant to be embedded in them. However, there was nothing on top. The entire war hammer had no extra engravings. It was bronze throughout. Warhammer skills: Mountain's Gravity, Mountain Crushing. Special characteristics: wielding the Tato Warhammer expends double stamina and increases strength by 50%. If 10 times the usual stamina is used, the strength increases by 300%. Remark: a weapon forged by a legendary blacksmith of the Tato race. It possesses immense power. As long as you can find a suitable gemstone to embed on the Warhammer, it can be upgraded to a legendary weapon. This Warhammer was a perfect match for Klitos. Yuan couldn't be bothered to think too much about it. She would study it later, when she was done with the spire. She felt good as she looked at the large Warhammer. Klitos would definitely experience a significant improvement in his combat with this Warhammer. Yuan looked around the area. Apart from the dragon wing statues and the treasure chest, there was nothing else. She felt slightly disappointed. The highly anticipated ancient rules evidently did not exist in this spire. Indeed, such things were not easily obtained. Yuan didn't think too much about it. The gains were already extravagant enough. Her gaze fell on the dragon wing statues. She had high expectations for such a special unit. She opened the attribute panel and looked at the recruitment section. Yuan didn't hesitate and confirmed the recruitment. The rare resources on the panel immediately disappeared. With a massive expenditure of resources, the statues in front of her moved. There was a crisp cracking sound from behind the statues, and a fierce creature broke out of the shell. Dark red dragon wings flapped as the figure descended. After passing the statue, it appeared before Yuan. It had a fierce dragon head and was strong in stature. It emitted an evil aura. Its back was covered in scales. The spikes on the dragon were sharper than spears. This monster held a unique long-handled weapon, which looked lethal in its grasp. N/O/vel/b/jn.c//om. After the birth of the evil dragon's wing, it landed on the ground because it was unable to fly. Your loyal servant extends the highest greetings to you. May darkness protect you. It stepped forward and knelt before Yuan humbly. The evil dragon's wing was not a non-combat unit like the evil spreaders. It was a killing machine. These extraordinary units with an overwhelming, oppressive aura continuously broke out from behind the statues. When all the evil dragon's wings were born, the spacious area was already crowded. Looking at the scene before her, Yuan was extremely pleased. With a top-tier hero leading them, they would undoubtedly unleash tremendous destructive power. She opened the attribute panel of the evil dragon's wing. It felt as if a towering mountain had collapsed, and thousands of rivers surged with overwhelming pressure. At this moment, it seemed like space itself was frozen. Klitos completed his transformation. Yuan pulled Yuan and left the spire. She walked down the circular staircase. Her gaze fell on Klitos. Chapter 492, The Sharpest Blade. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation. The opponent stood on the earth, majestic like a mountain, and it seemed like the entire world was rotating beneath his feet. With every move he made, it felt like he could shatter the heavens and destroy everything at any moment. As Klitos' gaze regained clarity, the oppressive aura from the collapsing space around him slowly became stable. He had transcended his limits and acquired greater power. From this day forward, Klitos would be the weapon and cut through all hurdles. The power in his hands had reached an astonishing level. After seeing Klitos upgraded, Yuan's mood brightened. There weren't many new changes, but there was a massive improvement in his attributes. N/O/vel/b/in.c//om. However, the biggest change was the newly activated transcendent ability, Devouring Darkness. His body constantly absorbed the surrounding dark power to strengthen itself, while also consuming the power of darkness to amplify his devouring force 100-fold. He was like a black hole. Although she hadn't experienced the might of this skill yet, she could sense the terror from its description. The ability further enhanced Klitos' already extraordinary devouring capability. He would definitely become a king among his peers, with exceptional growth potential. Now, they just had to wait for the dark withered tree to finish devouring the body of the Lord of Greed. Yuan wondered if there would be a promotion quest for the tree as well. Leona, go retrieve the Dragon Wings unit nest, Yuan said. What if someone took advantage and got there first? She couldn't delay. The massive stone blocks of the spire began to crumble, as if removing the support at the bottom of a stack of building blocks. Thick dust almost covered the whole sky. Several lords were uneasy. It was difficult for them to calm down in the face of such a change, especially in front of Yuan. She was a lord who could change their fates. But what they saw first wasn't Yuan, but the towering and imposing Klitos. The few lords exchanged worried glances. They could see the shock in each other's eyes. Didn't he die? How was he resurrected? Is this the hero that caused the void to collapse? The lords were in awe. It was no wonder a hero like this could fight against a transcendent being. They could only force themselves to suppress the rolling emotions, swearing never to compare themselves with Yuan again. The information you provided about the spire is very important to me. What reward do you want? Yuan looked at the lords, who were awaiting her instructions. The group of them all looked at her. It's our honor to work for you, and we absolutely cannot accept your gifts. Our guild is located in the Misty Sea. If possible, we hope to conduct trade in the Tisseria Plain, a warrior lord said. It was a clever choice. The benefits obtained from capturing a plain were only a small part of the outcome. Infinite business opportunities were the greatest benefits to get from it. If they occupied numerous plains, they could easily establish trade connections with the main plain. The natives always invested numerous resources in opportunities like that. I like dealing with smart people. You can continue to stay on the Tisseria Plain. One will have Angel reserve a base for your guild, Yuan said. They could also help Angel rebuild the Tisseria Plain. They should know how much benefit they could obtain from this. We will do our best and will not let you down. The topic shifted from the future development of the Tisseria Plain to the specialties and cross-plain trade in their territory by the seaside. Lord Yuan, our guild is called the Phoenix Guild. We have just over 100 members, with 1/3 being lords, said the warrior lord. If it brought sufficient benefits, Yuan never rejected cooperation. The army under their command had been transformed into demons and then wiped out due to the death of the Lord of Greed. The biggest supporter of the Lord of Greed, Archduke Bloodfury, had fallen. Although they didn't obtain any treasures left behind by the Lord of Greed, his intact divine body became their spoils of war, and the demonized bodies on the battlefield were used to nourish the swamp. Moreover, the Lord of Greed's mount, the Lion of Greed, also submitted to Yuan of its own volition. The appearance of the Lord of Greed had made Yuan's victory glorious. The capture of the spire had allowed Klitos to level up. Moreover, the colorful treasure chest had yielded a long-handled war hammer that perfectly matched Klitos. If suitable gems were embedded in it, it could become a legendary artifact. The possible revelation of ancient rules within the spire was also a huge gain. If used properly, it could come in handy in the future. With these thoughts in mind, Yuan looked towards the space portal that had been temporarily sealed by the dwarf god. She sensed that the air was filled with the rotten stench of the swamp. The thrilling expedition left Yuan and Su Yuan with a rare opportunity to relax for a few days. They didn't rush to do anything. Timo appeared in their line of sight. Mestre said that the noble forces in Kanglan City have been discussing you lately, especially your victory over the Lord of Greed, he said as he beamed with pride. He hadn't expected that the expedition to the Tisseria Plain would have such a significant impact. To slay a god of that level was simply unbelievable. The Lord of Greed, who held the power of greed, had a formidable reputation on the main plane. The gods of the seven sins were so terrifying that different sects used them to intimidate their followers. It was no wonder Mestre described everything in such detail in her letters. Chapter 493, The Development of New Technology. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation. In the ancient rules, any ultimate existence above legends had the opportunity to become a god. Send a message to Mestre. One will visit Kanglan City at the end of the month and meet with Archduke Xingyu. Timo nodded. The Lavender Guild was still in Kanglan City, and it was impossible to avoid Archduke Xingyu any longer. The development of the magic music box has made significant progress, hasn't it? Yuan's tone carried delight. That's right. After the dwarves entered Furnace City, the development of the magic music box progressed rapidly. It has now officially entered the mass production stage. Timo smiled. The Furnace City was able to produce 100 units per day. A few months ago, the production of the magic music box was limited to a few units. It had made a significant leap from before. Yes, the progress has been good, but the quantity is still far from enough. We need more. No matter how many music boxes were produced, the market would suck them dry. They were an important commodity for earning resources, besides ice cream. Yuan was willing to do whatever it took to increase production. Yuan had high expectations for this sound system. In a world where people always faced danger and didn't live very long, the magic music box would become a source of purpose and pleasure. The magic music box was simple in design. After selling the magic music box, they could focus on making and selling different tapes to be played on the music boxes. Yuan knew the value of such a commodity. If the sale peaked, it could expand into different industries in the future. The Furnace City was full of grey dwarves with new skills and abilities that could be dedicated to completing research. The development of the magic music box was definitely ahead of everyone else. If they could mass-produce and sell the items fast enough, it wouldn't matter if other lords found out about it and tried to replicate it. Without sufficient reserves of talent, everything was just wishful thinking. Timo was also excited. He realized the potential of this alchemical item after encountering it once before. He even took a few of them for testing. After listening to them once, he yearned for more. He couldn't go a day without listening to them. He even listened to the magic music box before he went to sleep. The magic music box usually played the rare Dark Elves songs from the underground world. Their beautiful voices were simply captivating. If he were to see a magic music box, he would buy it even if he had to empty his pockets. What about the anti-theft measures for the magic music box? How is the development going? Yuan asked. Although the design of the magic music box was ingenious, it could still be reproduced by powerful noble families with enough money. N/O/vel/b/n.c//om. The dwarves truly have the blood of the god flowing in them. Their knowledge is astonishing, said Timo in admiration. They have already come up with several special methods and special energy sources to provide energy for the magic music box. By compressing elemental energy into crystals through a special magic array, the magic music box can only be activated with this unique energy source. If the energy source is incorrect, it will cause damage to the magic music box. There are even more complex magic arrays inside the magic music box, and the magic arrays used inside are the knowledge inherited from the gods. Only dwarves can understand them, and it is extremely difficult for outsiders to decode and use them. By fixing and upgrading the magic arrays, the dwarves deliberately set up a few imperfect magic arrays. After their release, they can be upgraded for free every 6 months or a year. This ensures customers' loyalty. The separate magic sound tapes will only activate the playback function of the magic music box if they are produced by us. Otherwise, they won't work. What if someone bypasses our magic music box and develops their own? Then they don't need to follow the rules we set, Timo said. They had a detailed discussion about it but realized that the issue couldn't be eliminated completely. Therefore, the best solution was to quickly dominate the market and make the magic music box a popular item. Even if other magic music boxes were produced, buyers wouldn't easily abandon them due to the pricing and other perks. They could also do some research on the content of the magic music box and release higher quality magic sound tapes, allowing more races to participate in sound recording. Yuan was satisfied with Timo's explanation. It was evident that Timo was devoted to researching this matter. Although there were still many imperfections, the project was already close to completion. What about the production cost of the magic music box? She asked. The functional design differs from the original version. The production cost of the magic music box now requires rare resources to build, Timo said with a bitter smile. Considering everything, a playable magic music box requires around 600 units of rare resources. What about the energy crystals that power the magic music box? Yuan asked again. The energy crystals are created by suppressing and transforming the alchemical magic array created by the dwarves. The manufacturing cost is only 10 crystals, and the production speed is fast. Each energy crystal can support continuous playback of the magic music box for a week. The magic music box with a magic sound tape costs 1,000 units of rare resources. The price was still reasonable. The item was more complex than the ice cream, so it couldn't be sold for cheap. There were production limitations, and it was a durable item. In the early stages, it would be a waste to rely on thin margins and high sales volume. However, making it too expensive would hinder its promotion and popularity. Without a large user base as a foundation, many of the subsequent plans would fail. They needed to increase production capacity as much as possible and reduce costs. If the magic music box caused a sensation, there would be no shortage of future competitors in the market. So, they decided to postpone the sale. They would let the dwarves start researching a new version of the magic music box. They were also thinking of a magic music box that could display images. These were not things that could be developed in a short time. It required time, patience, and investment. If they could develop them, the profits would be astronomical. At the very least, a few sultry poses between cross-racial lovers would appeal to many upright gentlemen. Watching adult content was a basic need for the masses. Moreover, high-level units had terrifying resource consumption. If they didn't expand the channel for resources soon, their territory would be overwhelmed by the resource demands of their units' lairs. Being located deep in the swamp, they couldn't rely on the abundant resource points in the surrounding area for their development. Chapter 494, New Products. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation. The underground world and the Caesarea Plain both had their own challenges. The best way to quickly grow stronger was to develop competitive products. After discussing the future development of the magic music box in depth and repeatedly emphasizing that Furnace City should prioritize researching and improving the magic music box, Yuan continued with the next topic. How is the expansion of the raw materials for ice cream cultivation going? The underground world's cultivation base had expanded, and they had used the alchemical harvesters produced by the Furnace City. As the Eternal Land was still undergoing rapid expansion and there were many uncertainties, the agricultural area hadn't started cultivation. The agricultural area in the Eternal Land was left alone for now. The Caesarea Plain also had large cultivable lands that could be used temporarily. How is the efficiency of the alchemical harvester? Is it as good as planned? Yuan asked. It has an efficiency comparable to about 50 people's work, and it could be even better with further improvements, Timo said. If they hadn't witnessed how those huge war machines could sow and harvest crops so easily, they would never have imagined that such a thing was even possible. The appearance of large-scale machinery had made harvesting extremely convenient, saving a lot of labor. After investing numerous resources for several months, they finally had positive outcomes. With the help of the dwarves, the white-tailed cat tribe has successfully developed a new 4-star wine called Hennessy Brew, Timo said. The Bloody Mary continued to generate hundreds and thousands of rare resources in income for the territory every month. Unfortunately, the production volume was too low. It required the white-tailed cat tribe to personally brew it, so it couldn't be mass-produced like ice cream. Now, with another new recipe for wine, their income would increase. How does it taste? It's as hot as magma. It's very popular among men. Women and the elderly still prefer the Bloody Mary. Yuan nodded. With the successful development of the magic music box, the expansion of the ice cream production base, and the white-tailed cat tribe coming up with new products, they could follow the same approach and search for more magical plants. From the sales data in Qingyu City, the potential of the ice cream was evident. It always went out of stock very soon because people bought them in droves. If they can develop more flavors and even more types of ice cream, then expanding the market and selling to more places will be the natural next step. Due to manufacturing costs, research and developmental limitations, and market issues, the trade wasn't nearly as developed and efficient as the Blue Planet. The natives had already occupied the majority of the market, and it left no room for the newer lords to exert themselves. Even if they created something good, it was very difficult to sell it in cities with native populations. Only a few people could make it in such a competitive environment. Food Workshop has already started research in that area. I'm sure we'll soon hear good news with the dwarves involved, Timo said with some emotion. The dwarves were an asset. Their newly activated abilities made them very efficient at researching new items. Undoubtedly, they played a huge role in the development of the territory. There were some blueprints that Yuan had obtained after helping Lion City. Construction of special buildings was to begin tomorrow. How effective is the smithy in researching attack technology? With the assistance of the dwarves, the progress has been good. It is expected that the requested top-tier technology will be successfully developed in 2 weeks. The territory was currently at level 3. With the expansion of the food workshop and the construction of new residential houses, the once abundant open space had become cramped. If the territory wasn't upgraded quickly, they might soon run out of space to build anything new at all. Once the Tisseria Plain became a part of the territory, the population would increase drastically. The territory needed to be developed and expanded. Has there been any news from the Tisseria Plain? Yuan asked. Angel arrived at the capital of the Tisseria Kingdom this morning and is currently persuading the enemies in the city to surrender. The attack hasn't been launched yet, but Farala will definitely recapture the capital by today and regain control of the Tisseria Kingdom. The capital had been under Archduke Blood Fury. It still had a wealth of treasures and resources. However, wherever Angel went with her army, she only found empty households and abandoned towns and villages. Numerous people had been massacred by the Archduke. Tisseria Plain's population had decreased by almost 70% because of the indiscriminate slaughter. Yuan's face darkened. When searching for the Spire of Fate, she had seen the conditions of the towns and villages. She only regretted killing the Archduke so easily that he hadn't suffered at all. N/O/vel/b/jn.c//om. He slaughtered millions and died so easily, he should have been severely punished. Let Angel collect the statistics. We need more data. Yuan waved her hand, dismissing Timo. Yuan looked furious. Su Yuan didn't care much about such matters. Trivial losses were unavoidable while planning big things. He found the Archduke quite resourceful. When dealing with an evil god, it was good to be cautious. The only thing to do was to learn from past mistakes. Chapter 495, The Changes in Amarin. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation. Your Majesty, my lord. A tall and beautiful person appeared before them. The person was dressed in a black uniform specially designed for the workers of the smithy. The yellow riding boots accentuated her long legs. The long-handled copper hammer made her look like a gallant warrior. You finally left the smithy. Yuan smiled at Amarin. As a research fanatic, Amarin rarely went outside and could hardly bear to leave her workshop for even a few minutes. She could stay there for 24 hours straight. The young woman was a rational and passionate researcher and the founder of the Blacksmith Association. My lord, I need to go to Furnace City. It's a good idea. You haven't been to the underground world lately. The dwarves will work hard if they see you there. Most of the early-stage technology in the territory was overseen by her. She was not only in charge of the Blacksmith Association in the Dark Region City but also the supervisor of all technological research in the territory. Yuan could see her contributions and efforts. Moreover, Amarin had already reached the level of a master blacksmith a while ago. I want to take the Transcendent Hunter with me as well, Amarin said with a smile. The Transcendent Hunter was a mechanical puppet obtained from a large-scale dungeon. Although it was severely damaged and couldn't unleash its transcendent-level combat power, it had been quite helpful in the early stages of development. However, as her power increased, this severely damaged mechanical puppet seemed somewhat mediocre in front of other forces. Yuan had left the mechanical puppet at the smithy for Amarin to research. I've already entrusted the Transcendent Hunter to you. You can do with it as you please, said Yuan. The severely damaged mechanical puppet was worth a fortune to the other lords. However, Yuan had many other forces she could rely on, so she could afford to give it away. My lord, do you trust me? No one deserves my trust more than you. Yuan looked at the young woman. I will definitely not disappoint you and Lord Su Yuan. Amaran's gaze was determined. She bowed to Yuan in respect and turned around to leave. The death swamp had devoured a portion of the god's flesh. It had obtained a small part of divinity. Devouring the flesh of gods could increase the potential of the death swamp. Yuan couldn't suppress her joy and quickly left the territory with Su Yuan. They passed through the open space gate. The moment they crossed the cracks, a strong smell of blood assailed their noses. A dense crimson mist enveloped them. As the owner of the death swamp, Yuan's perception immediately spread along with the blood mist. The death swamp had become much denser. It was filled with energy. At the same time, there was an army advancing toward the central area. More than 20 planes with hundreds of troops crowded the swamp. In the very center of the death swamp, dozens of golden fruits grew from the branches of the dark withered tree. The aura constantly tempted the life forms. The greed and desire awakened by the fruits affected the troops' rationality. Yuan perceived everything around her. For the army fighting in this land, it was a place of despair where souls were doomed. But for Yuan, this was a wonderful place. It was a cornucopia of wealth for her. Yuan calmed her excitement and looked in the distance. That area hadn't been invaded by the soldiers from other planes yet. Ferocious statues stood there. The army shrouded in the blood mist stood tall in the mire formed by melted flesh. They had serpentine tails, humanoid bodies, and wielded tridents. They stood motionless, like statues. However, they would attack in an instant if an enemy were to approach. The Blood Slaughterers were a powerful troop born from the Death Swamp. They had the potential to rise to the SS class. Once this army completed its ascension, it would undoubtedly become the new pillar of the territory. N/O/vel/B/in.C//om. With the upgrade of the Death Swamp, the upper limit of the breeding nest increased to 5,000 units. These troops, formed through condensation, could produce 500 blood slaughterers per week with an abundant supply of flesh and blood energy. Even among the native forces, they were the elite among the elite. They were recruited through the energy of flesh and blood, without the need to expend resources. If the territory had to bear the cost of such recruitment, Yuan simply couldn't afford it. Yuan couldn't help but feel a little sentimental. No matter how many resources she earned, she always felt that she fell short. It was all because of Su Yuan, who had high expectations. The territory had never been weak and couldn't be satisfied with weaker heroes. Resources had to be reserved for more powerful troops. If all troops were upgraded, the resources wouldn't be enough. The scarcer the resources, the more valuable the ability of the Death Swamp to recruit breeds without expending the cost. If the Death Swamp could be upgraded to level 5, it could recruit legendary troops without any cost at all. With the powerful breed of the evil dragon wings, Yuan looked forward to the Death Swamp, recruiting powerful troops every week. Suddenly, the thin blood mist condensed rapidly, and a translucent and elderly figure appeared in sight. Lord Yuan and Lord Su Yuan, greetings to both of you. Lord Modric, you've worked hard. Have there been any issues with the Death Swamp? Yuan gestured towards the battlefield, shrouded in the blood mist. Everything is under control. We have the golden fruits and the lion of greed to arouse their greed and desire. It confuses everyone, said Modric. If he hadn't witnessed the Death Swamp and the dark withered tree devouring the corpses, he wouldn't have believed that a lord could obtain such power so quickly. But now he knew. He recalled the fall of the Lord of Greed and felt that Yuan was indeed the key to ushering in a new era. Chapter 496, Eliza's Message. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation. With the current speed, how long will it take for the Death Swamp to be upgraded again? Yuan asked. That is not so simple. Its promotion will usher in a transformation, requiring flesh and blood much more than before, perhaps 10 times more than before, said Modric. The prerequisite for the upgrade was that all units needed to reach the same level. It was already quite difficult to meet the conditions, and accumulating enough energy for another level up was even more challenging. Moreover, numerous deaths would be required, ideally, for the Death Swamp to upgrade. If the number of casualties decreased, it would take even longer. Although the 20-plus planes had a large population, the flesh and blood needed to nourish the Death Swamp for the next upgrade were unimaginable. The golden fruits constantly lured the rulers of those planes as their greed grew. They were leading more and more troops to death. The Death Swamp was now a machine devouring flesh and blood rapidly, with tens and thousands of lives falling every day. The planes could not withstand it for much longer. They might run out of troops. The lives of the 20-plus planes are not enough to meet the needs of the Death Swamp. The plan to expand and upgrade the swamp needed to be put into action as soon as possible. The blood mist could obscure perception, and numerous troops fought aimlessly in the fog. No one can resist the temptation of the golden fruits, the god of deception and lies said with a nod. The ground on which the dark withered tree bore fruit acted as bait to lure in the enemies. However, that couldn't go on forever. The void sandworm was proving very useful in this situation. In the beginning, Yuan planned to use the void sandworm to open trade with other planes. However, their function had changed. I will dispatch the void sandworm to the Death Swamp. Please continue to control the situation here. Yuan understood the god's intention. No one was more capable than Modric of manipulating the enemy in the swamp, so she left it in his care. Of course, it is my duty. The god of deception and lies smiled. Under the rule of Modric, have you discovered any spires in the plains? Yuan asked. I haven't found any yet. These connected plains possess some strange power, but their rules are full of flaws. They are not perfect plains. One haven't even seen any transcendence, said Modric. There is a probability that the treasures related to gods exist within the spire. However, the spire I captured did not contain anything, so I cannot be sure about it. If you discover a spire, please inform me as soon as possible, Yuan said to Modric. The god of deception and lies was deep in thought. Then he nodded. He wanted to ask something but thought it might sound offensive. Yuan had already given him respect and a purpose. Yuan didn't intend to keep too much information from him, either. The fact that ancient rules existed within the spire meant that she might come across one soon. The sound of flapping wings quickly approached them from behind. Mr. Timo has sent an urgent message. There's news from the Succubus clan, reported a night devil B. Yuan turned to look at it. The Succubus has returned. After returning from Kanglan City, Eliza voluntarily left and headed to the Succubus clan to cultivate and level up. After that, she disappeared without a trace. They couldn't contact her, no matter what they tried. They finally received news from her. Mr. Timo says that she isn't back yet, but she seeks help. Both Su Yuan and Yuan felt uneasy. You keep an eye on things here. I'll go find them, Yuan said. Su Yuan's massive figure glided down from the sky and skillfully landed in front of the dark castle. Your Majesty, a message has come from Miss Eliza. The Succubus clan is under siege by the God of Light and the Insect clan. Numerous enemy troops are at the city gates, and Miss Eliza is single-handedly fighting the God of Light. Timo was pacing back and forth in the hall. As soon as he saw Su Yuan, he ran to him in a hurry. Yuan frowned. She didn't expect both the Insect clan and the God of Light to get involved at the same time. They were really insufferable. Timo took out a small scrap of paper from his pocket and handed it to her. The information on it was scarce, but it was like Timo had explained. It depicted a crude but towering spire. The place of the Succubus clan was engulfed by spatial turbulence, making it impossible for the Void Sandworm to explore. n/o/vel/b/in.c//om. What kind of token did they leave behind to serve as a spatial coordinate? Yuan couldn't figure out the specific location. The Succubus clan was located in a swamp. Even if it was engulfed by spatial turbulence, it couldn't have disappeared without a trace. There must be something left behind by which they could find Eliza. Gather the troops and prepare to fight for the Succubus clan, Yuan said decisively. This time, she wanted to kill the God of Light. Numerous dark clouds shrouded the sky and made the air heavy. Looking down from above, one could see countless giant insects forming a dark tide as they rushed toward the towering city. Hard exoskeletons, ferocious pincers, sharp stingers. These monstrous creatures, thousands of times larger than ordinary insects, were enough to make one tremble in fear. The horrifying monsters gathered like ants and launched their attacks. The city caught in this tidal wave was already suffering damage. The sturdy city walls were on the verge of collapse. They were already crumbling. Eliza, the main force on the battlefield, gripped her long sword as she watched the giant insects surge like a tide beneath the city wall. She intended to kill. Whenever a giant insect climbed up the city wall, she would flit past and appear in front of it. Her body burst with power, and her sword ignited. The giant insect was torn apart. Her figure was as swift as lightning, moving through the fiercest part of the battlefield. However, her heroic fight made no difference against such great numbers. Even if she swung her sword with all her might, the soldiers fighting alongside her on the city wall kept falling under the onslaught of the giant insects. There was no time to mourn. They could only grip their swords tightly and get ready for the next attack. As the number of casualties in the army increased, the defense line became thinner. The city would soon collapse. Chapter 497, Is Su Yuan worth believing in? Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Entos Fantasy Translation. Eliza was forced to fight in one place. The city walls were about to collapse. Just then, something reddish appeared in the thick, dark clouds in the sky. That reddish hue spread rapidly like ink dropped in clear water. It enveloped heaven and earth. The giant insects suddenly became restless and agitated when RHE reddish light touched them. They retreated like a tide. n/o/vel/b/in.c//om. The ferocious creatures disappeared without a trace and left behind only corpses in front of the city walls. Eliza was soaked in blood from head to toe. She looked up and saw her eyes reflected in the crimson moon. The clouds that covered the sky now seemed to have parted. The blood moon glowed brightly amid the dark clouds. The inner turmoil brewing in her heart calmed a little at the sight of it. She knew that the Succubus clan had once again survived a calamity. Eliza, are you all right? A weary voice interrupted Eliza's thought. The warrior, drenched in blood, leaned against the city wall and used her sword to support herself. I'm fine, Chief Morgana. Eliza forced out a smile. However, she couldn't hide the weariness in her voice. That's good. Chief Morgana fell silent for a moment. Her face darkened as she looked toward the city walls. The ferocious monsters had already disappeared without a trace, but this was even more terrifying. When the crimson moon receded, they would return even stronger than before. Morgana found it hard to breathe. At first, they believed that the giant insects were hiding out of fear. But after a while, they realized that the giant insects had stopped to absorb power and heal themselves. They came back even stronger. Eliza, it seems we have no hope left. She had spent every day at war. Only fewer than 2,000 of her clansmen remained by her side. The power accumulated by the succubus clan over countless years was depleted. Chief Morgana, we haven't lost yet. His Majesty Su Yuan will definitely come to help us. Eliza tightened her grip on the long sword in her hand and spoke with determination. This space is completely cut off from the outside world. The artifact we could use to transmit messages stopped working a week ago, said a frustrated voice before Chief Morgana could respond. The chaotic spatial forces have blocked everything. No one can pass through. Eliza, stop dreaming and accept reality? The succubus clan has no one to rely on but themselves? Chief Morgana didn't protest. Eliza turned to see a female warrior beside her. The warrior's leather armor was torn in places. Her body was covered in wounds and bruises. However, her gaze was resolute. Molly, one heard the message with my own ears. Lord Su Yuan will be here, said Eliza in determination as she gazed at Molly. Don't you know how powerful this distorted space is? Even transcendent beings cannot escape. Molly's voice was full of frustration and anger. Even if someone had immense power, could they tear open the space? Even if the dark demon dragon comes here, what can it do? The god of light is keeping an eye on us. Molly's voice was filled with despair as she turned away. Even the powerful dark Valkyrie had been pulled into the void. There was no time for reinforcements. The giant insects might destroy the city in their next attack. The enemy was not just the giant insects but also the god of light who hid in the darkness at this time. He was a god. The furious warrior refused to cry, but her eyes were red. What kind of situation would make such a ferocious warrior so helpless? She helplessly watched the near extinction of her own race without a shred of hope for escape. They were all filled with despair at what was coming. Perhaps this is the end of the succubus clan. Chief Morgana slowly closed her eyes. Fellow clansmen, we still have time. Tomorrow is the enemy's final assault. With a solemn expression, she turned and looked at the warriors on the city walls. She felt conflicted as she gazed at RHE fierce warriors, who still looked determined to fight. Since there is no choice, let us die together. The succubus clan may be destroyed, but our willpower will remain alive. We will fight. Let the enemy's blood accompany our eternal slumber. The warriors raised their weapons and roared in agreement. Death could not extinguish their spirits. Eliza gripped her longsword tightly till her knuckles went white. She didn't fear death. She would fight to the death for her clansmen. She took a deep breath and steadied herself. It was not yet time to face death. Her mission was not yet complete. Lord Su Yuan had told her to wait for his arrival. The clan hadn't seen the fall of RHE God of Light yet. How could they perish? The warrior, Molly, was proud. Not many people were able to earn her respect. Eliza had surpassed her in strength and, thus, gained her admiration. From then on, she became Molly's closest companion. Molly had never expected Eliza to submit to another lord. It was reasonable that Eliza worked for the human lord because she was recruited. However, how could he totally submit and have complete faith in them? It was difficult for Molly to accept. Moreover, Eliza's reverence toward the initial hero of the human lord made Molly uneasy. How could a mere dark demon dragon be compared to a god? Although Eliza praised the lord and her hero for their glorious deeds, Molly felt like they were more of a brag than the truth. Eliza had heard of them from others, after all. It wasn't like she had seen it all with her own eyes. Molly found the lord cunning and selfish. She found the exaggerated stories unconvincing. The lord and her dragon, who slaughtered gods and enslaved other heroes, sounded more like monsters than people to have faith in. Even if the lord truly had such abilities, she didn't believe that Eliza would willingly submit to a human just because of that. Most likely, the lord must have used other means to deceive her. What angered her was that Eliza couldn't see the truth. If Molly got a chance, she would definitely question the lord. She wanted to see why Eliza admired her so much. In this plane unknown to outsiders, the succubus clan silently licked their wounds and gazed at the crimson moon. They waited for the enemy's assault. At the same time, they were filled with doubt and anticipation as they waited for the arrival of the dark demon dragon. Chapter 498, The Final Battle. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation. The blood moon in the thick clouds illuminated the entire world. As time passed, the light emitted by the blood moon began to fade, and the dense clouds gathered around once again. The reddish light in the heavens and earth started to thin. The shattered city walls were covered with dust and rubble. There was no way to repair them at this moment. The remaining succubus warriors looked at the sky with conflicted emotions. Everyone knew that when the blood moon disappeared, the terrifying giant insects would strike again. On the city walls, the soldiers breathed raggedly as they recovered from their injuries. The wind whistled through the broken parts of the walls. No one spoke. They waited for the last red moonlight to vanish. At that moment, they would welcome their final battle in this lifetime. They were fearless. The greatest honor for a warrior was to fall in battle as they trampled on their enemy's corpse. They lamented that the succubus clan would become history. Their lineage would die. Sadness and desolation surged in their hearts. They gripped their weapons tight and waited to go out in a blaze of glory for their clan. Their gazes were fixed on the ground, which was covered with the corpses of giant insects. The red light grew dimmer. A roar sounded in the distance. The cruelty and madness within that raging voice were clear. Molly watched as the reddish moonlight in the sky gradually faded. She then turned to her companion, Eliza. The blood moon is about to wane, she said in frustration. Eliza, do you see now? We have no reinforcements. This will be our last fight. Molly's face relaxed into a sad frown. Her tone was melancholic. I really miss the past, when we used to train and spar together. We learned battle techniques without anything to worry about. Chief Morgana used to scold everyone to try harder, while she praised Eliza and Molly because they were the ones who always performed well. Eliza looked into Ailey's eyes, and her own emotions churned in her heart. Although my talent may be inferior to yours, I work harder than you, said Molly. She looked at Eliza, and her gaze softened. She just wanted Eliza to know that it was an honor to be her partner. Eliza was the most talented warrior of the Succubus clan and the inheritor of the Succubus clan's will. If possible, they would willingly send Eliza away from here so that she could keep the clan alive. Unfortunately, they had failed. If there is a next life, I hope one can be your partner again. Molly looked away. Her eyes were filled with determination. n/o/vel/b/in.c//om. Eliza's eyes turned red with unshed tears. Molly watched as the crimson glow dimmed further. Although she didn't understand why Eliza had such blind trust in that human lord, this war would not be swayed by their will. How long has it been since they left the territory? Could they really help break through this ambush? The lord's territory is far more powerful than anyone can imagine. Eliza didn't waver in her faith. She had witnessed the growth of the lord's territory. She had also witnessed Su Yuan's immense power, which made even gods kneel at his feet. Chief Morgana inhaled sharply when she heard Eliza. She had tried everything to save her clan. She had said her last piece to boost her people's morale. Even if the Lord and her hero were powerful enough to make Eliza so devoted to them, could they really help? However, considering their situation right now, what would it matter even if they arrived? The giant insects were the enemies on the surface, but the god of light hid behind darkness. He and his minions were the greatest obstacles the clan faced. It was impossible to imagine the kind of power that would be required to confront a god. Morgana, who once possessed extraordinary power, fell from the legendary level after being injured. She understood better than anyone else the kind of power that would be needed to face a legendary hero, let alone a god. While Molly and Eliza argued, the last red moonlight vanished. The blood moon was once again swallowed by the clouds in the sky. As the crimson faded, a piercing roar resounded through the world. The sound was filled with ferocity and madness. This was the final battle. Chief Morgana's gaze sharpened. Since the outcome was already apparent, the Succubus clan would go out in a blaze of glory. People, the final battle is about to begin. We shall ride to our deaths together. Her voice echoed through the sky as she looked at the surrounding warriors. The resounding and powerful words made every warrior raise their head in pride. When they looked at their chief, who was bruised and bloodied but still possessed an unwavering determination, the warriors didn't fear death anymore. The warriors of the Succubus clan would die on the battlefield. This was their path to glory. Chief Morgana didn't hesitate. She stepped away from the city walls, and the surrounding troops followed her toward the city gates. No one spoke. The rhythm of boots treading on the ground filled the air. I have built a secret chamber for our children at the back. One hope you can lead those children to safety, said Molly as she turned to Eliza. You already belong to the territory. You still have a future. We need a powerful leader to make sure the Succubus clan lives on, and no one else is as capable as you. She patted Eliza on the shoulder. Molly then turned away and merged with the army. Eliza watched her companion charge forward. She couldn't see them die. She wanted to tell them to retreat for a while and wait for reinforcements. But the Succubus clan would never retreat. Their indomitable will wouldn't allow it. After a moment of silence, as the last of the people climbed down the city walls, Eliza followed them. She did belong to the Lord's territory, but she was, first and foremost, a member of the Succubus clan. Death had never stopped the Succubus clan. It was a pity that she couldn't serve the territory any longer, but Eliza couldn't sit back while her people fought to their deaths. The walls behind them were filled with cracks, and the city gates stood wide open. The corpses in front of the city walls had been cleared after the battle. The warriors who climbed down the city walls stayed in their positions. Chief Morgana, with scars covering her face, gripped her battle sword tightly and stood at the forefront. Molly stood on her right side. Footsteps sounded from the side, and all the warriors turned to watch. Eliza stepped forward and walked to Chief Morgana's side. This is my position, she said to Molly. The warrior stared at Eliza for a moment and then smiled. She took a step back. Eliza stood on Chief Morgana's right. Eliza, Molly's gaze softened. Although Eliza had joined the despicable lord, her dearest companion remained unchanged. Chapter 499, The God of Light Wants Revenge. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation. The Succubus clan never just survived. Eliza gripped her longsword tightly in her hand. The weapon was given to her by Lord Yuan. Perhaps she was meant to be buried with it. The earth began to tremble. Those standing on the ground could clearly feel the rumble. Everyone was wide-eyed as they looked at the massive city gates. They waited for their final enemies to arrive. The ground trembled, and dust rose. Giant insects appeared on the horizon. They grew larger as they approached. The final struggle of a dying beast is the most ferocious and savage. Everyone, prepare. Chief Morgana, holding two slender war knives, looked as sharp as an eagle. Under her command, the succubus clan would face its end. The giant insects arrived within 100 meters. At a glance, the monstrous creatures seemed like small mountains. Their massive size, combined with their terrifying appearance, froze everyone with fear. Their bodies emitted a blood-red glow. It was as though red tendrils squirmed out of them. The formation of the succubus warriors remained undisturbed. Chief Morgana tightened her grip on her blades. As she watched the approaching enemy, she was about to give the order to charge. A horrifying aura surged forth. It was like a towering mountain had crashed onto the earth. A boundless storm swept through the sky. The heavens and the earth grew dim. The giant insects abruptly halted their onslaught and trembled as they prostrate on the ground. Chief Morgana was filled with confusion. In her moment of bewilderment, a giant insect emerged within her line of sight, flapping its wings frantically. It was at least 10 meters long and the source of that terrifying aura. It was the leader of the giant insects. While Chief Morgana was still in shock, a figure clad in black armor flew down from the back of the giant insect. The crimson eyes exuded both cruelty and indescribable madness. The giant insects on the ground trembled even more violently. A name flashed through Chief Morgana's mind: the God of Light? That damned false god had appeared in person at the last moment. Her gaze locked onto the figure, and her fury threatened to consume her reason. The culprit behind the end of the succubus clan? Chief Morgana burned with rage. She wanted to demand answers. Where is that damned lord? Roared the God of Light in resentment. N/O/vel/B/in.C//om. You were the bait. Why hasn't she appeared yet? Said the voice as his gaze fixed on Eliza. The God of Light's power was far beyond the imagination of a mere lord. Even if his body was destroyed, he would remain invincible. This twisted space couldn't accommodate powers beyond the extraordinary. Here, he couldn't draw upon the powers of the old. But if the Lord appeared, he would exact his revenge? Chief Morgana, trying to grasp the meaning behind his words, turned and looked at Eliza beside her. What is the God of Light talking about? Morgana understood that the God of Light was after Eliza's lord. He had used the succubus clan as bait to lure her here. Why would a god seek revenge against an ordinary lord? The shock Molly felt at that time was unparalleled compared to what Morgana felt. Her thoughts were in chaos as she looked at the God of Light. The information was almost too overwhelming for her to comprehend. The Lord had once attacked the God of Light. Everyone will burn in the flames of my revenge, said the God of Light in anger. The succubus warriors were all shocked. They didn't know a god could end up like this. Molly was stunned. She always assumed that Eliza bragged about her lord and her territory without any basis in truth. However, the God of Light was personally looking for the Lord for revenge. Molly turned to stare at Eliza. She looked conflicted. Chief Morgana let out a breath. Whatever the Lord had done was irrelevant to them right now. The Lord wasn't present, but they were. The fate of the succubus clan was already decided. The God of Light was the mastermind behind the curse on their bloodline, and their hatred for each other could never be resolved. Irrespective of the Lord getting involved, there was old enmity between the succubus clan and the God of Light. Charge. Gripping her knives tightly, Chief Morgana commanded her warriors. Her furious roar, filled with an indomitable fighting spirit, awakened everyone from their daze. They didn't care if he was a god. If a lord could defeat him, so could they. Under Chief Morgana's command, they ran through the towering city gates and broke out of the city gates. At the end of the road, the towering giant insects were their only enemies. I want them dead. The enraged God of Light glared fiercely at them. The leader of the giant insects, which was still hovering in the air, let out an ear-piercing roar. The giant insects roared and charged forward. Waves of black collided with flesh and blood. Morgana, at the forefront, erupted with immense energy, and her knives radiated a brilliant light as she swung them around. The sharp blades extended dozens of meters, and the heavily armored insects were cleaved in half. Green slime splattered everywhere. With their bodies protected by magic energy, the succubus warriors pierced through the wave of insects like blades. Although the giant insects were massive, they were torn apart like sheets of paper by these fierce warriors. Chapter 500, Mighty Six-Winged Angel. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation. The giant insects faced not just a single warrior, but the collective power of all warriors united together. Being able to withstand the relentless assault of the giant insects for such a long time, the succubus clan was definitely not a lamb or a bait waiting for slaughter. They were powerful warriors, fearless in the face of death. The battle turned fierce. The mountain-sized insects swarmed, but they were all massacred by the triangular formation of the warriors. The smell of blood mixed with the foul stench of severed limbs and entrails. D*MN crawlers. The God of Light scowled. Terrifying energy surged from his body, and a powerful aura erupted. Chief Morgana felt as if a 1,000-pound boulder was pressing on her chest, making it difficult for her to breathe. With each swing of her blade, her stamina was depleted 10 times more than before. Her warriors began to tire out. A robust and towering figure with the same insect-like head appeared by the side of the God of Light. If the God of Light gave the order, they would strike mercilessly. Chief Morgana struggled to breathe. Her last resolve was shattered. Since the God of Light had used them as bait, he definitely had more attacks up his sleeve. No one could save the succubus clan. Kill them, roared Chief Morgana. Her helplessness turned into anger. The army behind her regained their spirit and charged forward with their chief. These warriors showed no signs of fear, and their ferocious combat strength drew attention from all sides. Such fighting spirit was the epitome of elite forces. Unfortunately, the enemy was too powerful. After being enhanced by the blood moon, the advantage in strength the insects gained rendered the spirit of the warriors redundant. Although they were fierce and indomitable, they were on the verge of collapse. The enraged god of light didn't have much patience left. He looked at the giant insects with rage-filled eyes. His aura erupted as though it would destroy everything in its path. Feeling the fury of their master, the giant insects swooped down on the warriors. They descended like shooting stars and crashed onto the succubus clan's military formation. The earth rumbled. Spiderweb-like cracks spread on impact. The shockwave scattered the warriors around. The attack shattered the tightly knit military formation of the warriors. After stabilizing himself, the transcendent six-winged angel looked at Molly, who was closest to him. Greed flickered in his eyes, a fresh and exquisite soul. He dashed forward like lightning and reached for Molly in an instant. Molly was prepared. She swung her sword fearlessly. The collision caused sparks. Molly felt an immense force push against her, and her long sword could no longer swing forward. The six-winged angel held onto his sword, which could shatter boulders. A chill rose in her heart. The power of the six-winged angel was more terrifying than she had anticipated. Just as she was about to draw her sword, she caught a glimpse of the opponent's fist aimed at her abdomen. Molly contorted to evade the blow. The angel couldn't strike her directly, but she still felt the power explode upon her. It was like being struck by a giant hammer. She was sent flying more than 10 meters away with blood spewing from her mouth. With the seal on her bloodline still intact, the gap of power between her and the transcendent was too vast. The transcendent six-winged angel took advantage of the situation. In an instant, he appeared in front of her, and his sword slashed downward. He was too fast, and Molly couldn't dodge in time. Just as the sword was about to tear through her body, a spear blocked it. It collided with the enemy's sword. A figure overflowing with vigor and bloodlust dashed toward the transcendent six-winged angel. The sword swung, and the void shattered. The combination of immense and ferocious strength, along with exceptional combat skills, left the transcendent six-winged angel momentarily flustered. After being forced to retreat more than 10 meters, the transcendent six-winged angel finally caught his breath. The two opponents were locked in combat. They were so fast that their movements were a blur. Sparks flew, and metal rang against metal. Eliza. Molly only just recognized the darting figure. Eliza fearlessly confronted the transcendent six-winged angel with her spear. The fight shocked Molly. A scream came from behind, and Molly instinctively turned to look. She saw another transcendent six-winged angel already infiltrating the crowd, and no one could stop him. Raging fury ignited within Molly, and she rose to her feet. She gripped her longsword tightly as she charged forward. She wasn't scared. When facing death, no warrior should be underestimated. Chief Morgana charged forward as she led the fearless warriors of the succubus clan and forcibly blocked the path of the six-winged angel. The giant insects around them did not give up. Instead, they became even more frenzied due to the bloodshed. These grotesque creatures became the messengers of death after the military formation collapsed. The warriors of the succubus clan still didn't retreat. However, the gap in power was too great. Under the onslaught of enemies that were dozens of times their number and size, the casualties kept increasing. The situation was no longer under their control. Molly looked on in despair as the transcendent six-winged angels wantonly slaughtered her fellow clan members. Even though she already knew the outcome, she couldn't help feeling heartbroken. She had never hated her own weakness as much as she did now. A figure fell before her. Molly saw Eliza bloodied and bruised on the ground. Eliza struggled to rise from the ground and charged toward the six-winged angel once again. She was even more ferocious and agile than before. She faced death as though she was returning home. Molly's eyes turned red with emotion. Although Eliza was formidable, she faced the transcendent six-winged angel purely with her willpower. No matter how hard Eliza tried, she appeared so powerless in the face of absolute power. The situation was predictable. Under the attack led by the transcendent six-winged angel, the power of the succubus clan was quickly diminished. From his vantage point, the god of light watched in satisfaction. The insignificant insects deserved to die. The succubus clan was left with less than 300 warriors, and they were all exhausted and injured. Chief Morgana vomited blood and collapsed on the ground. She couldn't muster the energy to stand up again. Her eyes filled with sorrow as she looked at her clan members, who were still fighting and being slaughtered. The tear in her arm prevented her from even gripping her knives properly. The excessive blood loss dulled her senses. Eliza struggled to fight, but no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't do it. Chief Morgana saw Eliza. She seemed to want to say something but couldn't utter a word. N/O/vel/B/in.C//om. When the six-winged angel approached them, Chief Morgana, whose thoughts had already become sluggish, slowly closed her eyes.